Under the pouring rain, a group of swordsmen defend a carriage against an onslaught of enemies that arrive in relentless growing waves. The attackers desperately try to reach the carriage but are repeatedly thrown back by the defenders, sustaining heavy casualties. The attack makes no sense, as these are the forces of their most recent ally, but protecting the passengers inside the carriage is their absolute priority. The leader of the swordsmen urges his men to hold the line as long as possible, assuring them that reinforcements are on the way. The leader of the attackers laughs in his face as he tosses to the ground the severed heads of the reinforcements they were waiting for, driving the defenders to utter despair. The mastermind behind the assault is none other than Dam, the leader of the Murim alliance, the premier sword that pierces the heavens. Dam is secretly surprised by the sheer power of the Ice Pavilion members. Still, he warns them that their end is inevitable. The swordsman commander laughs right back at his overconfidence, scoffing that if Dam had faced their true master, the story would have ended very differently. The Alliance soldiers feel insulted by the way their lord is addressed and prepare to cut the commander down, but a voice commands them to hold. A young woman steps out of the carriage, asking for a moment to speak. It is Hwaryong. Upon seeing her, the Alliance leader orders his troops to stand down and let her approach. As Hwaryong begins to speak, Dam demands to know why she fled from home to consort with people of such low birth. Nevertheless, he offers to forgive all her transgressions if she returns home with him. Is her father. The young woman begs for mercy for those who protected her, but reading the cold refusal in her father's eyes, she disowns him and resolves to forge her own path. Seeing her mind is made up, Dam draws his blade and, before the guards can move to protect her, mercilessly cuts her down, renouncing his daughter on the spot. He then commands his forces to annihilate the remaining members of the Ice Pavilion immediately, sparking a brutal fight to the death. As Hwaryong takes her final breath, news of the tragic events reaches Seol, the master of the North Sea Ice Palace. A delegation from the Ice Pavilion, led by Beck, had gone to finalize negotiations with the Martial Alliance. However, they were ambushed on their return journey by the Murim Alliance and completely wiped out, including young Hwaryong. The news triggers a furious outburst from the master. Swearing vengeance against the Alliance, he vows to annihilate every single perpetrator and wipe them off the face of the earth. He then orders his vassals to prepare for a march on the Central Plains. Sometime later, on a battlefield swept by a raging blizzard, Dam stands battered and bleeding in the ruins of his army. His forces have been completely dead, and his energy is fading fast, an ominous sign of the end. Standing before him is Seol, approaching with a face etched with pure fury. When Seol demands to know why he murdered Hwaryong, Dam laughs in his face and explains that the alternative was letting her stay with him, which was something he could never allow. Gathering his internal energy, Seol prepares for the final strike. As Dam mocks the cruel irony of Seol conquering all of Yeongnam yet losing the one thing he desired most, a devastating beam of energy pierces his chest, life. In his final moments, the Alliance leader flashes back to his daughter's childhood, wondering over and over why she betrayed her own bloodline to choose a barbarian like Seol. With the death of their leader, the bloody 6-year war finally came to an end. Thus, Seol became the sole absolute sovereign of the Central Plains. Yet this total victory brought him none of the peace he craved. Back in his private quarters, Seol stares sorrowfully at a flower, remembering the beautiful day it first bloomed. He recalls a bright morning when Hwaryong had rushed over to him, absolutely glowing with excitement, to show him the blooming lotus of true love. It was a legendary flower that only blossomed when two souls shared genuine, reciprocal love. Just seeing the radiant smile on Hwaryong's face made keeping the flower alive worth any effort. In memory of his lost love, the master resolves to plant an entire garden of these lotuses as a tribute to the bond they shared, an affection Seol can never forget. Suddenly, right before his eyes, the withered plant bursts into bloom once more. Stunned, he calls for his lieutenant Mugyong, ordering him to investigate how such an impossible event could happen. A couple of days later, the Manhwa, scholars renowned for knowing all the secrets of the world, are summoned to the North Sea Ice Palace. Without a word of explanation, a guiding voice directs them outside. As the massive doors swing open, a breathtaking sight awaits. An entire garden filled with fully bloomed lotuses of true love against all physical laws. While they stand there spellbound, Seol approaches and calmly asks if they enjoy the view. Though awestruck, the Manhwa asks for the stranger's identity. When he reveals himself as Seol, they drop to their knees, terrified and amazed to be standing before the absolute ruler of the Central Plains. Before they can recover, the master explains that the garden is the manifestation of his love for Hwaryong, who died long ago. The exact moment she perished, the flower had died too. Yet, inexplicably, it came back to life just a few days prior. The scholars are left completely dumbfounded by the revelation, as it is a phenomenon they have never encountered in all their studies. However, the eldest scholar hazards a guess. When questioned by the master, he explains that it could be a rare case of soul reincarnation, where a spirit is reborn into a brand new body. In other words, the Ice Palace master's true love has likely been reincarnated somewhere out in the world. Skeptical, the master asks if such a thing is truly possible. The old sage responds that it is the only logical explanation available. The profound revelation leaves Seol deep in thought, as a glimmer of hope finally kindles to end his crushing loneliness. Through sheer blood and effort, he succeeded in unifying the Central Plains under a single rule, yet his soul remains completely empty. Only Hwaryong can heal this void. Her absence has robbed his life of all purpose. When the master demands to know how to locate her, the old man explains that whenever the two fated lovers cross paths in the same area, the lotus will glow with resplendent light. This triggers a memory for Seol, who distinctly remembers the flower emitting a mystical sparkle when it was held in his beloved's hands. The elder goes on to advise that the most practical way to carry the flower is to infuse it into a portable jewelry piece. Taking the advice, the master commands them to complete the artifact within 10 days. He promises that if they succeed, every single one of them will be lavishly rewarded with piles of gold. He then dismisses them as hope surges in his chest once more. Sometime later, a ship cuts through open waters. Inside, Master Seol crosses out the latest destination on his map. Only Hainan remains in a grueling search that has already consumed 3 years and 5 months. Every other location across the Central Plains has yielded absolutely nothing. Throughout this arduous journey, the master has never neglected his cultivation, successfully breaking through from the transformation realm to the deep realm, and enduring the agony of complete physical metamorphosis twice. As he presses on, memories continue to haunt him. He vividly remembers the last time he saw Hwaryong, back when they were discussing her departure to the Central Plains to meet her father, hoping to make him understand Seol's honorable intentions. Even though Seol suspected the meeting was a blatant trap designed to eliminate him, Hwaryong insisted on giving her father the benefit of the doubt so fiercely that the master ultimately relented and allowed her to go. However, he strictly warned her to flee at the first sign of trouble, a condition she readily accepted. Before parting, Hwaryong handed him a mystical necklace passed down from her mother, which possessed the unique trait of always returning to its rightful owner. With it in his hands, Seol would be able to locate her anywhere in the world. These thoughts crash over him, bringing a wave of bitter remorse for not being firmer and stopping her from attending that fatal meeting. Suddenly, a violent lurch of the vessel alerts him to an oncoming storm. On deck, the crew and passengers are thrown into utter chaos as the sheer ferocity of the tempest threatens to capsize the vessel. Peering out, the master senses a bizarre, unnatural aura within the gale as monstrous waves try to drag the ship into the abyss. Using his internal ki, he erects a protective barrier around himself and employs the Miljan hammer technique to anchor his feet to the deck, braving the torrential downpour. Unfortunately, the other passengers are not so fortunate and are helplessly swept overboard into the churning sea. Harnessing his telekinetic techniques, Master Seol hurls wooden planks to those struggling in the water to serve as makeshift lifesavers. Yet the ocean's fury only intensifies, and it becomes clear the ship won't hold out much longer. Left with no choice, the master unleashes his full power. Invoking his freezing gale technique, he attempts to solidify the raging waves. At that exact moment, however, the lotus necklace flashes brilliantly, and a blinding pillar of light shoots down from the heavens, paralyzing him. He is pulled under by a massive wave just as the tempest vanishes into thin air as if by magic. When he regains consciousness, Seol realizes he is no longer at sea. Before he can make sense of his surroundings, a frantic scream from nearby puts him on high alert. Just outside, a swarm of monstrous insects is mercilessly slaughtering a traveling caravan, whose members are completely defenseless. Two young women are cornered by the vile creatures while the surviving merchants desperately try to rescue them. Suddenly, a brilliant flash erupts from one of the supply wagons, startling everyone. As the light fades, Seol emerges, calmly taking in the bizarre situation. He finds himself surrounded by foreigners who are under siege by bugs of titanic proportions. As the giant swarm ravages the caravan, Seol is left utterly baffled as to how such monsters could exist within the Central Plains. When an insect lunges at him, he unleashes his divine white ice palm, obliterating it instantly to the absolute shock of the onlookers. Insulted that a mere bug would dare strike a master like him, Seol goes on the offensive, single-handedly wiping out the entire plague threatening the caravan. The travelers watch in awe as this mysterious stranger casually decimates the monsters that nearly killed them. However, when they step forward to offer their thanks, they speak in a bizarre foreign tongue. The Ice Master can barely deduce their meaning through their frantic hand gestures and body language. Hoping to clarify the situation, he informs them that he doesn't know their language and asks if anyone speaks the dialect of the Central Plains. His words leave the crowd completely bewildered as they find his tongue just as alien as he finds theirs. An old man confers with the group and hands a strange ring. Upon activating its language interpretation spell, Seol can suddenly understand their speech perfectly, which takes him completely by surprise. The old man gently reassures him and introduces himself as Edmund, the leader of the Royal Merchant Association. After expressing his profound gratitude for the rescue, he asks the peculiar magic swordsman for his name. Confused by the term, the protagonist replies that he has no idea what a magic swordsman is, introducing himself simply as Seol. Noticing his genuine ignorance, Edmund explains that a magic swordsman is an elite who wields both blade and sorcery simultaneously, just as Seol did. When Seol frowns and asks what magical sorcery even means, the old merchant is considering Seol's icy palm technique perfectly mirrored a high-tier ice spell. Seol presses for answers while the old man hesitates, trying to find the words to explain things to this strange warrior. Mistaking his silence for defiance, Seol grows irritated and flares his frost energy threateningly, making Edmund panic and think he is dealing with a highly unstable, dangerous lunatic. Carefully keeping his tone placating, Edmund begs Seol for patience as he breaks down the reality of their situation. They spend the rest of the day talking, and by nightfall Seol has a rudimentary grasp of his bizarre new reality. When Edmund asks what on earth the Central Plains means, Seol looks at him like he's crazy and asserts that it's the very land they are standing on. Edmund shakes his head and informs him that this isn't the Central Plains at all, but rather a frontier forest leading straight to Baran, the capital of the Drake Kingdom. Seol tries to dominate the conversation, stubbornly insisting that this is the Central Plains and scoffing that the old merchant must be going senile. Edmund retorts that he is perfectly lucid and that the Central Plains simply do not exist here. Refusing to back down, the protagonist decides to settle the argument by calling out a young man hiding behind a nearby tree. Caught in the act, the boy nervously walks over to the campfire, and Edmund recognizes him as Leo, one of his caravan guards. Seol demands a direct answer from him, asking whether this land is the Central Plains or the Drake Kingdom. However, the boy just stares blankly without uttering a word, which irritates Seol. Edmund quickly reminds him that nobody can understand his raw speech without the ring, prompting Seol to slip the artifact back on and trigger the interpretation spell. When the protagonist places it on his finger and activates it, a spell allows him to understand the language of all the people around him. So he goes straight to the young man, asks his name, and when he gets a reply, he repeats the previous question. Are you in the Central Plains or Drake? The boy looks entirely blank at the mention of the Central Plains, stammering that they are currently in the woods outside Baran, the capital of the Drake Kingdom. The answer irritates Seol, who snaps at the youth, asking if he has lost his mind. When he glares at Edmund demanding to know why the boy is lying, the old man softly replies that anyone else in this world would give him the exact same answer. Hearing the genuine terror and honesty in his voice, the grim truth finally sinks in for Seol. This is absolutely not the Central Plains. The last thing he remembers is battling an unnatural storm on the high seas, and the next moment he woke up near their carriage. It means he was subjected to some massive teleportation. While Seol reels from the shock of being dropped into the Drake Kingdom, a sudden violent spasm in his energy core forces him to his knees. While the panicked merchants rush over to see what's wrong, Seol senses an entirely alien energy circulating within his body, foreboding immense complications. He resolves to trace the disturbance back to its source immediately. He bolts from the camp at blinding speed, tracking the volatile fluctuations. A sharp pain shoots through his chest again, but he is astonished to discover that the internal energy stored within his upper dantian has inexplicably doubled. Meanwhile, a singular question plagues his mind. How on earth did he end up here? Rather than plotting a return to the Central Plains, his absolute priority shifts to finding Hwaryong as fast as possible. This thought triggers the memory of the brilliant flash emitted by the necklace right before the ship went down. It was a fated heirloom given to him by Hwaryong, possessing the mystical trait of guiding its holder back to its original giver. This leads him to a thrilling conclusion. If he was forcefully teleported across dimensions to this specific realm, it must mean Hwaryong is somewhere within the Drake Kingdom. Back at the camp, old Edmund paces around, wondering where the magic swordsman vanished to, when Seol suddenly materializes out of thin air, politely apologizing for his sudden departure and requesting a word. The drastic shift in his demeanor catches the old man off guard, but he readily offers to clarify whatever he can. When Seol asks for final verification regarding their physical location, Edmund reassures him that they are indeed on the outskirts of the royal capital. As the protagonist inquires further about the geography, another youth joins the campfire, chuckling at Seol's confusion. He jokes that Seol must have spent way too much time training in isolation up in the mountains, to the point where his brain is completely fried. Gladly adopting the convenient cover story, Seol nods and admits he is completely out of touch with the world. Seizing the opportunity, the boy eagerly offers to teach him the basics of survival in society, a proposal Seol gladly accepts. He politely asks the youth for his name, and the boy introduces himself as Luffy. Watching them converse, Edmund remains highly intrigued. The mysterious swordsman's sudden warmth and charm stand in stark contrast to his earlier terrifying behavior. Throughout the night, young Luffy educates him on geography, regional customs, local dialects, and societal quirks. It acts as a profound eye-opener for the protagonist, cementing the fact that he hasn't just traveled to a distant country, he is in an entirely different world. The geography of this world is completely alien, and the script bears no resemblance to that of the Central Plains. Furthermore, it is inhabited by fantasy races like elves, dwarves, and beastmen. Yet among all these new species, none match the sheer power of dragons, monstrous winged reptiles of legend. Then there is the matter of teleportation magic. When asked about it, Luffy explains that it is a high-level spell utilized by 5-ring mages to traverse vast distances instantaneously, with the caster's proficiency dictating how far they can jump. The revelation leaves Seal utterly amazed by the wonders of this new realm. Looking up at the night sky, his breath hitches as he notices 3 distinct moons shining down, rather than the single moon of his homeland. This world is undeniably distinct from the Central Plains. It must have been Hwaryong's fated call that pulled him across dimensions. A sudden, blood-curdling shriek from the camp shatters his focus. Rushing back, he finds a harrowing scene. A young woman holding a jagged knife is threatening to end her own life and that of a little girl, while the frantic merchants try to talk her down. Approaching the crowd, he overhears the merchants pleading to take them to a church healer, but the woman refuses, crying out that the treatment costs far too much. It turns out that both she and the little girl have been infected with parasite eggs nestled dangerously close to their hearts. Once they hatch, they will suffer an excruciatingly painful death. To escape that horrific fate, she chose to end their lives while they were still in their right minds. Assessing the situation instantly, Seal commands the woman to freeze, confidently offering to purge the parasites on the spot. Everyone gasps in shock. Nobody had even noticed his arrival, let alone expected someone to offer an immediate cure in the middle of a forest. When asked what high-tier magic he plans to use, Seal simply replies that he doesn't know a thing about sorcery. He is merely applying internal healing techniques from his homeland. Hearing this, a desperate Edmund offers to give Seal anything he desires if he can just save the 2 girls. Seal tells him to hold his gold, as he intends to save them regardless. The crowd quickly steps back to grant him space. He instructs the 2 girls to sit cross-legged on the ground and gently projects his inner chi into their bodies, meticulously scanning for the exact location of the parasitic eggs until he locks onto them. Carefully monitoring their vital signs, Seal confirms the parasites haven't hatched yet. Amplifying his refined yang energy, he incinerates the eggs inside their bodies, completely vaporizing the threat without harming a single internal organ. Standing up, he calmly announces that the parasites are gone and they are out of danger. When pressed by the stunned onlookers, the protagonist confirms that the eradication was absolute and that they won't suffer any side effects. Overwhelmed with relief, the entire caravan showers Sifil gratitude for performing what seems like a miracle. Seal casually brushes off their praise and retires to his tent for the night, letting the memory of Hwaryong fuel his determination to find her. The next morning, the caravan packs up and resumes its journey toward the capital. As they march, the midday heat grows oppressive under a blistering sun. Luffy passes his canteen to the protagonist, but when Seal takes a sip, he finds the water lukewarm and unrefreshing. Channeling a fraction of his 9 heavens ice chi, he instantly chills it to ice-cold perfection. When he hands it back, Luffy yelps in surprise, noticing frost forming on the leather casing. Seal chuckles and tells him to take a drink. Upon tasting it, Luffy looks like he's ascended to heaven. It's crisp, pure freezing water. Grinning at Seal's question, the boy immediately begs him to freeze his personal water flask too. Amused by the boy's antics, the protagonist happily obliges. Luffy has been an invaluable source of information regarding the lore and customs of this new world, so keeping the boy happy is a sound investment. Before long, Seal notices that the rest of the merchants have been watching them with envious eyes. Soon they are all crowding around, pleading for him to chill their water flasks as well. Seal muses over whether it's wise to act as a free refrigerator for the entire group. Edmund pushes through the crowd to see what's causing the delay, only to be told that the mysterious expert is handing out ice-cold water. Completely amazed, the old merchant humbly steps forward, holding out his own flask with a hopeful smile. Initially, Seal finds the request slightly annoying, but he reminds himself that these merchants are his primary gateway to understanding this new realm. Keeping them indebted and fiercely loyal is the perfect strategy to gather intelligence smoothly. Taking a sip, Edmund's eyes go wide with ecstasy. He asks Seal how on earth he synthesized such pure frost. Seal, mildly defensive, asks if there's something wrong with it. Edmund frantically shakes his head, explaining that the ice is flawless, completely devoid of the typical bitter aftertaste, which is nothing short of miraculous. Confused by the heavy emphasis on flavor, Seal casually replies that he simply froze the liquid, not understanding why they consider basic ice to be so extraordinary. Edmund explains that when local mages summon frost magic, they draw upon ambient mana. This process inherently mixes elemental impurities into the structure, ruining the taste and leaving a distinct, often unpleasant mantis signature. True flavorless, pure ice is practically impossible to manifest. Yet Seal's ice is absolute perfection, a premium commodity. This finally sheds light on why the merchants are losing their minds over a cold drink. In a rare good mood, Seal prepares to manifest another batch, but Edmund stops him, his eyes gleaming with a lucrative business proposition. A few days later, they are fully set up within the headquarters of the Royal Merchant Association, and business is absolutely booming. Endless barrels of water are hauled into the back room, where Seal effortlessly transmutes them into flawless crystal clear ice to be sold to the elite. This was the core of Edmund's desperate proposal back in the woods. He wanted to form an exclusive partnership with Seal to monopolize the luxury ice trade, using it to completely resurrect his dying merchant guild. No wonder the old man was so eager to explain its economic value. The venture seemed legitimate and free of underhanded ploys, but since Seal was providing the actual labor, he made sure to secure a fair share. Initially, he demanded a 70-30 split of the gross profits in his favor. Edmund knew a product of this caliber would sell like hotcakes, but being a seasoned merchant, he tried to haggle to cover overhead costs. He detailed the expenses of logistics, storage, and marketing, humbly asking for a reconsideration. Seal calmly adjusted the split to a final 60-40. Stunned by how smoothly the negotiation went, Edmund eagerly accepted and immediately drafted the official contract. While Seol's primary goal was merely using the guild as an information hub to map out the world, he never expected their startup to explode into a massive commercial success overnight. A sudden racket outside breaks their concentration. A frantic staff member bursts through the door, warning Edmund that a situation is developing on the street. A massive crowd has gathered in front of the store, rowdily demanding a chance to purchase the legendary pure ice. Edmund tries to establish order, but the unruly mob completely ignores him. That is, until Seal steps out. Releasing a tiny fraction of his oppressive aura, he commands the troublemakers to calm down. Much to Edmund's relief, Seal Icy warns them that anyone causing a scene will be permanently banned from the premises. Cowed by Seal's piercing glare, the crowd falls silent. Edmund seizes the moment to explain that they are currently strictly operating on a wholesale basis. Retail distribution is planned for the near future, but they cannot accommodate individual sales just yet. A few voices attempt to protest, but one look at the imposing warrior standing right behind the old merchant makes them think twice. The rowdy customers grumble and disperse, leaving behind only the wealthy representatives looking to secure bulk orders. Among them are agents from noble households and major rival merchant factions. Noticing that the protagonist looks slightly bored of the administrative work, Edmund kindly suggests he take the rest of the day off, reassuring him that the chaotic rush is taken care of. As Seal nods and heads inside, Edmund watches him go with a pang of guilt. He hadn't been entirely transparent with his new partner. His burning motivation for rebuilding the Roll Merchant Association wasn't just profit, it was vengeance. His parents and siblings had been systematically ruined and murdered by Duke Icarus, who used a proxy syndicate, the Home Merchant Association, to crush them. Edmund would not rest until Icarus was completely destroyed. Upstairs in his room, Cell lies back on his bed to unwind. With the business running smoothly and gold piling up, he notes that this is the perfect opportunity to leverage their growing network to track down any rumors regarding Hwaryong. A soft knock on the door interrupts his thoughts. It's Sabina. He invites her in, and since it's midday, she presents him with the one delicacy the master truly enjoys, a refreshing new treat she accidentally invented by blending his pure ice with condensed fruit juice. It is a sweet confection that has already taken the capital by storm. After thanking her, she leaves him to enjoy the treat. Seal polishes off the shaved ice so quickly that he's left craving another bowl. Knowing everyone downstairs is busy, he decides to walk down to the kitchen himself, but a loud commotion at the storefront immediately catches his attention. This time it seems some high and mighty nobles have decided to grace the shop with their presence. A clique of young aristocrats is attempting to use their status to bypass the queue, completely disregarding the guild's rules. They are aggressively threatening Sabina, demanding immediate VIP service and vowing to burn the store to the ground if they are slighted. Gathering her courage, the young woman firmly states that the Roll Association does not serve those who break the rules. This infuriates the lead noble, who barks at her for daring to make them stand in line like filthy commoners, claiming that breathing the same air as this rabble is already an insult. He warns her to hand over the ice cream immediately unless she has a death wish. Meanwhile, Seol quietly slips into the room, watching the unfolding drama with a cold, amused interest. Sabina holds her ground, politely repeating that the queue must be respected. Her defiance enrages the noble further, but she keeps her composure, secretly praying that the powerful master will step in if things turn violent. When she repeats that rules are rules, it proves to be the final straw. Sneering, the aristocrat draws his blade, pressing the cold steel right against her neck to force her compliance. From behind, one of his companions tells him to check his temper, reminding him that they are in public and have a reputation to maintain. The hot-headed noble grumbles but lowers his sword slightly. Another noble steps forward, his voice deceptively smooth as he states they merely want to try the dessert. However, there is a sinister hypnotic trace of mental magic in his eyes that begins to cloud Sabina's mind, paralyzing her will, until a booming voice calls her name and shatters the spell. It is old Edmund. Stepping out from the office, he loudly reminds her that their association strictly refuses service to anyone who violates their code. Sabina shakes her head, quickly apologizing for letting her guard down. The old man's raw, visible fury surprises Sue, who deduces there must be a deep, dark history between them. Shaking with anger, Edmund orders the young lords to get out of his establishment, declaring their aristocratic arrogance won't fly here. The nobles scoff, insulted that a mere merchant dares talk down to them. Edmund retorts that it's not just about the queue. He wouldn't sell them a single drop of water even if they begged. When they furiously demand why, Edmund tells them to go ask Duke Icarus themselves. He knows exactly why. Hearing his father's name, the leading noble freezes. He studies the old man's face intently, suddenly realizing he is standing right in front of a prominent survivor of the decimated Royal Merchant Association. A twisted smile spreads across the youth's face, a telltale sign of his homicidal rage. Deciding to take matters into his own hands, he sentences the old man to immediate execution for the crime of high treason against the nobility. With blinding speed, he unsheathes his sword, aiming a lethal decapitation strike at the old man's neck. Edmund closes his eyes, devastated that he failed to avenge his family. But a sudden metallic clang echoes out, stopping the blade mere inches from his throat. It is Seal. He casually blocks the bare blade with his forearm, throwing the noble back with an effortless shove. Seal sighs, thoroughly annoyed. All he wanted was another bowl of shaved ice, and now he has to clean up a mess in the lobby. Turning to the youth, Seal laments the lack of parenting among the nobility these days. He dryly notes that since they were never taught manners, he'll provide a free lesson in humility. Enraged by the mockery, the noble lunges at Seal in a frenzy. The noble unleashes a flurry of strikes, but Seal effortlessly weaves through them, mocking his sluggish form. Seal casually lectures him, stating that true strength should be balanced with reason, and if this tantrum is representative of the kingdom's elite, then the entire aristocracy is utterly pathetic. Fortunately for them, Seal adds he's feeling charitable enough today to beat some basic etiquette into them. The lecture pushes the noble over the edge, but before he can swing again, Seal counters. Flicking his fingers, he fires a condensed bolt of sword ki that pierces right through the attacker's wrist like an arrow, forcing him to drop his weapon. The young noble collapses to his knees, clutching his bleeding wrist under Seal's icy stare. His companions draw their swords, backing away, shouting empty threats to cover their absolute terror as the master steps closer. Seal ignores the lackeys, his gaze locked onto the leader who is pushing himself up, desperately trying to save face. Amusement dances in Seal's eyes as he notes this is turning out to be quite a fun show, warning the boy that they are about to test his pain tolerance. With a casual flick of his wrist, Seal swats the noble back to the floor. As the companions scramble to apply a tourniquet, the protagonist sighs, openly wondering if the kingdom's youth are truly this fragile, unable to withstand a basic tap. On second thought, Seal decides it's best not to kill them. Since he's still a stranger to this world's legal system, murdering a high-ranking noble in broad daylight might cause unnecessary bureaucratic headaches. It's time for a more domestic approach. The bleeding youth barks that he is Justin, son of the prominent Duke Icarus, swearing execution. Seeing that a flesh wound hasn't cured his arrogance, Seal spots a thick tree branch outside the door. Using his telekinetic pull, he snaps it into his hand, causing the onlookers to gasp. He coats the wooden switch with heavy sword ki, reinforcing it into an unbreakable baton. While the three young nobles cower on the floor, Seal proceeds to give them a thorough, agonizingly precise thrashing, lecturing them with every strike about accountability, humility, and the consequences of acting like spoiled brats. The discipline continues for hours. By nightfall, the three elite nobles are on their knees, sobbing, begging for mercy, and reciting the guild's rules. When they mumble their apologies too softly, Seal cracks the switch down, forcing them to scream their surrender at the top of their lungs. While Justin inwardly swears a blood oath to murder him, Seal accepts their apology and tosses the stick aside, allowing them to crawl away. The guild members bow in deep gratitude. The following morning, an imperial council takes place at the royal palace, where the high lords deliver intelligence reports to King Tomalov according to Count Slipe. The neighboring kingdom of Serbia is aggressively reclaiming lost territories, while the Hazan kingdom is focusing its efforts on developing the Saraja desert region, despite it being a notoriously lethal territory for human settlement. As Duke Icarus listens intently, the Count reveals that a legendary sword master named Ainos has recently naturalized as a Hassan citizen and is spearheading their campaign. This revelation shocks the assembly, including the king, as Ainos is a terrifying combatant, one of the 10 Grand Masters of the continent. According to reports regarding Baron Arista, whom various factions had failed to bribe, Ainos refused all gold from competing lords. Rumor dictates he has fallen madly in love with Princess Daphne, the younger sister of King Lajere of Hassan. Through this romantic entanglement, the Hassan kingdom now commands 2 Grand Swordmasters, suggesting an impending campaign of aggressive territorial expansion that threatens neighboring realms. The geopolitical shift deeply troubles the king, who asks the council for counter-strategies. Duke Icarus steps forward, smoothly recommending that the Drake kingdom preemptively expand its own borders toward the northern frontiers as their safest option. The suggestion draws gasps. The frozen north is a wasteland plagued by sub-zero temperatures and eternal blizzards. Launching a campaign there would require absolute prolonged military devotion, effectively removing whoever commands it from the political power plays of the capital, a sacrifice no corrupt noble is willing to make. A royal attendant whispers an urgent message to the king, prompts him to adjourn the assembly. As the nobles filter out, a heavy silence remains regarding whatever scheme Duke Icarus is secretly orchestrating. Back in his private chambers, the king discusses the matter with his trusted advisor, Cotton. A gut feeling tells him that Duke Icarus is plotting to isolate another political rival from the court, and he may well succeed just as he has in the past. Cotton sighs, blaming his own lack of influence for failing to check the Duke, but the king cuts him off gently, reminding him that he is his sole confidant and shouldn't talk so disparagingly of himself. Shifting gears, the monarch inquires about a fascinating rumor regarding a guild selling unique ice treats. Cotton smiles and confirms it's the signature shaved ice from the revived Roll Association. He explains that the product lacks any mana impurities, making it taste incredibly crisp and refreshing. Intrigued, the king asks when they operate. Cotton notes they cater to high volume later in the day, adding that he has planned an incognito evening excursion to investigate the shop personally, offering the king a chance to tag along safely. The king chuckles, thanking him for the timely distraction, to which Cotton bows, stating it is his honor to serve. Night falls and Seal is back in his quarters, lounging comfortably while savoring another large bowl of the delicious shaved ice. Suddenly, the youth faction of the guild crowds into his room, dropping to their knees to beg him to teach them his magic. The protagonist blink in surprise. Sabina apologizes for the intrusion, knowing he doesn't use standard spell circles, but stresses they are desperate to train under him regardless of the hardship. Annie steps forward, explaining that with their rapid growth, greater dangers will inevitably come, and they must be strong enough to protect the association. Seal admires their resolve but reminds them flatly that he doesn't know a thing about Western sorcery. Luffy chimes in, correcting the others by stating the master uses an exotic martial art called the Divine White Ice Palm. Leon immediately shifts gears, begging for martial arts lessons instead. The sudden synchronized plea from all four youths leaves the protagonist momentarily taken aback. Staring at them, Seal catches the burning determination in their eyes. It strikes a chord deep within him, reminding him of his own childhood when he stood before his master, stubborn and unyielding, demanding to be taught the way of the blade. The issue is that his sole focus right now is tracking down Hwaryong, not playing instructor. Yet, these kids only want to defend their family, and they have been incredibly helpful in navigating this foreign world. After a brief calculation, he tells them he needs the night to consider it, ordering them to return the next evening for his decision. Overjoyed, the ecstatic kids misinterpret this as a guaranteed approval for their first class. They bow furiously and rush out to prepare, leaving the protagonist completely speechless at their runaway imagination. Chuckling, he takes his dessert and steps onto the balcony to enjoy the crisp night breeze, when the distinct, sharp ringing of clashing steel echoes from the woods. Deep in the forest, a fierce skirmish is underway. An elite squad of Black Ops assassins has ambushed King Tomalov during his incognito excursion to the Roll Association. The battle is heavily stacked against them. The Royal Guard is completely outnumbered, and Cotton's only hope is to buy enough time for the palace vanguard to arrive. A sudden crackle behind him alerts him to a lethal backstab. A rogue war mage has manifested on the flank, firing a massive blast of flame directly at him. With an acrobatic maneuver, Cotton barely evades the blast, though it leaves him scorched and battered under the king's horrified gaze. Though the explosion severely burns his left arm, leaving it useless and bleeding, Cotton refuses to yield. Barking commands, he tightens the defensive formation around the king, gritting his teeth as the assassins close in for the kill. The killers smirk, casually placing bets on who will claim the king's head. Determined to shield his sovereign to his last breath, Cotton launches himself into the enemy ranks, forcing the attackers back through sheer desperation. The situation turns critical. In the distance, Cotton spots the war mage chanting a high-tier spell. He screams a warning to the remaining bodyguard to brace themselves, but the spell is already fully formed and primed to detonate. Suddenly, a piercing arc of ice energy hits the war mage from behind, dropping him instantly to the floor. The combatants freeze, scanning the canopy until they spot a figure sitting on a branch smiling amusedly. Discovered, Seal drops from the tree, landing effortlessly right in the center of the ambush squad with terrifying speed. The enemy commander tries to process the sudden casualty, but the protagonist merely sighs, telling them to hurry up and die before the shaved ice back in his room melts away completely. The assassins shift their formation to surround Seal. Their primary mission is eliminating the king, and this civilian is a dangerous variable. The captain barks at his squad to keep pressure on the royal guard while he personally takes care of the intruder. The captain lunges, but Seal effortlessly parries the strike, disarms him with a flick of his wrist and tosses the weapon back, mockingly gesturing for him to try harder. Enraged by the blatant disrespect, the captain attacks with frantic power. Seal channels his cold internal energy into his own blade, turning it into a frost-rhymed sword, effortlessly matching the enemy blow for blow. Seal casually taunts the commander to put his back into it, effortlessly evading every single slash. The captain completely loses his composure as his offense is systematically dismantled, unable to land even a scratch against the vastly superior master. Watching the magnificent display, King Tomalov is completely spellbound. Cotton, still shielding his liege, stares open-mouthed. In Seal's exotic martial style, the king recognizes a potential salvation for his kingdom's political plight. As the assassins hesitate, horrified by Seol driving Captain Murim into a corner, the protagonist glares at them. He complains that their little ambush forced him to leave his fresh-shaved ice out, meaning it's ruined by now. He declares they will experience the full weight of his grudge over a wasted dessert, offering them exactly 3 seconds to run before he exterminates them. Dismissing his threats as mad rambling and relying on their sheer numbers, the remaining killers swarm Seol to avenge their falling captain. The moment they enter his strike zone, Seol detonates a shockwave of ice ki spin his blade in a single flawless arc that slaughters the squad instantly. Before the stunned king and Cotton can even utter a word of thanks, Seol vanishes into the dark forest as quickly as he arrived. The king announces to Cotton that this young man is the future of the kingdom, and Cotton vows to find him no matter where he is. Lord Edmund is surprised to hear the news. The young people of the association are studying magic. He can't comprehend it. One does not simply learn high-level martial arts or magic without an academy framework. When staff confirm that Seol is personally supervising them, Edmund is stunned. While the rest of the adult workers are dying for a lesson, the master remains fiercely exclusive to those four. Musing over it, Edmund realizes it's an intelligent strategy. Young minds are far more receptive to exotic concepts than rigid adults. Intrigued, he inquires where the training grounds are, a quiet thrill building in his chest as he senses his hour of revenge against House Icarus drawing closer. When Edmund brings it up later, Seol scoffs at the exaggeration. Edmund chuckles, stating the cat is out of the bag. When Seol feigns ignorance, the old man smiles and says the entire staff is whispering about the magic swordsman building a secret vanguard out of the kids. This finally explains why the guild adults have been staring at him with such intense reverence lately. Edmund expresses his profound emotional gratitude, but their conversation is cut short when a guard rushes in, announcing that a royal courier has arrived demanding an audience with Seol. The official practically throws himself at Seol's feet, weeping and begging him to accept a royal summons. Seol, completely unbothered, tells him to get out. The desperate courier clings to his boot, crying out that if the master refuses again, the king will literally march out of the palace to find him personally. Seol remains deeply cynical, refusing to trust a random royal lackey. Edmund watches with a racing heart, realizing the majesty in question is indeed the ruler of the realm. The courier keeps wailing until Seol unleashes a flash of cold intent, commanding him to vanish from his sight. The persistent royal attention leaves the swordsman contemplative. He wonders if fate is utilizing the monarchy to guide him closer to Hwaryong, or if he's simply dealing with the annoying whim of a self-important king. His mind wanders back to his days in the Ice Palace, recalling a heated debate where his chief lieutenant begged him to adopt a diplomatic approach with the Central Plains lords, while Seol had simply wanted to crush them into submission. The lieutenant had urged him to use statesmanship, proving the North Sea Ice Palace wasn't just an empire of uncultured brutes. Of course, the subtext was clear. If diplomacy failed, they could always unleash the absolute destruction of their blizzard army. Those calculated arguments had ultimately won Seol over, though he had strictly warned that if the Central Plains rulers showed any disrespect, he would flatten their kingdoms without hesitation. It was during those very diplomatic summits that he crossed paths with Hwaryong. Her celestial beauty, radiant smile, and fierce warmth instantly told him he had found his fated soulmate. It was the best period of his life. Grounding himself in her memory, Seol clears his head, refusing to let local politics distract him. Leaving the kids to resume their breathing exercises in the woods, he resolves to tread carefully. Meanwhile, at the royal palace, the tearful messenger kneels before King Tomalov, stammering another apology for failing to secure the mysterious savior's presence. The king sighs, wondering if it's worth chasing such an eccentric, seemingly arrogant expert. The courier offers to go back and camp outside the shop, but the monarch waves him off, tired of getting identical empty-handed results. A firm knock on the door signals the arrival of Princess Achilda. Dismissing the courier, the king brightens up to greet his daughter. Stepping inside, the sharp-witted princess notes the terrified, pale look on the departing chamberlain's face, immediately asking what caused such drama. The king breaks down the details of his secret excursion. The moment he mentions the coordinated assassination ambush, the princess turns pale with panic, frantically checking her father for any hidden injuries. He quickly reassures her, prompting her to ask why this legendary savior keeps snubbing their royal invitations. The king admits he's completely baffled by the young man's lack of interest in royal favor. Achilde is fascinated. Her father rarely speaks of anyone with such profound, unadulterated respect. The king further reveals a shocking detail. The entire high society phenomenon surrounding the Royal Association's pure entirely tied creation of this same magic swordsman. Achilde, who is a massive fan of the fruit-shaved ice, can't believe the culinary genius behind her favorite treat is the very same rogue powerhouse who rescued her father. She recalls the absolute bliss of her first bite, amazed that such a refined creator could be so brazenly rude to the crown. Driven by intense curiosity, she decides that if the palace couriers are too incompetent to bring him in, she will slide out incognito to meet this mystery Sharon herself. Meanwhile, back at the training glade, Seol is genuinely impressed. It has only been 15 days, yet the 4 kids have already learned to manifest raw internal ki. He credits this to the insanely rich ambient energy of this world. As he prepares the next lesson, the bushes rustle, and the royal chamberlain steps out again, this time accompanied by a mysterious hooded figure. Seol frowns, demanding to know why they've returned. Suddenly, the faded lotus necklace against his chest pulses with a blinding, warm light. Right as he gasps, the hooded figure pulls back her cloak, revealing none other than Princess Akilde of the Drake Kingdom. Seol freezes instantly, completely struck dumb. Staring back at him is the flawless, undeniable mirror image of his lost love, Hwaryong, reincarnated into this fantasy world. They relocate to the association's parlor over hot tea. Akilde immediately gets down to business, crossly lecturing the magic swordsman for his utter lack of manners in repeatedly dodging her father's royal summons after saving his life. As her lips move, Seol doesn't hear a word. He is entirely captivated, tracing every facial feature and gesture, comparing them to his memories. Every micro-expression cements the absolute truth she is his Hwaryong. Watching everything in silence, the princess demands an answer to her requests from the protagonist, and he asks her what is the best time to attend her meeting with the king. This sudden reply leaves the princess speechless, who came with the intention of using all her power of persuasion to get this stranger to come to her father's call. Far from being a stubborn recluse, the swordsman is suddenly the model of cooperation. Flustered, Akilde provides the scheduling details, which he accepts with a gentle nod. Gathering her dignity, the princess bids him farewell and returns to the palace, completely bewildered. Left alone, Seol celebrates his miraculous fortune in locating his soulmate so quickly. However, reality hits him. She is the crown princess, the highest status in the realm. Courting her won't be as simple as in his previous life. He can't exactly barge into a royal court and demand her hand in marriage. A single political misstep could alienate her forever. He needs an expert strategist for high society maneuvers, and Edmund is the perfect candidate. When Seol calmly informs him that he intends to marry Princess Akilde, the old merchant chokes on his drink, shouting in sheer terror. Edmund frantically calls him insane, but a sharp look from Seol reminds him of the powerhouse he's addressing. Calming down, Seol asks him to break down the exact logistics of why it's so impossible. Edmund explains that Akilde is the precious sole child of the late Queen Shan. This makes her the primary legitimate heir to the throne. To even be registered as a suitor, one must possess impeccable noble lineage. Currently, Seol is a complete ghost, a foreigner of zero documented background, lacking even a basic knighthood or title. Edmund stresses that her hand is reserved for foreign princes or grand dukes of supreme standing. Seol strokes his chin, realizing he needs to play the empire's game. He must either forcefully acquire an equal noble title or manifest legendary merit that the crown cannot ignore. That is the brutal reality of high society. Without further ado, the protagonist gets up from the table and prepares to go out to fulfill his purpose. But the old man asks a question he's not prepared for. Do you know what the rules are in the palace? Such a question surprises him. To prevent his business partner from causing a diplomatic disaster that destroys the guild, Edmund hauls out a stack of heavy volumes covering royal protocol, dining etiquette, and noble registers. Seol swallows his pride and agrees, undergoing an intensive crash course to blend seamlessly into the aristocracy. The entire night is spent drilling posture, speech patterns, and greetings. By dawn, the protagonist is fully prepared. Giving Edmund a confident nod, he heads straight to the royal palace, where his arrival is eagerly anticipated by the staff. He is formally announced and ushered into a grand hall where King Tomalov sits surrounded by the entire imperial council. Seol narrows his eyes. He had expected a private audience, not a political gauntlet. Catching his eye, Princess Akilde offers a deeply apologetic, frustrated look, silently conveying that the corrupt ministers hijacked her meeting. Reading her tense posture, Seol instantly chuckles inwardly, realizing this council assembly is a blatant trap sprung by her political rivals. A sudden scowl from the side catches his attention. He turns and finds himself locking eyes with Justin, the arrogant son of Duke Icarus. The boy is glaring daggers at him, his ribs undoubtedly still black and blue from the thorough beating Seol delivered with a tree branch just days prior. Justin trembles with homicidal rage until Duke Icarus places a heavy hand on his shoulder, sharply whispering for him to remember they are standing before the king. The boy grits his teeth and falls back. Meanwhile, hushed whispers ripple through the assembly, identifying Seol as the rogue powerhouse who casually trashed the duke's heir. Clearing his throat, King Tomalov speaks up, asking why the elusive swordsman finally deigned to accept their invitation after so many flat rejections. Seol offers a polite bow, stating that he has a very specific fated reason for stepping into this court. Right now, the Royal Merchant Association is severely short-staffed. Thanks to the new venture of producing ice, everyone is working around the clock, especially Edmund, who is doing everything he can to meet the exploding demand for ice and ice cream. Seol explains that his original plan was to secure the ice supply first and then head straight to the palace. However, the demand was so overwhelming that every batch of ice sold out instantly. As a result, his royal audience kept getting pushed back day after day until he finally managed to carve out some free time. The king is pleased with his explanation and praises the magic swordsman for his hard work on the Merchant Association's new venture. Seeing him face to face, Seol can't help but compare him to Hwaryong's father Dam. He has to admit, this king looks like he'd be a much more easygoing father-in-law. When the king asks for his name, the protagonist explains that he doesn't have a formal name in this world, only a title, so he can simply be addressed as the magic swordsman. This doesn't sit well with his majesty, who wants a proper way to address him. Princess Akilda steps in and suggests that her father grant the magic swordsman any official title or name he sees fit. When the king asks if she is referring to a simple moniker, she clarifies that she is demanding an chifrage. After all, he is the savior who preserved the monarch's life, and no reward could possibly be more fitting than a noble title. The solution pleases the court, and the first to voice his agreement is none other than Duke Icarus. He chimed in, noting that no reward could be more appropriate for the young man's heroic deed, praising the princess for her truly exceptional idea. Seizing the moment, the king decides to bestow a title upon Seol. He explains that ever since the night of the ambush, one specific word has been rolling through his mind after watching him cut down the assassins. He then commands the young man to kneel before him. Kneeling goes against the protagonist's pride, but if it brings him closer to winning the princess's hand, it's a small price to pay for what he stands to gain. Unsheathing his ceremonial blade, King Tomalov announces that by virtue of the young man's peerless merits, he is hereby granted the title of baronet along with the house name Blizzard. The title translates to blizzard in the ancient tongue of this world, a choice that perfectly mirrors the protagonist's frost energy. The king formally grants him the hereditary right to pass this title down to future generations under royal decree. The king expresses his deepest heartfelt gratitude to the protagonist once more for saving his life. Seol gracefully replies that it is a choice he would make again without a second thought if the situation ever arose. Speaking up again, Duke Icarus points out to the king that the young man should be granted lands to accompany his new title. However, the king reminds him that he is merely a baronet, and historically no baronet has ever been granted territory. He warns that it might cause a stir among the rest of the nobility, but Icarus tries to sway him, arguing that his majesty's word is absolute. Besides, if anyone dared to express dissatisfaction, the duke promised to personally remind them who rules the Drake Kingdom. The king grows suspicious at how aggressively Duke Icarus is championing the idea. He turns to the assembled nobles and asks for their thoughts. Sweating nervously under the pressure, every single noble nods in agreement, stammering that it is a highly honorable proposal that should be carried out. Even so, the king points out that there are currently no vacant territories to give away. Duke Icarus quickly reminds everyone of their conversation from a few days ago regarding the frozen lands of the north, a lawless region desperately in need of a lord to establish order and bring it under the crown's control. It feels almost fated by the heavens that such a powerful new noble should emerge in the kingdom. One who is young and commands enough internal energy to handle the dangerous wildlands. To top it off, the title bestowed by His Majesty is beautifully symbolic of the frontier, a relentless blizzard sweeping across the northern territory. It sounds like a perfect omen, but as the Duke speaks, the king reads right through him. This is nothing but a calculated act of revenge by Duke Icarus against the magic swordsman for humiliating his son and bruising his family pride. A very clever trap. As the debate continues, Seol keeps analyzing the situation. He immediately realizes that the Duke is trying to banish him to a wasteland as payback for the absolute beating he gave his son. Still, having his own territory isn't a bad proposition. Rejecting it outright would be foolish. This fief gives him a golden opportunity to rack up achievements and skyrocket his reputation, closing the massive status gap between himself and the princess. Back at the Merchant Association, Edmund desperately tries to warn Seol about the dangers ahead by describing the brutal northern frontier. He explains that it's a place plagued by non-stop blizzards and catastrophic avalanches, bone-chilling cold, and an environment where the ambient mana is dangerously unstable. The protagonist tells the old man not to sweat it since he has an incredible tolerance for freezing temperatures. Dumbfounded, the old man asks if he's secretly a Yeti, explaining that Yetis are legendary monstrous creatures that have inhabited the northern wastes since ancient times. It is a monstrous beast that stands roughly 3 meters tall, possessing human-like traits and a terrifying physical strength that cannot be underestimated. Furthermore, he must manage the native northern clans, a light, fiercely independent tribesmen who despise foreign rule and flatly refuse to acknowledge any outside lord. Far from discouraging him, this information only fires Seol up. He's itching to get to that inhospitable terrain and see it for himself. Besides, if he can tame and win over the fierce northern tribes, his renown will reach legendary status, which is exactly what he needs. Stepping out of the office, he finds the association's young trainees waiting by the door. They had overheard the entire conversation and looked completely downcast at the thought of their master's sudden departure. Out in the woods during training, the youths express their anxieties to Seol, arguing that if their master leaves for the north, no one will be left to train them. They beg to tag along. Suddenly, a figure approaches from behind. Seol turns around to find Princess Akilda, who has come to speak with him in private. When asked about her sudden appearance, the young princess requests a private word. The protagonist orders his students to take their leave. Sensing an opportunity, the kids beg one last time to go north with him. Seol quickly agrees just to get them to leave so he can be alone with the princess. The ecstatic youths scatter, leaving the princess free to speak her mind. She explains that she came all this way to apologize to Baron Seol. Her well-meaning attempt to reward him for saving her father's life unintentionally played right into Icarus's hands, resulting in his banishment to the frozen north. As the princess continues to pour her heart out, Seol watches her intently, marveled by how much she resembles Hwaryong when she's flustered. It takes him back to a time when Hwaryong apologized for her father's stubborn actions. The exact same expressions, the same delicate features, and the same mannerisms. Playfully teasing her, the protagonist rubs it in that her requested title is exactly why he's being packed off to the northern wastes, making the poor girl feel even more guilty. Seol tells her that apologies won't change the fact that his marching orders are sealed. Akilde asks if there's anything else she can do to make it up to him. He suggests a parting token or a lucky charm. When she looks confused, he boldly clarifies that a kiss would do nicely. Something to prove she genuinely cares about his safety. Blushing and caught completely off guard by his audacity, the princess freezes. Seol immediately backtracks with a smirk, apologizing for making such a forward request. Seol prepares to take his leave and tells her to forget the whole thing. However, the princess is annoyed that he can just casually say whatever comes to his mind without a care for how it affects her. She calls him back, and as he steps closer, she feels an intense wave of familiarity she's never experienced with anyone else. Mustering up her courage, the princess offers to give him what he asked for. Seol tells her to forget it, not wanting to force her hand, but before he can even finish his sentence, she suddenly kisses his cheek. Flustered and embarrassed, she dashes away, leaving Seol standing frozen in his tracks, completely speechless. When he finally snaps out of it, the protagonist realizes he now has a compelling reason to make it back to the kingdom alive. Meanwhile, up in a remote mountain village, the locals are abuzz with the latest news. The king has assigned a brand new lord to rule over their territory. Rumors are flowing as fast as the ale in the local taverns. Everyone is talking about the incredible martial prowess of the incoming lord, though they find it baffling that a man of his caliber would accept an assignment to the literal edge of the world. A patron at a nearby table mutters that the new lord must have crossed Duke Icarus, which explains his exile to this wasteland. He scoffs that it's likely just empty talk, and all they need to do is rough him up a bit until he flees like all his predecessors. Meanwhile, deep in the frozen mountains, a couple of locals suddenly find themselves in mortal peril. They've been ambushed by a vicious ice wyvern hunting in the blizzard. The beast lunges from the blinding snow, slashing the young woman with its talons and sending her flying. Her partner rushes to her side, kicking himself for being foolish enough to go hunting for wyvern eggs in this deadly weather. The beast looms over him, baring its fangs, ready to execute him right in front of his helpless companion. Just as the youth closes his eyes, waiting to be crushed in the wyvern's jaws, a mysterious figure materializes through the snow. With a single lightning-fast slash of his sword, he clean decapitates the monster. The saved couple stares in utter shock as the massive beast's head thuds onto the snow before them. The stranger calmly assures them that they are safe now. They stammer out their thanks, but he waves it off, casually mentioning that he's merely doing his duty as the lord of these lands. Before they can even process his words, the stranger vanishes back into the storm as quickly as he arrived, carrying the precious egg the wyvern had been guarding so fiercely. Having officially moved into his fortress, Seol sets up court to receive the customary oaths of fealty from his new vassals. However, the grand hall is completely dead silent. The only person present is a nervous servant who stammers through an apology, offering to dispatch messengers to reissue the formal summons. Seol tells him to forget it, knowing the Highlanders will just ignore another piece of paper. It's clear their strategy is to give incoming lords the cold shoulder, freezing them out until they pack up and leave out of frustration. Unfortunately for them, Seol has his own way of getting results. A few days later, a familiar scene plays out in the central tavern of Karalung. Warriors from the neighboring settlements are nursing heavy bruises, having been utterly thrashed by the newly arrived lord, without landing a single counterblow. His blistering speed and alien combat techniques are completely beyond anything they've ever faced, making their plans to run him out of town look impossible. Suddenly, the tavern door flies open, and a breathless Highlander announces that the new lord has just walked right into the village square. Stunned, the crowd rushes outside to see what he's up to. Among them is Max, the village's champion, whom everyone expects to crush this intruder. In the square, the locals are floored by the sheer audacity of this foreigner, walking casually through their territory without a shred of fear, while Sales is quietly amused by the massive crowd that has gathered to gawk at him. A familiar voice calls out from the crowd. Seol turns to find Luya, the young woman he rescued from the wyvern, who happens to be Max's daughter. When Max demands to know why she's out here, she explains that she simply followed the commotion to see what was going on. When she describes her encounter with the mysterious warrior, her father connects the dots and realizes that the whole village has gathered to catch a glimpse of the new governor appointed by the crown. Remembering Seol's parting words on the peaks, she explains to her father that this very noble is the savior who rescued her when she foolishly tried to steal an ice wyvern egg. This puts Max in a massive dilemma. An ice wyvern is no ordinary beast. Defeating one with a single blow is a feat that not even the strongest warrior in all of Karalung could achieve in their wildest dreams. As a father, he owes this man everything, but as Karalung's protector, he can't back down in front of his people. Stepping forward to break the tension, he faces Seol, who formally introduces himself as Seol, the newly appointed Baron of Karalung. Max admits he's heard of him but calls him out for thrashing and tying up villagers across the territory. Seol coolly responds that it was a simple lesson in teaching his subjects some manners, asking Max if he needs one too. Caught in the protagonist's freezing glare, Max decides to pivot and extends a unique challenge to de-escalate. The warrior explains that to survive the brutal northern climate, locals rely on incredibly stiff spirits. He challenges the new lord to a drinking contest, which the protagonist accepts on the spot. Max warns him that their local moonshine is a diss entirely. So potent it feels like liquid fire burning through your insides. Unfazed, Seol raises the stakes. If he wins, Max must completely surrender, recognize him as absolute lord, and pledge his unconditional loyalty. The onlookers gasp at the new lord's insane confidence. Who in their right mind dares to challenge the undisputed heavy drinking champion of the entire northern frontier? Completely confident in his massive alcohol tolerance, Max accepts the terms and slams his fist on the bar to start the duel. Line up the heavy mugs. Max offers one final chance for Seol to back down before he's completely humiliated under the table. Seol merely chuckles, stating that as the Lord of Karalung, he never goes back on his word, urging him to start pouring. Max hears a distant voice calling his name. When his eyes flutter open, he sees Seol sitting perfectly upright across the table, calmly waiting for the next round. Luya is frantically shaking him awake, while his drinking buddies ask if he's alright after blacking out for a few seconds. Max looks around in utter disbelief. He is the legendary champion of Karalung. Luya begs him to call it quits, but he stubbornly refuses, claiming he's barely even buzzed. This is no longer just about defending Karalung's pride. His lifelong reputation as the greatest lightweight crushing drinker in the north is on the line. He orders another heavy round and fills Seol's mug. Seol actually starts getting worried for the man's health as Max stumbles around, spilling half the liquor onto the floor. Max's vision swims. The room is spinning violently, yet this foreign lord looks like he hasn't downed a single drop. When Seol asks if he's ready to throw in the towel, Max defiantly barks that the night is still young. He violently slams another full mug down his throat despite everyone's concerns. Seol calmly downs his next drink just as Karalung's ultimate champion crashes face first onto the floor, completely knocked out. With his total victory secured while the crowd groans in defeat, Seol takes charge. He addresses the tavern, commanding every village leader to gather at his fortress in exactly 5 days. It's time to see if these Highlanders are honorable enough to keep their word. 5 days later, the grand hall of the fortress is packed to the brim. True to their pledge, every single representative has shown some, much to the magic swordsman's satisfaction. Before they can make excuses, Seol cuts to the chase. Since they now know exactly what he's capable of, he drops a bombshell. In 10 days, the entire population will be packing up and moving. The room falls dead silent until Luya, Max's daughter, voices the collective confusion. The tribesmen assume this means they are moving into the fortress, but Seol points out that the keep is far too small to house their entire population. This leaves them thoroughly baffled, considering he just ordered them to pack up all their worldly goods. Seol smiles and clarifies that they are embarking on a grand migration further north. Over the past 5 days, the protagonist had thoroughly scouted the deep north and discovered a massive hidden location capable of comfortably housing over 10,000 people. His ultimate goal is to consolidate all the isolated, scattered mountain clans into one unified, powerful city. Max quickly warns him that the northern valley is heavily infested by savage ice ogres. When Seol blankly asks what those look like, Max describes them, prompting the protagonist to ask if he means those giant hairless brutes that lumber around on 2 legs. Max is floored. Absolutely no one who enters ice ogre territory ever lives to talk about them. Seol nonchalantly informs him that he spent the last 5 days systematically slaughtering every single one of them. The casual claim leaves the warriors frozen in shock, as their new lord explains that since he noticed them stressing over some invisible threat, he simply tracked down the source of their anxiety and eradicated it. He warns them that the only priority right now is ensuring the migration caravan is ready to move immediately. As the meeting adjourns, the villagers scatter to pack their wagons, while Luya steps aside with Jake, quietly thanking him for his critical assistance back up on the snowy cliffs. Seol mentions he was actually just about to call for them. Seeing their worried expressions, he chuckles and says it's nothing bad, leading them down the corridors. They arrive at a secluded chamber, and when he opens the door, Luya and Jake gasp in absolute astonishment. Inside are 3 newly hatched ice wyvern cubs. Luya immediately pouts, accusing Seol of stealing the very egg they risked their lives for. The protagonist simply smirks and reminds her that he also saved their lives that day, shutting down her argument instantly. Before they can apologize, Sol explains his true intention. He wants to gift the cubs to them. He vents that raising them is an absolute nightmare rather than a pleasure, since the little monsters do nothing but screech and eat all day, shattering his peace and quiet. Luya gives him a sympathetic look and explains that it's impossible. Ice wyverns imprint on the very first creature they see upon hatching, viewing them as their mother. In other words, Seol is stuck raising these high-maintenance pests whether he likes it or not. The news visibly drains the soul right out of the protagonist. Seeing his despair, Jake tries to cheer him up, emphasizing how incredibly valuable these beasts are, growing far larger and more terrifyingly powerful than any standard monster companion. Furthermore, once these creatures are fully domesticated, they can serve as magnificent flying mounts, capable of traversing vast distances through the skies. They can easily reach Teston, a bustling trade city located 1,000 kilometers west of Karalung that serves as the secondary capital of the Gaia Empire. This instantly changes Seol's tune. Realizing the massive strategic advantage of having a private air fleet, he eagerly presses the two youths for training tips. 10 days later, under the firm direction of Seol, the entire population of Karalung begins a historic migration, marching straight into a blinding northern blizzard. Several days into the grueling trek, Sabina catches up with the protagonist to report on morale. After 3 days of non-stop marching through sub-zero temperatures, the people are exhausted, and bitter murmurs are spreading against their lord's seemingly insane northern expedition. Stepping to the front, Seol addresses the weary crowd, asking them for just a bit more patience and to trust his lead. He assures them their destination is just over the horizon. While his speech reignites some hope, a few terrified stragglers still complain, paralyzed by the fear of running into an ice ogre army. Annoyed, Seol slams his staff onto the frozen ground, loudly reminding them that he already slaughtered every single ogre in the region. He snaps that such spineless whining is insulting for a people who call themselves the proud, fierce warriors of Karalung. Thoroughly ashamed by the tongue-lashing, the Highlanders swallow their fears and press onward. Seol mentions to Sabina that the brief reality check should keep them quiet until they arrive. Sure enough, all doubts vanish the moment they reach the destination. Before them sits a colossal cave entrance. As they file inside, they gasp at the sheer, mind-boggling scale of the cavern, exactly as Seol had promised. The cavern is vast enough to easily shelter the entire population from the raging storm outside. Even better, natural geothermal hot springs run through the area, radiating a warm, comfortable microclimate that makes the freezing surface weather feel like a distant memory. Addressing his people, Seol explains that while this was once a vile den of ice ogres, it is now their new capital. Since it is officially their home, he suggests it's only right to give it a proper name. With the crowd eagerly waiting, the protagonist reflects on his past life and origins, declaring that this underground sanctuary shall be known as the White Castle. The name is met with roaring approval. Now, all that's left is to coordinate the arrival of their newly trained wyvern units. Suddenly, a loud crackling sound echoes, and a rogue bolt of lightning strikes the wyvern cubs, leaving them twitching on the ground. Seol moves like lightning, grabbing the offending mage by the throat. Pinned and unable to cast a spell, the terrified mage squeaks out an explanation. When Seol demands his identity, the man gasps that he is a local noble residing nearby. The rogue mage glares at him, demanding to know if he is the newly appointed Count Blizzard, the warrior who rescued the king and claimed the northern frontier. The question takes the protagonist by surprise, as he has zero recollection of ever crossing paths with this man before. Connecting the dots, Seol asks if he is the failed former lord who was violently driven out by the warriors of Karalung. The sage smugly confirms it, launching into a bitter rant about his justification. Seol brushes off his excuses instantly, coldly rebuking the man for daring to speak to an active count with such unearned arrogance. Desperate, the mage appeals to their shared allegiance to the crown, whimpering that as fellow servants of the king, they shouldn't be fighting each leukemia. Seol counters coldly, stating that Jerome should have stripped himself of his title the moment he abandoned his post in the north. However, seeing the mage's raw magical potential, Seol decides to offer him a very specific role instead. He releases his grip on the man's pressure points, quietly warning him that if he pulls another stupid stunt like that, he won't live to regret it. Jerome frantically nods, promising absolute compliance. Commanding him to heal the injured wyverns immediately, Seol turns and walks away. Jerome slumps to the floor, sweating bullets over how close he just came to death, thanking his lucky stars he's still breathing. Weeks later, Jerome has been fully integrated as Seol's administrative secretary and strategist. He reviews a bold new policy proposed by the protagonist. To alleviate the extreme hardships his new subjects face, Seol intends to draft a formal request to the king demanding a total tax exemption for his entire territory. Jerome immediately panics, explaining that such a radical proposal will cause an absolute uproar among the nobility. He warns that if the king grants a special exemption to a single fief, the rest of the lords will view it as extreme favoritism and an insult to their own houses. They would undoubtedly demand sweeping tax exemptions, citing the harsh local conditions, a request the king would have to deny immediately to preserve the treasury. The true obstacle remains the corrupt court assembly, where every prominent noble is dancing on the strings of Duke Icarus. Seol smiles and pivots, telling his secretary to scrap the tax appeal. Relief washes over Jerome, but it's short-lived as Seol leans in to share an entirely different, far more creative plan. Hearing the outline, the strategist expresses deep skepticism about its feasibility. The protagonist simply counters that nothing is impossible with the right execution, ordering him to begin preparations. A formal summons is instantly issued across the territory, calling every able-bodied hunter to the central hall. The locals arrive completely in the dark, whispering in confusion until Seol takes the stage and announces that he has a brand new task for them. He commands them to locate ice wyvern nests and harvest their eggs completely intact. Though taken aback, the hunters listen intently as the protagonist details the division of hunting parties. To sweeten the deal, he announces a massive grand prize, 100 gold coins to the squad that secures the most eggs. An aggregate gasp ripples through the crowd. That much gold is more than an entire family could earn in a lifetime. They ask if this is some kind of joke, but their lord looks them dead in the eye and guarantees that his bounty is absolute. The hunters erupt into roaring cheers, swearing to bring back every single egg in the mountains. Seol then turns to Jerome, assigning him a critical side mission. Shadow the hunting groups, evaluate their combat flow, and identify the standout talents for an elite project. Intrigued by the sudden requisition for heavy arms, the administrative secretary asks if he plans to charter an independent order of knights. Seol looks at him and asks if he thinks it's a good idea. Jerome nods vigorously, pointing out that establishing an elite force is vital for his standing. He notes that Duke Icarus's personal guard is so terrifyingly powerful they can easily rival the king's royal knights. Saul smiles, promising his secretary that his men will soon outshine everyone in the kingdom. Inwardly, he vows that his personal order will grow more formidable than any elite unit from his past life, ensuring he has the power to protect his beloved princess. With the briefings wrapped up, the hunting parties deploy into the frozen wastes. A massive, coordinated hunt unfolds across the northern peaks. Karlung's fighters display exceptional squad synergy, expertly pinning down wild ice wyverns and securing their objectives with zero casualties. Observing from a ridge, Seol and Jerome watch the operations unfold. Seol is genuinely impressed by their discipline. Jerome notes that weeks of fighting alongside one another has forced these rugged Highlanders to synchronize perfectly, drastically increasing their lethal efficiency. Jerome has to marvel at his lord's sheer brilliance. By imprinting on the wyverns from birth, they can build an elite airborne logistics network, moving premium northern goods across the continent in days. A trek that would take a standard merchant caravan months to complete. Seol cheers his men on, reminding them of the glittering bounty waiting at home. Suddenly, one specific dual-wielding fighter catches his eye, shredding a wyvern's defenses with blinding fluid motions, taking a single scratch. When asked, Jerome identifies the man as Stuart. He explains that Stuart was once a notorious rogue who raided corrupt noble estates to feed the starving peasantry. After being ambushed and captured, he executed a daring prison break right before his trial, fleeing to the lawless north and blending into Karlung. The backstory gives Seol an idea. He orders his secretary to keep a close eye on any talented outlaws and report them directly to him. Back inside the White Castle, Seol holds a grand feast to praise the squads for the massive haul of eggs, ordering the immediate distribution of their hard-earned gold. Max steps forward, asking what their ultimate plan is for this massive stockpile of eggs. Seol reveals the secret. Upon hatching, the wyvern chicks will permanently imprint on the first face they see, viewing them as their absolute mother. By implementing this systematic method, he intends to domesticate the wyverns into a premium logistics fleet, allowing them to rapidly transport Karlung's high-value commodities to major kingdoms across the continent. Max looks thoroughly bewildered, asking what lucrative specialty Karlung even possesses. The protagonist explains that premium winter textiles are one avenue, though the absolute core economic driver of the region will be harvesting raw materials from the ice ogre territories. Hearing this, the Highlanders break out into panicked murmurs, fearing it's a suicide mission. Seol simply laughs and reminds them who cleared out the massive ogre den they are currently sitting in. Realizing their lord has already broken the monster's dominance, the warriors grin and eagerly lock in for the hunt. Just as the feast gets underway, the heavy doors fly open. A panicked Leo stumbles in, completely out of breath, gasping an apology to his master. Once he catches his breath, he frantically tells Seol that Sabina is in critical condition and desperately needs him. Seol immediately bolts from his seat, following Leo to a room where Sabina lies shivering on the floor. Luffy is desperately trying to wrap her in blankets. Checking her pulse, the protagonist senses her internal energy is dangerously chaotic and demands to know what happened. The boys stammer that they were scouting out incubation chambers for the incoming wyvern eggs when they stumbled across a hidden valley carpeted in glowing glacial flowers. Excited, Sabina picked a few specimens to show her master. However, the moment they crossed back into the castle, she suddenly collapsed into a deep coma. Picking up the dropped blossom from her hand, Seol's eyes narrow. He recognizes it instantly. It's an ice flower, a rare spiritual plant native to the extreme coordinates of the North Sea from his original worlds. Wondering how a plant from his old world manifested here, Seol suppresses his questions for now. With the boys begging him to save her, he commands them to lift her up and move her immediately to the medical wing. They sprint down the halls, carefully laying her onto a bed. Seol turns to them, stating he will stabilize her but needs absolute isolation. He orders everyone out of the room until he calls. Nodding tearfully and begging him to save their companion, the boys back out and shut the doors, leaving the protagonist alone with the unconscious girl. Twirling the stem, Seol inspects the source of her condition. While locals call it a glacial flower, in the Murim world this plant generates a core fruit that acts as a priceless cultivation elixir. The catch is that the extreme volatile frost energy it leaks makes harvesting the core safely almost impossible without advanced techniques. Only a master who has completely synthesized ice key can safely extract the core. Channeling his energy, Seol isolates the concentrated fruit essence, guiding it into Sabina's mouth and forcing her to swallow. He then presses his palms against her back, circulating his own ice key deep into her meridians to guide the massive influx of energy. Projecting his voice into her subconscious, he commands her to sit up and take conscious control of the rampaging energy. Sabina's eyes snap open in a trance. She crosses her legs and begins circulating the raw frost. Once the deadly chill finally normalizes within her channels, she slumps back onto the pillows, falling into a peaceful, natural sleep. Checking her pulse one last time, Seol confirms the crisis has passed. Better yet, the breakthrough has dramatically expanded her internal energy capacity, meaning he can drastically ramp up her martial arts training routine moving forward. More importantly, he needs to secure that hidden valley immediately. A steady supply of these flowers will accelerate his own plans far ahead of schedule. Over the following weeks, the White Castle underwent a massive administrative overhaul, optimizing every single layout and duty. Reviewing Jerome's combat files, Seol officially established his personal vanguard force, the Order of the Blizzard Knights. He formally appointed Stuart as captain, acknowledging his peerless tactical display and lethal blade during the Wyvern operations. The medical wings, academies, residential quarters, and commercial sectors were systematically laid out according to Seol's urban blueprints. Similarly, advanced training facilities were customized based on individual aptitude and unit specializations. Osborne was promoted to Chief of Internal Security for the White Castle, while Jerome found himself upgraded from a simple desk secretary to the personal chief strategist and assistant to the Lord of Karalung, a high-stress promotion he couldn't refuse. Two distinct armed divisions were formed, a border patrol corps tasked with securing the cavern perimeter and locating lost, nomadic mountain families to bring them into the safety of the White Castle. This border unit reported directly to Seol. The second division was the Wyvern Knights Aviation Wing. Since specialized handlers were non-existent, Seol took overall command while appointing Max's sharp-witted daughter, Luya, as the operational commander. A month later, Jerome was sprinting down the corridors, running late for a high-level council meeting called by the Lord of Karalung. Entering the war room, he's surprised to see a glowing Sabina sitting at the table, who waves cheerfully. Seol snaps him out of his daze, commanding him to take his seat immediately. Osborne resumes his brief, noting that internal security has arrested 20 individuals over the past month, over half of whom are high-profile outlaws fleeing justice from neighboring kingdoms. Max scoffs, demanding they be thrown into the deepest dungeons permanently. Sil gives him a knowing look, reminding the veteran that technically, Max was once a wanted rebel criminal for inciting a coup against his previous lords. Max sputters that his actions were completely different, driven solely to preserve Karalung's independence from corrupt regimes. Seol asks if his rebellion was fundamentally any different from Stuart's past, leaving Max completely speechless in front of the captain. Stuart quietly chimes in, noting that extreme poverty drives good people to desperate measures. Raising her hand, Sabina chimes in with a brilliant alternative solution. She suggests that if the public harbor resentment toward the incoming refugees, they should be integrated into the Ice Ogre suppression squads to let them earn their keep and bleed for the community. The pragmatic idea leaves the room stunned, and Seol nods in approval, praising it as a brilliant solution to their social bottleneck. The ongoing Ice Ogre campaigns remain dangerous due to the monster's terrifying power, but the frontline squads now boast a massive surge in numbers thanks to the integration of the conscripted convicts. Knowing this is their only shot at redemption, the convicts fight like demons. Out in the frozen wilds, an ogre's club doesn't care if you're an innocent hunter or a wanted criminal, forcing the convicts to coordinate seamlessly with Karalung's veterans just to survive. The highly successful integration was the direct result of Sabina's strategy. Though it sounded ruthless initially, it gave the outlaws a tangible purpose, forcing them to bond with the locals over a shared goal while completely reshaping the public's opinion of them. Deep in a separate sector of the woods, a scouting party catches a strange reading moving through the tree line. They decide to flush it out into the open. They loose a volley of arrows into the brush. When nothing moves, they assume it's a false alarm, but as they step forward to retrieve their arrows, a colossal 3-meter-tall humanoid beast erupts from the snow, violently scattering the panicked hunters. In a different quadrant, Seol is personally monitoring a hunting squad. He commends Osborne on their smooth coordination, telling Jerome to reinforce the safety protocols so no one takes unnecessary risks. Just then, a breathless runner arrives with news of casualties. Osborne quickly asks about their status, and the messenger confirms they've been rushed to the medical sector, severely beaten but stable. Seol steps in, demanding the full report, and Osborne breaks down the encounter from the other squad. It appears they ran into a creature that was definitely not an ice ogre. The monster single-handedly ambushed several scouts who were mapping out beast migration paths through the thick woods. Hearing the physical description, Seol realizes they're dealing with an entirely different tier of beast. He decides to investigate the site personally, commanding Jerome to halt all active hunting operations until further notice. As he glides through the snow, Edmund's warnings about the legendary Yetis flash through his mind. Expanding his sensory perception, Seol scans the frozen terrain till he locks onto a massive heat signature. He closes the distance in a flash, launching a probing strike the second the creature comes into range. The beast reacts with blistering speed, successfully parrying the blow. Seol is genuinely surprised. This monster matches the legendary descriptions perfectly. Yet, as he squares up for a serious clash, he notices the Yeti's posture shift. The aggressive bravado vanishes, replaced by a visibly defensive, panicked look. Still, a wild creature of this caliber is too dangerous to leave unchecked near his borders. Fearing it might slaughter another scouting party, Seol unleashes a decisive sword form to put it down. Just as his blade is about to pierce its chest, a brilliant flash of light blinds him, and the Yeti completely vanishes into thin air. The specific magical signature triggers a memory of a lecture from Luffy regarding high-tier spatial spells, where he explained that certain entities could instantly blink across space. Such spatial displacement is incredibly advanced magic, typically restricted to archmages operating at the absolute peak of enlightenment and manifestations. This means the beast possesses immense intelligence. However, Seol's tracking sense indicates the mana ripple didn't travel far. He systematically combs the immediate area until he uncovers a concealed cave mouth hidden beneath a pile of fallen pines. Stepping inside, he is greeted by an absolute jaw-dropping sight. A massive sprawling library carved into the subterranean rock, and cowering behind a row of ancient bookshelves is the very Yeti he was hunting. As Seol approaches, the Yeti speaks in a rumbling voice, begging him to stay back. Seol lowers his sword, assuring the beast he won't harm him if he cooperates. When asked for his identity, the creature introduces himself as Kondol, the guardian warrior of the Haori tribe, a faction the protagonist has never heard of. A calm voice behind him notes that Snow Beast is simply another regional term for a Yeti. Turning around, he finds Jerome, who explains that he had been tracking Seol's trail of shattered trees through the wilderness until he stumbled upon the cave entrance, marveling at the ancient library hidden inside. This hidden repository was the Yeti's sanctuary. When Seol demands an explanation for his presence, the creature hesitates, thoroughly intimidated by the Lord's aura. Seol presses him firmly, and Kondol finally explains that he hails from Gluck, a legendary secluded village of intelligent Yetis. The protagonist demands to know why he assaulted his scouting parties. Kondol frantically defends himself, stating that as a proud warrior of the Haori, his ancient code strictly forbids taking lives without cause. He merely neutralized the threat. Jerome checks his field reports and confirms the claim, noting that while the scouts suffered severe fractures, there were indeed 0 fatalities. Kondol rumbles that he only drove out the humans because they had encroached upon his tribe's sacred sanctuary and attacked him first. Seol pieces the situation together. His eager hunting parties had unwittingly crossed into the Yeti's ancient sovereign territory, and Kondol was simply performing his sworn duty as a guardian. He orders Jerome to cast healing magic on the creature's wounds, asking Kondol to formally map out his borders so he can ensure his human subjects never trespass again. The unexpected respect touches the guardian deeply, and he bows in gratitude. Once Jerome wraps up the medical treatment, Seol prepares to head out, but his strategist stops him, stating he has an urgent personal request to make. Meanwhile, back in the capital, Edmund is in absolute despair. 3 months have flown by since the magic swordsman marched north, and there has been complete radio silence. It's an unmitigated disaster for the business. Their stored ice reserves are totally bone dry, and no new supply has materialized. Without it, the Royal Merchant Association is facing total bankruptcy. Henry tries to calm him down, asking why he's predicting their immediate downfall. The old man groans that the magic swordsman explicitly guaranteed a continuous trade line of ice, yet they haven't seen a single crate in 90 days. Henry keeps a cool head, reassuring the elder that their partner is simply not the type of man to break his word. If the Count promised a delivery of premium frost goods, he fully intended to honor his word. Suddenly, a massive shadow blankets the courtyard as a magnificent wyvern glides down to land before them, with young Sabina riding proudly upon its shoulders. Hearing her cheerful greeting, the two men look up in shock as she formally announces the arrival of the premier northern ice shipment. The old man literally jumps with joy, while Henry rubs his eyes, utterly floored by the sight. The magic swordsman has successfully tamed an apex predator whose individual destructive power rivals an entire squadron of heavy knights, and he's using it as a casual delivery vehicle for ice. It's glaringly obvious that something massive is being built in the north. Sabina pulls out an official scroll, handing it to Edmund with strict instructions to deliver it to its recipient immediately. Meanwhile, at the royal palace, Princess Achilde is enduring a forced tea session with Duke Icarus's arrogant son, Justin, who is drowning her in fake compliments while she treats him with absolute, icy indifference. Her personal lady-in-waiting slips into the gazebo, quietly whispering in her ear that an express package has just arrived from the frontier. The moment the princess reads the sender's name aloud, Baronet Blizzard, Justin spits out his wine in a coughing fit. Disregarding all table manners, she abruptly bolts from the banquet to read the letter in private, leaving her thoroughly annoyed suitor sitting all by himself. Justin slams his fist down, loudly demanding she return, but Achilde throws a cold remark over her shoulder, telling him he should spend less time whining and more time in the training yard fixing his broken swordsmanship after his last encounter. She walks off with her maid, leaving Justin to violently kick the table, swearing a blood oath that Seal will pay dearly for this absolute disrespect. Safe in her private study, the princess breaks the wax seal. Seal's letter greets her warmly, expressing his sincere gratitude for the fated lucky charm she had gifted him. He then enthusiastically details the natural wonders of his northern estate, detailing the rejuvenating geothermal hot springs, the breathtaking crystal caverns, and the underground city he founded named the White Castle. He writes that while it is an unparalleled paradise, it suffers from one catastrophic flaw, her absence, which makes the grand fortress feel entirely hollow. As a token of his affection, he encloses a preserved ice flower petal harvested by Sabina, closing with a playful farewell. Achilde presses the glowing petal to her chest, her mind in a complete spin. This single letter has completely shattered the emotional walls she was trying to build. She has been utterly unable to stop thinking about Seal. There is only one logical way to clear her head. She needs to see him face to face to determine if these intense feelings are a passing phase or true love. Up north, Seal is deeply focused on refining his delicate essence extraction technique on the ice flowers, but the energy remains so volatile that a split-second drop in focus instantly turns the blossoms to ash. Jerome approaches the training platform, requesting his presence in the war room for a massive intelligence update. The protagonist brushes off the frost and heads inside, where Jerome delivers a game-changing discovery. The hidden vault the Yeti had been guarding turned out to be the personal archive of a legendary ancient archmage. With the lost arcane theories preserved inside, a scholar could realistically reconstruct forgotten spells and easily shatter the barrier to the five-ring stage. As the young strategist rants, Seal picks up a sharp spike of pure elemental energy radiating from Jerome's hip. Before the mage can explain, Seal reaches out and plucks a leather pouch dangling from his belt. Untying the drawstring, a brilliant glow spills out. He pours a cluster of crystalline, pulsating gems onto the table. Jerome explains that these are highly concentrated nodes of crystallized elements known across the continent as mana stones. When questioned, Jerome admits that he is currently a four-ring mage struggling against the bottleneck to the fifth ring, a barrier that has plagued his mind for months. He confesses he hoped to leverage the raw power of these unique mana crystals to forcefully break through. Seal nods, acknowledging the temptation. Jerome looks up hopefully, asking for formal permission to proceed with the absorption, but the protagonist flatly denies it, leaving the mage completely bewildered. Jerome argues that becoming a five-ring archmage would drastically elevate the military power of the White Castle, begging his lord to reconsider. Seal remains completely unmoved. He explains that while using external conduits would guarantee a temporary shortcut through the fifth ring, however, Seal warns him that relying on external crutches would permanently stunt his natural growth, tethering his future progress entirely to the availability of external reagents. To achieve a genuine evolutionary leap in sorcery, one must rely on absolute internal dedication and a thorough comprehension of core magical principles. Accumulated time and hard work are the only paths to genuine power. There are zero shortcuts. Jerome initially feels a flash of anger, but the warning strikes a chord. He remembers his late grandfather telling him that magic is a lifetime pursuit that completely rejects impatience. True enlightenment must be forged step by step, only then will the bottleneck naturally break away. Remembering his grandfather's identical advice, Jerome realizes Seal is entirely correct and bows in gratitude. The protagonist nods, shifting gears to ask if these high-grade crystals have any other functional applications. Jerome explains that they are incredibly versatile matrix links. They can store massive amounts of spell mana, power high-output defensive wards, or establish a direct communication link between two anchors. The last application instantly catches Seal's interest. Jerome explains that by imbuing the crystals with a specific frequency spell, even ordinary people devoid of mana can utilize them to speak across massive distances without needing a professional mage to channel the transmission. Given the sheer purity of this specific vein, the communication radius could easily extend from the White Castle all the way to empires across the ocean. Seal looks at him and asks if he knows the absolute core element required to effectively rule a nation, leaving the mage stumped. The protagonist explains that information velocity is what dictates the stability and control of any empire. The faction that commands the fastest intelligence networks can rewrite the fate of a country overnight. With that, he commands the wizard to process their entire stockpile into high-frequency communication stones. Once the matrices are carved, the Wyvern Knights take to the skies to run a series of field tests. The results are a staggering success. The voice transmissions remain crystal clear and instantaneous, completely unfazed by the extreme altitude and long distances. Effective immediately, these communication stones are designated as the official tactical network for the White Castle's administration. A voice pulls Seol from his thoughts. Sabina has just returned from her delivery run to the capital, and the team greets her warmly. An emergency council is immediately assembled to parse through the fresh intelligence she brought back from the capital, along with 2 highly confidential letters addressed directly to Seol. The first report from Edmund meticulously details the political shifts in the capital and adjacent empires. Although written with great precision, one highly concerning detail jumps out: a specific name that keeps appearing across multiple tracking files. When Seol inquires about Count Ainos, Captain Stewart is the only officer capable of providing intelligence, though he clarifies it stems primarily from loose rumors. He explains that travelers describe the Count as an absolute monster, a verified Grand Master of the Blade. The title causes a massive wave of anxious murmurs across the war room table. Seol raises his hand, instantly cutting through the noise and demanding absolute silence as he silently analyzes the underlying data. In this world's terminology, a Grandmaster represents someone who has unlocked the blossoming state, enabling them to manifest an ethereal, illusory blade. When Seol first arrived and researched local power levels, he was thoroughly underwhelmed to learn that barely a dozen fighters across the continent could manage basic sword aura. A world without worthy adversaries makes for a dull existence. Finding a cultivator who has touched the blossoming realm, even if still below his peak, is incredibly thrilling. Seol smiles. He's finally found a challenge worthy of his blade. Stewart then adds one highly specific, bizarre rumor. Legend states that whenever Ainos unsheathes his steel, a faint fragrance of plum blossoms drifts through the air. The specific detail leaves the protagonist utterly stunned. Back in his original world, the only martial discipline that produced a plum blossom scent was the signature style of the Manhwa sect. This confirms a staggering truth: he isn't the only soul who transmigrated from the Murim world. Seol's mind flashes back to his final campaign in his past, back when he was ruthlessly consolidating his iron grip over the Central Plains. He remembers his clash with Manhwa. Jaeon, the absolute master of the sect, had stepped forward to defend their legacy. Despite his formidable mastery, the old man was utterly crushed by Seol's overwhelming power. Bleeding out, Jaeon had spat that if his star disciple had been present, the outcome would be different. Seol had scoffed, asking if he meant the coward who had run away days prior. The dying master fiercely defended his heir, snapping that he hadn't fled. He had mysteriously vanished into thin air during deep isolation training. At the time, it sounded like a pathetic, desperate excuse from a defeated old man trying to salvage his dignity. But looking back now, Seol realizes that the disciple must have experienced a spatial transmigration identical to his own. Ainos is Manhwa's missing successor. Jerome pulls him out of his thoughts, asking about the contents of the second letter. Seol skims it and notes it's just a heads up that a royal inspection team has been dispatched to the White Castle. The entire council panics, making Seol wonder why they're getting so worked up over a standard audit. They all explain at once that a royal inspection team only ever means 2 things. Either it's high-profile royal tourism, or it's a front for inquisitors sent to execute hidden traitors to the crown. Regardless of the intent, they must prepare the castle for immediate arrival. When Jerome asks for the ETA, Seol blinks and notes they are scheduled to arrive around 1 o'clock this afternoon. Right on cue, loud trumpets blare from the surface gates. The inspection force has arrived, and standing arrogantly at the head of the platoon is Justin. Justin loudly demands that the local lord show his face to receive the royal delegation as protocol dictates. Seol casually strolls out into the courtyard, greeting the noble with a smirk while pointedly asking how his broken arm is healing up. Watching from the ramparts, the guards hold their breath as Seol stands unfazed before the armored lines. He looks past Justin, gesturing for a cloaked figure in the ranks to step forward. The hood falls back to reveal Princess Achilde. She sharply orders Justin to lower his aggressive posture, turning to greet Seol with a radiant smile. Seol escorts Achilde to inspect the crystal glacier he highlighted in his correspondence. The princess is absolutely enchanted, immediately asking to see the hot springs next. It is obvious the royal inspection team was merely a convenient excuse. She had relentlessly nagged her father to let her tag along just to sight Sai. Seol takes the opportunity to thank her for the lucky charm, teasing that it protected him through the brutal frost valleys. Blushing furiously, the princess turns around and strictly forbids the baronet from ever mentioning that embarrassing incident again. Every flustered gesture, every look, and every word mirrors Hwaryong so perfectly that Seol can't contain himself. Acting entirely on instinct, he pulls the princess tightly into a warm embrace. Achilde freezes, but instead of pulling away, she leans into his chest as he softly whispers how terribly he missed her. Right then and there, he makes the mistake of letting his emotions get the better of him and blurts out the name of his late love, Hwaryong. This completely shatters the magic of the moment and deeply upsets the princess. When she asks about the name, Seol is left speechless, unable to fix his blunders. The young woman explains that she was drawn to how he treated her, but now she needs to know if that affection was truly meant for her or for the woman named Hwaryong. Faced with her demand, the protagonist remains silent. Taking his silence as an answer, the princess turns on her heel and walks away, leaving him thoroughly embarrassed and tongue-tied by the whole ordeal. Seeking peace of mind, Seol wanders aimlessly, trying to reconcile the two distinct identities he must balance while searching for a way to explain things to the princess. His distracted wandering leads him into an isolated area, where a group of assassins seizes the opportunity to launch a surprise ambush. Back in his chambers, Justin calls the leader of the assassins to check on the operation, and the leader reports that it was a total success. Meanwhile, in the VIP guest quarters, the princess tries to soothe her anxiety, nursing what she believes is a broken heart. From outside, her guard announces a visitor, and she eagerly hopes it is the baronet. She rushes to the door in excitement, only to be shocked that it isn't Seol coming to apologize. Instead, Justin is standing in the hallway, having mercilessly slaughtered her guard, greeting her with a deeply unsettling smirk. When the princess tries to slam the door shut, Justin slashes the handles and shatters the entire door and its frame with his sword in an instant. Looking closely, the princess recognizes the weapon in his hands. It is a sword imbued with magic. Without losing her composure, the princess calls out Justin for his blatant disrespect, murdering the royal guards and forcing his way into her private chambers uninvited. Justin retorts that if she dares to stand in his way, she must face the consequences. He claims she was the rude one first for spurning his feelings and falling for a complete stranger like Seol. The princess rebukes him for using such an insignificant excuse to justify his outrageous behavior. She warns him that Baronet Seol will not take this behavior lightly. However, Justin smugly replies that it won't be an issue, as an elite assassin squad has already ambushed the baronet and ended his life. The princess is struck speechless by the news, but just as Justin reaches out to grab her, Seus lunges from outside, drags him through the window, and slams him mercilessly onto the pavement below. The protagonist turns to check if the princess is safe, but Justin's sword suddenly flies up, attacking him relentlessly before returning to its master's hand. As soon as Justin grips the hilt, a suit of magical armor manifests over his skin, and the young lord braces for battle. Sword in hand, Justin recalls discussing the need to eliminate Seol with his father, Duke Icarus, and begging to borrow his elite assassin squad. Sizing up the situation, Duke Icarus had explained that assassins alone wouldn't be enough to take down the baronet. More power was required. Pulling his sword from its pedestal, the Duke demonstrated the weapon's power, showing how it could move autonomously and harness the user's mana to forge a protective magical armor. Confident in his victory, Justin unleashes a relentless barrage of attacks. Seol manages to block every strike, even as Justin gloats about the blows he thinks are landing. Noticing the protagonist's wounds, the princess tries to help, but he orders her to stay back. He then leaps into the open area to face the young lord head-on. Saul acknowledges that Justin possesses unique power, but notes that he utterly lacks the spirit of a true winner. Justin dismisses it as mere talk and charges forward. Seol blocks the magic sword strikes effortlessly. The young lord hurls constant insults to throw the baronet off balance, but Seol calmly focuses on deflecting the onslaught while systematically giving ground. Seeing him retreat, Justin is delighted, assuming Seol is exhausted from fighting the assassins, making this the perfect moment to finish him. But as Justin lunges for a final blow, Seol counters instantly, piercing Justin's sword arm in the exact same spot he had wounded before. Suddenly, Seol announces that they have finally reached the right distance, the distance required to keep Princess Achilda safe. Justin realizes with shock that all of Seol's retreating movements were a calculated distraction to draw the fight away from the princess. Seol explains that a desperate, cornered rat will try to lash out at anyone nearby, regardless of its own strength. That was precisely why the princess needed to be protected from a vermin like him. The insult stings Justin deeply, and he charges again, only for Seol to block him and strike a devastating energy blow directly into his abdomen, shattering the magical armor completely. When a panicked Justin demands to know what happened, Seol explains that he will never be able to gather mana again because his mana core has been utterly destroyed. Gathering and channeling mana will be impossible for the rest of his life. Enraged, Justin tries to swing at the baronet, but Seol backhands him to the ground, telling him he can spend the rest of his days atoning for his sins. It is his turn to be the weak one for a change. As dawn heralds a new day, Seol immediately heads back to the princess. The crisis ended as quickly as it began. Justin and his entire cohort were swiftly arrested and locked away to face royal justice. The young lord still cannot comprehend why he cannot access his mana. Meanwhile, Seol notes how smoothly everything was resolved after throwing Justin and the conspirators behind bars. He prepares for his meeting with Princess Achilda, only to be taken aback by how closely she interacts with Jerome. Seol organizes search parties in the area where he lost his earring, mapping out the likely locations and offering a massive reward to whoever finds it first. Jerome tries to analyze the ongoing situation as he gets caught up on the details. According to Jerome's findings, the attackers were highly skilled professional killers, making it a miracle that the baronet escaped unscathed. Sal, however, dismisses their prowess, noting that their only real asset was their stealth. Once he forced them into a direct confrontation, they posed no real threat. The only reason the ambush succeeded was because they caught him completely off guard. Otherwise, he would have walked away unscathed. A soft voice behind him offers a sincere apology, noting that if she hadn't been a distraction, the baronet could have easily retrieved his heirloom without any complications. Turning around, they find themselves facing Princess Akilde. Jerome quickly pulls his hood down to conceal his face, while Seol reassures the young woman that saving her had nothing to do with losing the earring. The blame lies entirely with Justin. Looking for backup, Seol turns to Jerome, and it is at this exact moment that the princess recognizes him. To her absolute shock, he is Count Jerome von Kruin. Grabbing his hands, the young woman asks how on earth he ended up here, while Seol watches the interaction with a suspicious, watchful gaze. Jerome is genuinely glad to see the princess, though he finds her overly enthusiastic greeting a bit awkward. Meanwhile, the protagonist nudges him, pointedly remarking on how remarkably close the princess and the count seem to be. Jerome tactfully explains that it was nothing more than a polite greeting, but Seol counters that it was an incredibly warm welcome for mere acquaintances. Rents whispers to the princess that she ought to clear up the misunderstanding, especially when Seol asks if this count was the person she admired so much. The princess confirms it, explaining that the count was a true noble who deeply cared for the common people. When he was exiled to the harsh northern lands, she was devastated by his departure, and even more so when word arrived that he had vanished without a trace. Seol seems satisfied with her answer, while Jerome silently thanks him for diffusing the tension. However, the protagonist notices a detail. The princess used the past tense when referring to the count as the most important person she had ever met. She softly explains that her perspective changed because she has now met Seol. Her blunt confession catches both men completely off guard. Mortified by her own words, the princess abruptly breaks the silence by blurting out that they need to keep searching for the accessory, then rushes away. Rents hurries after her as the princess flees aimlessly to hide her blushing face. Catching her breath in a forest clearing, the princess spots a metallic glint buried in the snow. Reaching down, she pulls out the very pendant the baronet has been searching for. Examining it closely, she can't help but recall how agonized Seol looked when he accidentally called her by another woman's name. Rents teases her, pointing out that she is brooding over the baronet just like a lovesick maiden. Seeing the princess grow flustered, Rents reassures her, saying that Seol is bound to be thinking about her with the exact same intensity. The comment brings a smile back to the princess's face, though it makes her wonder about the mystery woman who managed to capture the heart of someone as remarkable as Seol. What kind of person could she be? A fragmented memory flashes in her mind. An ornate vase shattering on the floor, spilling a crushed lotus blossom. A furious lord demands the garbage be cleared, mocking a weeping girl who is pleading for true love, coldly reminding her that she belongs to a political fiancé and has no right to look at another man. The young woman tries to convince the man, who is none other than her father, that he must open his heart. She explains that the flower bloomed because she finally found her soulmate, a miracle that should make him reconsider this political marriage. His cold stance only proves that the Murim alliance matters more to him than his own blood. Just as he abandoned her mother, he is now callously casting his daughter aside. Tired of her emotional pleas, the man orders his guards to lock Hwaryong away under maximum security until her wedding day. The young woman is left in utter disbelief, deeply regretting ever trying to appeal to her father's humanity. Chirping birds at dawn wake the princess, who sits up trying to make sense of the dream that felt incredibly real. Stepping out, she takes a stroll by the hot springs while pondering the strange vision from the night before. Who was the woman from her dreams, and why did her face feel so heartbreakingly familiar? A deep voice snaps her out of her thoughts. Noticing her pale expression, steps closer to inquire what's wrong. She forces a fragile smile, assuring him everything is fine, though her profound sadness doesn't escape his sharp eyes. Taking the initiative, Seol invites her along for a walk to clear her head. He takes her to the Wyvern Cavern, leaving her awestruck by their sheer numbers, while Rents shakes violently with fear. Seol reassures the princess that these beasts have been raised from hatchlings and are perfectly accustomed to humans. Right on cue, Jerome arrives to report that all preparations are complete and they can depart whenever they are ready. The protagonist asks if the special surprise is ready, and Jerome pulls something from behind his back, placing it right in front of a utterly terrified Rents, who looks ready to faint. Apologizing for the sudden gesture, Jerome introduces Kondal, the Yeti warrior. The princess is amazed to see a living member of the legendary Snowfield tribe standing before her. She is delighted by how gentle the creature is, while Jerome offers a quiet sigh of relief. The protagonist praises Jerome, who recalls the backstory of the loyal creature the princess is now hugging so affectionately. With the preparations done, Seol calls for departure, mounting one of the large ice wyverns and extending a hand to help the princess up. Once everyone is secure, the great beasts take flight into the sky. The princess keeps her eyes tightly shut, trembling at the sheer Seol encourages her to look, and when she finally opens her eyes, she is greeted by a breathtaking sunrise stretching over a vast blanket of clouds, a truly magnificent sight. Seeing the princess relax, Seol accelerates their pace to reach their destination as quickly as possible, the city of Teston. Upon arrival, they are welcomed by Luya, who expresses her gratitude to the Lord of Karalung, though she playfully chides him for not sending advance notice so they could prepare a proper reception. Seol waives the formalities, focusing on business instead. He directs Luya to brief Jerome thoroughly on their local commerce operations. Meanwhile, he has arranged a dinner with Princess Akilda, expecting the trade report to be concluded by the time they return. The princess, staring out at the scenery, can hardly believe her eyes. The local landscape is absolutely stunning. Seol is pleased that she appreciates the arrangements. As the princess looks at the pendant resting on his chest, she feels an overwhelming sense of familiarity toward the flower preserved inside. A sudden flash from her dream reminds her exactly where she has seen it before. She becomes so lost in thought that Seol has to call her name several times to get her attention. Noticing his concerned expression, the princess confesses she has been troubled by a bizarre dream from the previous night, explaining that she saw individuals dressed in garments entirely foreign to this world. A dream in which she was a young woman of about 20 years of pale skin, with black hair and eyes, but with an expression of permanent sadness since the man she was talking to was forcing her to fulfill a political marriage, despite her having found her soulmate. A wholly strange dream. Seol listens intently, subconsciously clutching his lotus pendant. She adds that the most bizarre part was how she kept screaming a specific nickname, Gaga, in utter despair. Hearing the words, Seol's breath catches in his throat. Only one person in his entire existence had ever called him by that intimate pet name, his beloved Hwaryong. The mention of that nickname floods Seol's mind with memories of his past life in the martial world. The princess notices the sudden, heavy silence that blankets the baronet, but he quickly brushes it off, suggesting they sit down for their meal. The princess then asks him for a small favor. She requests that instead of addressing her by her title, he call her by her name directly. Seol agrees without hesitation. By the time they finish dining, Jerome arrives to inform the baronet that the negotiations with the Teston Guild have wrapped up successfully. Hearing the guild name, the princess expresses her confusion, noting that she has never heard of such a place in the Drake Kingdom. Seol clarifies that they are not currently within the borders of Drake, but have traveled to the Gaia Empire. This revelation shocks the princess, as Gaia is a formidable nation situated in the far northeast of the continent. As a powerful nation ruled by a female lineage for generations, it is widely known as the Land of Women. Its royal order of knights consists entirely of women and is renowned for a combat strength that rivals the elite wyvern riders of the Jeba Empire. The princess marvels at just how far they have flown. She voices her concern over whether their unannounced presence might trigger a major diplomatic incident between the two nations. Once her fears are calmed, Jerome proceeds with his report, explaining to Seol that the local populace is absolutely wild about the ice ogre leather. In fact, Luya suggested setting up a dedicated manufacturing facility right here in the city, allowing the Karalung Guild to craft finished goods from the ice ogre hides for regional distribution. Seol weighs the option. If raw hides are already selling exceptionally well, he wonders if turning them into consumers is truly necessary. Jerome explains that since the vast majority of the nobility here are women, designing tailored apparel and luxury handbags would spark an instant trend, driving profit margins sky high. Luya already has a master leather craftsman lined up back in Karalung. All that is missing is the baronet's official approval to launch the enterprise. The brilliant proposal reassures Seol that placing the young woman in charge of commercial operations was an excellent choice. He promises to supply all the raw hides required to establish the business. A grateful Jerome adds that the demand is so relentless that shipments completely sell out the very day they arrive. Suddenly, a commotion in the distance catches their attention. A massive column of thick smoke reveals a major fire raging nearby, right next to the Karalung Guild's warehouse, threatening the structure and their entire inventory. Without a second thought, Seol sprints directly toward the flames. Seol charges Jerome with keeping the princess safe while he hurries to protect the guild house. The princess offers to go with him, but he declines her aid, promising to handle it quickly. Refusing to sit idly by, she overrides his command and orders the count to escort her to the scene of the fire immediately. At the scene, a young artisan weeps as the fire devours her life's work, while nearby citizens frantically attempt to douse the flames and evacuate the area. Arriving at the building, C takes in the sheer scale of the inferno just as a voice calls out to him from behind. He turns to find the princess and Jerome, who completely ignored his instructions to stay behind. Suddenly, a faint cry for help echoes from within the burning structure. Reacting instantly, the baronet leaps directly into the raging fire, smashing through a second-story window to get inside. Harnessing his divine palm of white ice technique, he dampens the flames, pushing through the smoke until he locates the trapped young woman. After a quick check of her vitals, he hoists her onto his shoulder and searches for an exit just as the ceiling begins to cave in around them. As the structure crumbles, Seol unleashes a massive wave of absolute frost, completely freezing the entire building solid. This snuffs out the fire instantly, preserving the Karalung Guild headquarters. Outside, the crowd stares open-mouthed at the flash-frozen building, and Jerome realizes this is ninth circle ice magic. When Seol steps out, everyone erupts in cheers, relieved to see him unharmed. A fragmented memory flashes. Two figures sit at a table drinking, one plotting treason while the other demands to know who would dare challenge her authority. The vision blurs with images of the baronet until the young woman finally opens her eyes, waking up in an unfamiliar room. The sound of lively voices outside catches her attention. Stepping out, she finds a group of people sharing a meal in warm camaraderie. A young woman greets her warmly. When she asks where she is, they inform her that she is at the Karalung Guild headquarters, a name she recognizes immediately from the luxury leather trade dominating the capital's markets. Perplexed that no one seems to know her identity, she inquires about any local Gaia Imperial officials. They explain that the guild actually hails from a territory in the northern reaches of the Drake Kingdom. When she asks to thank her savior, Luya introduces her to Seol, Lord of Karalung, leaving the young woman stunned. Stepping forward, she introduces herself as Chiller, shocking everyone in the room. She is none other than the second princess of the Gaia Empire, a level 25 swordmaster who commands the nation's elite royal knights. Luya immediately bows in apology for their informal behavior, but Chiller graciously waves it off, noting they aren't subject to her empire. Princess Achilde remains completely speechless, deeply aware that an unannounced imperial princess being here could trigger a massive diplomatic incident. Chiller turns to Seol, offering a grand reward for saving her life on the condition that he escorts her back to her palace. With a polite bow, Seol declines the offer, explaining that he must return to his own territory immediately. His blunt refusal catches Princess Chiller off guard, and everyone at the table holds their breath, knowing that spurning a royal reward is often taken as a grave insult. Luya quickly steps in to diffuse the tension, changing the subject by asking the princess how she ended up trapped in the burning warehouse. Chiller's expression darkens as she names the culprit, Baron Dayton, a nobleman she had previously championed who had foully betrayed her. Even so, she downplays the matter publicly to avoid showing any vulnerability. She reveals that it started as a covert poisoning attempt, which the conspirators tried to cover up by torching the building she was in to guarantee her demise. Determined not to be indebted, the princess insists on rewarding her savior. Seol looks at her and asks if she is truly willing to give whatever he requests. Just then, the princess's stomach lets out a loud growl. Seol wryly points out that the Grand Princess of Gaia seems to be the one in dire need of assistance. Feeling mocked, Chiller blushes. Seol swiftly shifts gears, ordering her to sit down and eat since she clearly hasn't had a meal in over 24 hours. With nothing left to say, the princess digs into the food, trying to figure out this mysterious man who scorns royal wealth and treats royalty with borderline insubordination. A magnificent sword mounted on the wall catches her expert eye. When she asks who it belongs to, Seol claims ownership. As an elite warrior, her curiosity is piqued, and she challenges this foreigner to a sparring match after the meal. Seol, however, flatly refuses, stating he has absolutely no interest in dueling opponents weaker than himself. The blatant insult infuriates the princess. She holds the coveted rank of swordmaster, an honor she fought bitterly to achieve and defended against countless foreign knights who dared to look down on her for being a woman. Chiller scoffs that his refusal is nothing but pure cowardice, shocking everyone at the table. Amused, the protagonist changes his mind and accepts the challenge, warning her that she might get hurt. Stepping outside, Princess Chiller dictates the terms of the engagement. They will duel under strict knightly regulations, restrict their mana usage, and victory goes to whoever forces a submission first. Seol nods in agreement, while Jerome quietly reminds him that she is an imperial princess of Gaia and deserves due diplomatic courtesy. The protagonist thanks his strategist and tells him to stand back, while the princess continues to goad him. To Chiller, he is just another arrogant man who underestimates her gender, and she intends to make him kneel and beg for mercy just like all the others. Right here, right now, she is going to make him bite the dust. The princess grips her hilt, deliberately angling her blade to flash sunlight into his eyes before launch a ferocious opening assault. Without softening his stance, Seol parries the lethal thrust at the absolute last microsecond. Startled by his reflexes, she immediately spins into a sweeping reverse strike aimed at Seol's blind spots. But he deflects it effortlessly. Creating just enough separation, he systematically dismantles her aggressive combos. The princess unleashes a tireless barrage, yet Seol barely moves an inch from his core position, casually redirecting her momentum with minimal effort. His defensive deflections are flawless, showcasing a level of martial supremacy that completely eclipses her standing as a swordmaster. Chiller's offense grows desperate as she mixes lethal kicks into her swordplay. Seol recognizes her technical skill, comparing her relentless momentum to a master of the piercing spear style in the realm of harmonization, known for generating a wild, unending avalanche of strikes. On an open battlefield, he might have let the duel drag out to test her further. Here in the middle of the city, however, their collateral force risks leveling the local buildings. Deciding to wrap things up, Seol shifts into an offensive stance to end it in a single motion. Sensing his sudden shift in intent, the princess braces herself and charges. Seol cleanly bypasses her guard, delivers a calculated strike to her abdomen, and catches her gently by the nape of her neck before sweeping her legs out from under her, pinning her instantly. She stares up in absolute shock at the overwhelming prowess of the man who just effortlessly disarmed her. Seol rests the tip of his blade against her throat, calmly waiting for her submission. Princess Chiller flatly refuses to yield, loudly demanding a rematch. Jerome tries to intervene diplomatically, but she threatens to file an official state protest against the Drake Kingdom if she isn't granted another round. Seol bluntly cuts her off, stating that a true warrior knows their limits and accepts defeat gracefully. The princess's response, however, only reflects that she is a child. Annoyed, the princess rises from the floor and tries to hit her opponent with her quickest attack, but is surprised when she does not notice. Without her even tracking his movement, Seol has placed the tip of his sword precisely between her eyes. Recognizing her utter defeat, her knees buckle and she sinks to the floor. Seol lambasts her for such shameful behavior, pointing out how disgraceful it is for a princess of Gaia to treat the savior who risked his life for her with such disrespect. He adds that her childish ego blinded her to the fact that he was holding back immensely just to preserve diplomatic relations with a neighboring nation, calling her conduct thoroughly pathetic. Chiller can only stare at the floor, struggling to comprehend how she was defeated so soundly. She had dedicated her entire life since childhood to mastering the blade, striving to become the ultimate shield of Gaia to protect her empire from all threats. Stunned that a random wanderer could disarm her so effortlessly, Akildi catches Seol's eye. The master offers a final piece of dry advice to Princess Chiller, warning her to evaluate her opponents more carefully before drawing steel, before turning around to resume his stroll alongside the Drake Princess. As they walk away, Seol instructs Jerome to purchase several fine local swords to take back to the White Palace. Once the couple is out of earshot, Princess Chiller corners Jerome and Luja, demanding to know the identity of the woman with Seol. Jerome carefully deflects, stating only that she is a high-born noble from a deeply revered family in the kingdom. Satisfied for now, the princess requests carriage to return to the imperial palace, which Luya quickly arranges. Left with her thoughts, Chiller feels a profound sense of helplessness at encountering someone so overwhelmingly superior, wondering how different her path might have been had she met a man like him sooner. Upon arriving at her palace, she dispatches her imperial guards to arrest Dayton, the man behind her assassination attempt. However, when they storm his estate, they find him dead in the basement, clutching a torn fragment of a letter stating that his family had been taken hostage to force his compliance. The mastermind's name was likely on the missing piece, which the killer undoubtedly destroyed after silencing Dayton. While subsequent investigations yielded no concrete proof of a higher conspiracy, Princess Chiller strongly suspects one specific individual, Princess Ruan. As the first in line to the throne of the Gaia Empire, Princess Ruan has been invited to tea by her younger sister Chiller, who casually brings up the recent attempt on her life orchestrated by Dayton. Ruan acts utterly shocked by the news. When Chiller mentions her mysterious savior, Ruan feigns outrage over how calmly her sister is treating treason and orders Dayton's immediate execution. Chiller quietly informs her that she already went to confront him, only to find someone had silenced him first. She notes that the mastermind behind the hit was almost certainly the one who tied up the loose end. Ruan pulls her sister into a warm embrace, lamenting that she should have kept closer watch, though she notes no one expected a sword master to be targeted. She voices her relief that Chiller survived, even as her inner thoughts curse the failure of the operation. Returning the hug, Chiller wonders if she will ever truly be safe. She struggles to accept how they went from being inseparable children to a reality where her own older sister wants her dead. Longing for the days when they were true comrades, she wonders what her enigmatic savior would do in a predicament like this. The thought of Seol prompts her to make a sudden request to her sister. She wishes to attend King Tomilov's upcoming birthday jubilee as part of Gaia's official imperial delegation. Princess Ruan is instantly intrigued, knowing her warrior sister usually despises formal court events. She deduces that the mysterious savior must reside within the Drake Kingdom and that Chiller is eager to see him again. Caught off guard, Chiller flusteredly denies it, while her older sister laughs at the obvious secret. Back at the White Palace, Seol reviews his domain's security. Following Justin's failed assassination attempt, a stringent new protocol was implemented. The Ice Wyverns and the Ice Flowers, Kara Lung's two most critical strategic assets, were classified as high-value state property. Consequently, all foreign trade offices and public affairs were moved to the Outer Castle, the territory's former seat of government. Today, he prepares to see Princess Achille trying to tune out Jerome's panicked worrying over Seol's blunt treatment of Princess Chiller. As he leaves his chambers, his strategist corners him yet again, insisting they bolster their defenses and brace the military for a retaliatory strike from the furious Princess Chiller. Akilda also voices her concerns, noting that insulting a prominent princess of the Gaia Empire could easily spark a major international dispute due to the actions of a single Drake noble. Seal simply shakes his head. He recognized the look in Chiller's eyes. It was the unmistakable gaze of a true martial artist. Her pride would never allow her to run to her government over a sparring defeat. She would insist on settling the score with her own two hands. He assures the princess there is nothing to worry about, as he made his point clear enough to keep Chiller from acting recklessly. Changing the subject, he hands Akilda a mana stone, explaining it allows long-distance communication so he can come to her aid instantly in an emergency. This transmission stone can bridge the massive expanse between the capital's royal palace and the White Palace. The princess looks skeptical, but Seal guarantees it will work flawlessly and promises to answer her call without delay. Rents reminds the princess that their carriage is waiting. Seal quietly advises Akilda to keep the stone safe and use it whenever she needs him. Furthermore, he arranges for Jake to provide a discreet aerial escort, ensuring Justin cannot attempt another ambush on her journey back to the capital. The princess is deeply touched by how meticulously he stands guard over her safety. As her carriage rolls away, Seal stares after it, acutely aware of the vast gap in their social standings. To truly stand by her side as an equal, he must elevate his nobility ranks. Accompanied by Jerome, he heads down to the subterranean dungeons, where his strategist is shocked to find the assassin squad that had targeted Seal. Instead of executing them, Seal had quietly subdued and imprisoned Justin's entire elite team, letting the public believe they were dead. After 10 days without sustenance, the captives are in a wretched state, falling far short of the iron resilience found in the killers of the Central Plain. Out of the entire group, only 2 show real promise. Stepping out, Seal orders Jerome and Stewart to feed them, revealing his plan to subject these operatives to a rigorous training program to bend them to his cause. When Jerome asks why he spared them, Seal explains that he intends to harness their lethal skills and retrain them into his own private Black Ops unit. The strategist is stunned, unable to comprehend his lord's endgame unless it involves shadow operations against the Gaia Empire. Alternatively, combining them with his Ice Wyvern squadrons would give him the perfect vanguard to stage a coup in the Drake Kingdom, a thought only Seal harbors. Jerome can't hide his anxiety regarding the sheer military power Seal is quietly amassing. He already commands an aerial beast fleet, and now he is building an elite spy network. He gently cautions Seal that the recent royal inspection only went smoothly because of the princess's favor. Anyone looking from the outside would assume these massive military preparations belong to a warlord planning high treason. Seal, however, tunes out Jerome's warnings. His mind is focused entirely on the princess's invitation to meet at King Tomilov's birthday celebration. He plans to leverage this high society event as his formal stepping stone into the capital's inner circle. Hearing this grand ambition spoken aloud leaves his strategist floored, while Seal continues calculating exactly how to secure his future alongside the princess. To be a worthy match, he needs to rise to the rank of Duke, which means dealing with a gauntlet of political and martial adversaries. A shadow squad answerable only to him is the ultimate tool to protect his flank. Turning his attention to Stewart, the protagonist asks for an update on the Blizzard Knights. Stewart assures him that the men are drawn up outside, awaiting his command. Seal then addresses the captured assassins, offering them a simple choice: swear absolute fealty and execute his commands to the letter, or die by his hand in this frozen dungeon. To test their resolve, he issues a challenge. Noting that their current skills are pathetic, he unveils a massive cache of weapons for them to use. He orders them to march out of the cell and attempt to break through the elite knights stationed in the courtyard. 3 weeks fly by, and the challenge issued to the rogue assassins evolves into a brutal joint training operation, as the Blizzard Knights are mobilized under the exact same directive: hunt down the assassins. The parameters of the wargame are straightforward. Every soldier receives a physical crest, and if it is stolen or broken, they are officially registered as a casualty. The faction that loses all its badges is starved of rations for the day. Watching from a high terrace, Seal surveys the simulated battlefield when a sudden flare catches his eye. To ensure absolute compliance, Jerome has placed a tracking spell on every trainee, which triggers a bright light beacon the moment anyone tries to cross the boundary lines. Seal blurs into motion, easily intercepting the escapee, whom he recognizes as Miller, marking the youth's 10th breakout attempt. From above, Seal dryly points out his failure, but the stubborn assassin tries to force his way through anyway, only to be promptly knocked out from behind by the assassin leader. Intrigued by the young man's obsession, Seal asks the commander why this particular recruit is so desperate. The commander explains that Miller is driven entirely by a blood feud. Unlike the others, he didn't join the syndicate for gold but solely to acquire the skills to avenge his massacred family. Worse, the high noble responsible for the slaughter will be attending King Tomilov's upcoming birthday gala. This gives Seal pause. When Miller regains consciousness, he finds himself in a private room. Seal is waiting for him, calmly pointing out that crashing a royal gala packed with hundreds of elite knights and archmages is suicide. He tells Miller his reckless plot is mathematically impossible. Miller is stunned that Seol discovered his past, but fiercely retorts that vengeance is his sole reason for drawing breath. He is entirely willing to throw his life away as long as he can drag his enemy down to hell with him. Seol counters that he won't even get within 10 paces of his target, meaning he will die a dog's death without accomplishing a thing. However, Seol offers an alternative, noting that he will be attending the gala as an honored guest. When a confused Miller asks what he means, the protagonist lays out a contract. Seol promises to deliver his vengeance on a silver platter, provided Miller swears absolute, unconditional loyalty to him. Sending a catch, Miller asks why a powerful lord would choose him over far more seasoned veterans. Seol replies that reaching a special agent rank at just 25 demonstrates exceptional latent potential. He tells the youth that with proper guidance, he can become a terrifying weapon, making him a perfect fit for the elite unit he is forging. With the memory of his slaughtered family burning in his mind, Miller sinks to his knees and swears absolute fealty to Seol. Satisfied with the contract, Seol tells him they depart for the capital in a few days and orders him to prepare. Suddenly, the door bursts open, and Sabina walks in to report on a new batch of fruit and ice treats. Caught off guard, Miller is instantly spellbound by her striking beauty. Sabina quickly exits alongside Seol to go over the inventory. Meanwhile, back in the capital at the grand estate of House Icarus, the Duke is furiously berating his son for the total disaster of his unsanctioned operation, which even resulted in losing their priceless mana sword. When Justin tries to make an excuse, his father barks at him to shut his mouth. Acknowledging that Seol is a far more dangerous opponent than anticipated, the Duke summons Viscount Rosling, tasking him with eradicating the northern upstart. Rosling confidently guarantees he will wipe Seol off the map without fail. Back at the White Palace, a strategic briefing is underway. Captain Mage stands before the council to present his latest administrative report. He states that approximately 6,000 refugees from the Karalung tribes have arrived near the border city of Thoth and require immediate relocation within their territory. Additionally, 6 rare ice wyvern eggs have been successfully harvested. Shifting gears, Seol announces there is a far more pressing domestic crisis to resolve. As the room leans in expectantly, he deadpans that he still has no idea what to get the king for his birthday. The anticlimactic announcement leaves the commanders completely bewildered, but Seol tells them this is a major political issue. He explains that his tribute must completely outshine whatever Duke Icarus brings, opening the floor to suggestions. Max recommends gifting premium ice ogre leather, noting it is a massive hit among high-tier merchants and provides unmatched insulation for the fast-approaching winter season. Seol immediately vetoes the idea, dismissing it as cliché. Osborne quickly suggests gifting her rare flora instead. Noting Seol's irritation at what sounds like a basic courtship routine, Osborne clarifies he is referring to frost orchids, which only bloom on the highest frozen peaks of Karalung, making them a priceless commodity across the empire. Suddenly, Jerome chimes in with an alternative. He points out that those flowers require a climate of absolute frost and would wither instantly in the southern capital. Stuart speaks up, suggesting there is only one tribute truly fitting for the occasion, but before he can finish, the door flies open. Jake rushes in with urgent news. Viscount Rosling has completely blockaded all land routes passing through the city of Thoth. The protagonist asks if they can bypass the blockade using their aerial transport, but Jerome explains that the wyverns have strict weight limits, making the trade roads indispensable. Jerome connects the dots. By choking off the roads right before the royal celebration, the Viscount is clearly planning to sabotage Seol's attendance at the gala. Seol smiles coldly, realizing a minor Viscount wouldn't dare act so brazenly on his own. He is undoubtedly moving on orders from Duke Icarus as retaliation for what happened to Justin. Given the circumstances, Seol notes there is only one logical response to the Viscount's provocation. Jerome asks if he is seriously contemplating an official turf war. He reminds Seol that while a territorial war between landed lords is perfectly legal under imperial decree, it requires submitting formal documentation to the crown before hostilities can officially commence. An exception to the rule is if the war ends so quickly that the news does not reach the king in time, leaving only the opportunity to declare the war over by forcing the opponent's surrender. Such an idea seems perfect to the protagonist as it allows him to test his entire war apparatus. Treating this as a live combat trial, he orders Stuart to leave a bare minimum garrison at the castle and mobilize the main army for total deployment. He tells Max to dispatch Miller for immediate reconnaissance inside Thoth and commands Jake to ready their air division. Jake looks hesitant, pointing out they only have 20 fully grown wyverns. Seol looks at him and tells him to have absolute faith in his knights and the power of the ice wyverns they ride. The war council breaks into high gear. Seol instructs Jerome to draft the official declaration against Viscount Rosling, but Jerome hesitates, pointing out that the Viscount is still holding their 6,000 citizens hostage inside the city. Jerome warns that a preemptive strike is highly reckless, especially since the standing garrison of Thoth outnumbers Karalung 10 to 1. without even accounting for Duke Icarus's personal legions. After weighing the numbers, Seol confidently assures Jerome that it takes at least 48 hours for the capital to mobilize reinforcements, and he will have the entire territory wrapped up long before then. Seeing his strategist waver, Seol firmly reminds him that as the mastermind of the White Palace, he must look absolute certain in front of the men. His words reignite Jerome's confidence, making him believe that Seol truly can pull off miracles that are impossible for anyone else. Stepping into the courtyard, Seol calls for his mount and delivers a stirring speech to his gathered army, officially announcing their march on Thoth. Meanwhile, inside Thoth, the 6,000 Karlung citizens have been thrown into pens on Viscount Rosling's orders, as his captain of the guard briefs him on the containment status. The captain notes that foreign merchants have completely fled the trade gates. By severing Thoth's trade roads, Rosling aims to starve out Seol's frozen domain, which relies heavily on southern agricultural imports to stock its winter granaries. This would trigger a severe famine, while simultaneously forcing Seol to miss the king's mandatory birthday jubilee. Skipping a royal summons would destroy Seol's standing at court, providing the perfect excuse for the crown to strip of his titles. Rosling plans to annex the territory for himself, vastly expanding his own domain. By all accounts, it is a flawless strategy to crush the upstart for crossing Duke Icarus, who wields more practical power than the king himself. Rosling gleefully anticipates that delivering Seol's head will earn him a promotion to the rank of Marquis from a grateful duke. Suddenly, a massive shadow blankets the room. Before anyone can react, a titanic beast smashes violently through the grand window. It is an ice wyvern, a creature completely unheard of this far south. Perched atop its neck is a calm figure. When the terrified guards demand his identity, he introduces himself as the Lord of Karlung. Wasting no time on pleasantries, Seol draws a scroll from his vest and flings it directly at the Viscount. He coldly announces it is an official declaration of war, giving him exactly 1 hour to prepare his defenses. By the time the castle garrison storms the room, Seol has already soared back into the clouds, leaving a stunned court staring at the open sky. Furious and embarrassed, Rosling strikes his guards for their incompetence in allowing an enemy to infiltrate his personal chambers. He turns to his chief administrator, Volmer, ordering him to force the 6,000 captured Karlung citizens into Thoth military armor and chain them to the front lines as human shields. He cackles, imagining the look of despair on Seol's face when he realizes he has slaughtered his own people. Tearing Seol's scroll to shreds, the Viscount scoffs at the absolute audacity of the northern upstart challenging his veteran garrison. Stepping out onto his balcony, he delivers a grand speech to his assembled legions, announcing the outbreak of war and promising immense riches and land grants to whoever slays the most enemies in the coming clash. Unbeknownst to the tyrant, every single word is transmitted directly to Seol. Miller has already successfully infiltrated the castle chambers, using a communication stone to broadcast the entire conversation in real time. Along Thoth's massive battlements, the garrison stands at the ready. Right outside the gates, the terrified Karlung citizens are lined up in military uniform, serving as helpless cannon fodder. The confused captives weep, completely unaware of the trap, while Rosling watches gleefully from above, eager for Seol to accidentally butcher his own subjects. The second the hour marks, Seol orders the assault. The defenders look up in absolute horror as a full squadron of elite wyvern riders punches through the cloud layer, raining massive boulders down like artillery onto the city's battlements. The human shields close their eyes, bracing for death, but a massive magical barrier suddenly manifests over them, deflecting the debris. At the center of the field stands Jerome, directing his forces and alerting their vanguard to secure the disguised Karlung civilians safely away from the wall. He orders his heavy cavalry to rapidly extract the innocent hostages while commanding the main infantry to breach the shattered sections of the outer wall, showing Thoth the true, terrifying power of the Blizzard Knights. The breach is absolute and devastating. The cavalry tears through the defenses, crushing any resistance in their path. Up on the keep, Rosling stares in disbelief as his human shield gambit is effortlessly dismantled. Seol's military forces are demonstrating overwhelming strategic superiority, decimating his frontline legions in minutes. Suddenly, Seol drops directly from the sky, landing heavily onto the main battlements. A detachment of guards charges him in unison, but with a casual wave of his hand, Seol unleashes an icy shockwave that instant freezes them into solid blocks of ice. With the elite guard wiped out, only the Viscount remains. True to his cowardly nature, Rosling flees into the nearby woods to save his skin. His escape is cut short when Lilith, Seol's massive personal wyvern, drops directly in front of his path. Terrified by the predatory apex beast, his remaining personal bodyguards instantly scatter, abandoning their lord to save themselves. With Lilith pinning the tyrant down, Seol steps out from the treeline and signals his mount to ease up. Finding himself cornered, Rosling falls to his knees, weeping and begging for mercy. He confesses his total defeat, frantically babbling that he was merely a pawn following the direct dictates of Duke Icarus. Jake arrives on his wyvern, handing Seal an intercepted emergency dispatch that Rosling had tried to send to the Duke, begging for imperial reinforcement. Realizing his deceit is completely laid bare, Rosling pales. Seal looks down at him and pronounces judgment, sentencing him to death for the cruel oppression of the Karalung people. As Seal raises his hand to execute the sentence, a sudden magical barrier materializes around the Viscount. Looking around for the source, Jerome steps out from the brush. Seal frowns, questioning why his strategist is interfering with the execution. But Jerome urgently explains that under imperial law, only the king holds the authority to sentence a landed noble to death. If Seal summary executes a peer of the realm, it will give the court aristocracy the legal leverage they need to label him a rogue warlord and execute him. Hearing the legal defense, Rosling regains his smug demeanor, urging Seal to listen to his strategist while trying to stall for time. Just then, his administrative right-hand Volmer emerges from the forest path. Believing his fallback plan has succeeded, Rosling sneers at Seal, boasting that his emergency message wasn't the only move he made. He arrogantly lectures Seal that a lawful territorial war requires a crown-appointed observer to oversee the conflict and ensure absolute adherence to imperial regulations. He mocks Seal for launching a reckless blitzkrieg without following due protocol, revealing that he had sent Volmer to notify the palace of the illegal assault before any formal surrender occurred. This technicality renders Seal's campaign an act of rogue aggression, putting him in deep trouble with the crown. Jerome's heart sinks, cursing the bureaucratic trap that threatens to derail their entire victory. Seal, however, simply chuckles, looking completely unbothered. He turns to the approaching administrator and orders him to shed his disguise. The figure peels away a highly realistic magic mask, revealing the young assassin Miller. Rosling drops his jaw in horror. Seal explains to the baffled tyrant that under subsection law, any noble caught actively violating imperial human rights can be targeted in a retaliatory crusade without advance notice to the crown. He reveals that Miller had long since uncovered absolute proof of Rosling running an illegal slave trade, exploiting the captured Karalung populace. Realizing his treasonous enterprise is documented, Rosling knows he is doomed, if not by Seal then by Duke Icarus for failing so catastrophically. In a desperate surge of adrenaline, he scrambles to run. But Seal's frost magic roots his feet instantly. Seal delivers a crushing punch straight to his jaw, launching him across the clearing into a massive oak tree. With the tyrant unconscious, Seal officially declares the conflict concluded, annexing Thoth into Karalung territory. Following the battle, the transition proceeds without a hitch. The disgraced Viscount is stripped of his assets and exiled with nothing but the clothes on his back, while Thoth is formally integrated under Karalung's direct governance. When Seal tries to appoint Jerome to oversee the newly acquired city, his strategist flatly and categorically refuses to take on any more paperwork. When Seal presses him for an alternative solution, since the strategic zone requires competent management, Jerome suggests scouring the local administration to promote Volmer, the actual right-hand administrator who knows Thoth's inner workings inside out. The arrangement was deemed politically sound by the council. However, since Volmer was an old administrative loyalist of Ros, Seal assigned a mandatory honor guard of 2 Karalung knights to shadow him, ensuring Count Blizzard received hourly updates on the territory. Months passed and the Drake Kingdom erupted into celebration for King Tomilov's birthday festival, with high lords arriving from every corner of the empire. At the palace gates, the royal guard is busy cross-checking invitations and verifying identities when a colossal shadow suddenly blankets the courtyard. Looking up, the guards gasp as a squadron of massive ice wyverns descends from the heavens, landing heavily right in front of the main archway. Panicked, the gate guards reach for their alarm horns, but a commanding voice orders them to halt. Looking closer, they recognize the legendary warrior standing at the vanguard, Seal, Lord of Karalung. The guards stare in awe, recalling the famous commoner swordsman who saved His Majesty's life and won a peerage. Pulling a wax-sealed envelope from his coat, Seal calmly presents his official royal invitation to the king's birthday jubilee. Inside the grand ballroom, the lavish gala is in full swing. High-ranking dignitaries from both the Drake Kingdom and neighboring empires have gathered in a dazzling display of wealth to offer their finest congratulations to King Tomilov. The herald loudly announces the arrival of Baronet Seal, and an immediate wave of hushed whispers sweeps across the ballroom as the young lord enters, commanding the room with his powerful, striking presence. The noblewomen are instantly captivated by his sharp, handsome features, while the noblemen critically eye the upstart warrior who saved the crown, whispering about rumors that he can wield fifth circle magic. As he reaches the foot of the stairs, a familiar voice calls out to him. Turning, he finds Princess Chiller, who has successfully arrived as Gaia's official envoy. She breaks the ice by inquiring about his health, waiting expectantly for him to ask how she has been. However, Seal shows absolutely zero interest in her well-being, remaining completely silent and prompting her to pout his aloofness. Recalling Jerome's frantic etiquette lessons, Seal smoothly takes a glass from a passing waiter and offers it to her, noting that court protocol dictates ladies drink first, effectively derailing her complaint. The herald's voice booms across the hall once more, announcing the arrival of Princess Daphne of the Hasten Kingdom, accompanied by her fiancé, Count Inos. The high-profile couple draws the gaze of everyone in the room. Guests marvel at the princess's ethereal beauty, while trading hush gossip about the count's lethal reputation. Hearing his title, Seol focuses his gaze, curious to size up a man revered as a legendary swordmaster in this world. Noticing his intense focus, Chiller asks if he shares a history with the Hasan general. Seol simply replies that they have never met. Watching the newcomers closely, Chiller approaches the Hasan delegation and casually asks Inos about the girl who usually travels with him. The Count chuckles, replying that she has a penchant for dramatic entrances, and advising her to keep an eye on the door, as she will likely arrive shortly. Finally, the herald calls for absolute silence to announce the guest of honor. King Tomalov steps into the ballroom, flanked by his two royal daughters. Catching sight of the stunning young woman walking at the king's right hand, Princess Chiller's eyes widen as she puts the pieces together. She is Princess Achilde. As the royal family takes their seats, Achilde spots Seol standing in the crowd, but her smile freezes when she notices he is deep in conversation with the gorgeous Princess of Gaia. Her blood instantly boils, and she struggles to mask a sharp pang of jealousy. Once all the grand dignitaries are seated, the high nobility lines up to pay formal respects to the king, who is thoroughly delighted by the immense turnout. Princess Achilde gently nudges her father, reminding him of the tributary offerings, and the presentation of gifts officially begins. Duke Icarus is the first to step forward, presenting an ornate velvet chest to the sovereign. When the king opens it, he finds a beautifully crafted band. The duke proudly explains that the ring shields the wearer from any spell of the fourth circle or below. The ballroom erupts in awed gasps, as such a rare enchanted artifact is something most nobles have only read about. Noticing Seol's completely unbothered expression, Princess Chiller leans in to whisper that ancient enchanted items are practically priceless. She explains that they can only be forged by legendary wizards of the ninth circle or above, and since no such magi exist in this modern era, the Duke's gift is a monumental display of wealth. Expressing his gratitude, the king announced his delight with the excellent gift the Duke had brought him. Then, in order of precedence, the rest of the nobles presented their gifts before His Majesty. Yet, as valuable as they were, they could not overshadow the magnificent present that Duke Icarus had delivered to the king. Next on the list was Baron Seol, who stepped forward humbly with a large chest for His Majesty. Upon opening it, they revealed the hide of an ice ogre personally hunted by the protagonist. The king was thoroughly pleased and announced his desire to have it tailored into warm winter garments. Seol apologized to the king for the humble nature of his offering. Meanwhile, Duke Icarus wondered in silence how anyone could present something so insignificant. However, Baron Seol continued his speech, announcing that since it was such a modest gift, he had decided to bring a second token of appreciation to His Majesty, presenting another chest. When King Tomalov opened it, he found 3 large eggs, which the protagonist explained were beast eggs. Everyone in the hall was astonished to see such an unusual gift on such an important occasion. Duke Icarus was the first to step forward, loudly protesting the affront Baron Seol had just committed against the royal family. He ordered the guards to arrest the baron and throw him out of the royal castle. Intervening immediately, the king ordered the guards to stand down. The king then asked Baron Seol the reason behind such a bizarre present. Seol explained that these were no ordinary beast eggs, they were ice wyvern eggs. This revelation left the entire hall speechless, leaving both the duke and the king stunned by the treasure before them. Hearing Baron Seol's announcement, everyone was shocked because such a find was practically impossible. An ice wyvern is a rare breed of beast found only in Karalung, growing up to 1.5 times the size of a standard wyvern. Many had tried to domesticate them over the centuries, but their ferocious nature made it impossible. Obtaining one of their eggs was a monumental task, and raising them was even more complicated, leading most to write them off as untamable wild beasts. Yet a squad of these creatures would provide incredible military might to any nation. Historically, the weak kingdom of Jeva evolved into a massive empire by conquering rivals using their wyvern knights. If the Drake Kingdom could domesticate ice wyverns, their military strength would grow exponentially. The king thanked the baron for his gift but noted the extreme difficulty of raising a wyvern to adulthood. The protagonist acknowledged this reality. Placing his fingers to his lips, Seol let out a sharp whistle and called out a single name, Lilith. Everyone trembled in panic as a massive figure loomed outside, watching them through the grand windows of the great hall. Seol explained that this was an ice wyvern he had raised since it hatched. He offered to pass on his specialized breeding techniques to the royal handlers. The crucial step was ensuring that the hatchling imprinted on the king's face the moment it broke its shell, ensuring its absolute loyalty as it grew. The other 2 eggs were presents for the princesses. This would grant them their own loyal guardians, ensuring the entire royal family was protected by the might of the ice wyverns. The king was deeply moved by the baron's foresight in considering his daughter's safety as well, praising him for his noble intentions. He declared that with these creatures, the Drake Kingdom would rise to power just like the old Jeba Empire, calling it the greatest gift he had ever received. Baron Seol bowed, thanking His Majesty for the high praise. Watching the exchange, Princess Akilde finally understood Seol's cryptic message. He had told her to be patient and keep a close eye on upcoming events. In the crowd, Duke Icarus stood in disbelief at his rival's luck. Refusing to lose this clash, he stepped forward and requested permission to address the crown, announcing that Baron Seol had marched troops into Viscount Rosling's territory. As the king demanded context, the Duke explained that the Baron had instigated an unauthorized territorial war, sparking a wave of murmurs throughout the hall. Because he had failed to notify the crown as mandated by law, the Duke argued that Seol deserved severe punishment for slaughtering an illicit campaign. While the king processed the accusation, Princess Aegilde worried for the Baron's reputation, and the Duke secretly celebrated the imminent downfall of his rival. Breaking the tension, Seol raised his voice and respectfully asked the king if the slave trade was legal anywhere within the Drake Kingdom. The king firmly confirmed that slavery was strictly prohibited. Pulling a scroll from his coat, the protagonist announced he held a detailed ledger of Rosling's illegal operations, shocking the room. Viscount Rosling had been abducting citizens of Kurulung to sell into slavery, an atrocity no true lord could ignore. Such a crime would infuriate anyone. The revelation blindsided the Duke, who had been completely unaware of the Viscount's illicit operations. Princess Akilde then reminded the court that royal law permitted a noble to wage immediate territorial warfare without prior notification if a major law was actively being violated. The king recognized the validity of the Baron's crusade. Exonerating him of all charges, the king declared that the Thoth territory would officially be annexed into the region of Kurulung, leaving the room stunned. Cotton smoothly approached the throne, whispering to the king that given the massive expansion of Baron Seol's domain, it was only proper to elevate his noble standing. Acknowledging the advice, the king commanded the protagonist to kneel. Before the silent, watchful eyes of the court, he granted Seol the title of Count, directly under the furious gaze of Duke Icarus, who could not believe how disastrously his scheme had backfired. Unable to stomach the situation any longer, the Duke stormed out of the banquet. Meanwhile, Count Ainos watched the unfolding drama with keen interest. Late that night, Seol managed to slip away to a terrace for a breath of fresh air, regretting that he hadn't managed to speak with the princess, though he remained motivated. He had climbed another rung on the royal ladder, bringing himself closer to her. It had been a long, arduous journey since saving the king from assassins, but it was paying off. Behind him, the balcony door creaked open. Turning around, he found himself face to face with Count Ainos of the Hasten Kingdom, who spoke directly in Mandarin. Ainos congratulated himself on finally tracking down the killer Seol. The protagonist was stunned to hear a language from his original world. Closing the door behind him, Ainos explained he had spent a long time hunting him down. As he drew his blade, the sweet scent of plum blossoms filled the air. Seol instantly recognized him as the disciple old Jaeon had mentioned before his death, the most promising prodigy of the Central Plains who had mysteriously vanished. A fierce duel erupted right there on the balcony between Count Seol and Count Ainos, as two attacked with terrifying speed and precision. Seol was forced on the defensive by the sheer skill of the swordsmen. Sparks flew as their weapons clashed repeatedly, neither gaining the upper hand. Count Ainos unleashed concentrated bursts of energy, but the protagonist withstood the onslaught and launched a counterattack, realizing he had met a truly worthy adversary. This was indeed the #1 rising star of the martial world. Ainos brushed off the praise, recounting how he had spent the last 3 years of his life hunting Seol. He had even managed to infiltrate the very same ship the protagonist was on, biding his time to strike, right up until that massive storm hit. A blinding light had knocked him unconscious, and when he woke up he was stranded in this world. Yet transport to another realm had not eroded his desire for vengeance against his master's killer. Seol felt the atmosphere grow heavy under the oppressive aura emanating from Ainos. Ainos relished the fact that he had finally cornered his prey to avenge his master. As energy condensed around Count Ainos, Count Seol braced for a devastating strike, only for the terrace door to swing open, revealing Princess Chiller. She had been searching for the Count in the ballroom for some time. Stepping onto the terrace, she immediately sensed the tense atmosphere between the two men. When she questioned them, Seol smoothly assured her that nothing was amiss. Just a casual conversation between two noblemen. While the protagonist chatted with the princess, Ainos took a moment to recognize the second princess of the Gaia Empire, wondering what connection she shared with Seol. Realizing his window had closed, since assassinating Seol right in front of the Empire's princess would be a catastrophic political blunder, he backed down and left the terrace to await a better opportunity. With a formal bow, he headed back to the ballroom, using a telepathy technique to send a final warning to the protagonist. This was far from over. By taking everything Ainos cared about in their past life, Seol had signed his own death warrant. But before delivering the killing blow, the Count promised to tear away everything Seol held dear, including everyone close to him. His first target would be the princess, who looked at Seol with such deep affection. Seol furiously commanded him not to touch Akilde under any circumstance, insisting their feud was strictly between the two of them. Ainos merely countered that the final outcome depended entirely on him. Ignoring Princess Chiller's questions, Seol abruptly excused himself. But the young princess had no intention of letting him walk away so easily. When he asked her why she was stopping him, Chiller called him out for his blatant lack of courtesy when she had only wanted to offer her congratulations. Seol turned back, flatly reminding her that the gala was for the king's birthday. As the representative of the Gaia Empire, her duty was to celebrate the monarch and mingle with the other delegates in the hall, adding that he didn't have the time to constantly explain basic etiquette to her. His blunt words left the princess completely stunned. Back in her empire, men fought for a mere word with her, yet Seol treated her like an afterthought. She quietly clarified that she truly just wanted to congratulate him on his promotion with no hidden agenda. Noticing the genuine hurt on her face, Seol softened his stance and apologized for his harsh tone. He asked for her understanding, stating he had an urgent matter to deal with right away, while offering his sincere thanks for her kind words. From her vantage point, Princess Chiller watched as the Count approached the crown princess of the Drake Kingdom and engaged her in serious conversation. She couldn't help but notice the look of pure adoration the princess held for him. The sight made her wonder how different things might be if she had met the protagonist first. However, pragmatism forced her back to reality. She had far more pressing issues to deal with. Namely, surviving the assassination plots orchestrated by her own sister, Ruan. That crisis required her absolute focus the moment she returned to the Gaia Empire. Everything else was secondary. Just then, a movement in the courtyard caught her eye. It was Princess Daphne engaged in a deep conversation with a man. The man looked familiar. Raking her mind, she recognized Jerome, Count Seol's strategist. She wondered what the two of them were doing alone in the garden at such a late hour. Meanwhile, in a private chamber, a guard informed Count Ainos that Princess Daphne had vanished from the ballroom and could not be found anywhere in the castle. Infuriated, the Count ordered an exhaustive sweep of the grounds, demanding to be notified the exact moment she was located. Meanwhile, at a secluded gazebo in the gardens, the princess gazed out at the twinkling city lights, comparing them to the stars while reflecting on her brother's harsh orders. King Legere had commanded her to act as an emissary and return home under the strict escort of Count Ainos. That mandate was the sole reason she was even in the Drake Kingdom, though her heart yearned for escape. Suddenly, a voice echoed her exact thoughts. Turning around, she saw a figure stepping out from the shadows, apologizing for the intrusion. The princess assured him there was no need to apologize, as it was only a brief fright. The stranger introduced himself as Jerome, Count Seol's assistant. Delighted, she introduced herself as Daphne. Jerome noted it was a lovely name, even as internal alarms blared in his mind. He realized this was the princess of the Hassan Kingdom, whose ethereal beauty was renowned across the continent. Quick to show proper respect, Jerome dropped to one knee and begged forgiveness for his casual manners. Daphne, however, brushed off the stiff formalities. Sensing the conversation was concluded, Jerome prepared to take his leave. However, the profound sadness etched on her face made him pause and offer his company while he waited for Count Seol to wrap up his business at the gala. Touched by his kindness, the princess gladly accepted. She spent the rest of the night listening to Jerome's fascinating tales as the celestial bodies continued their slow journey across the night sky. Jerome's stories allowed her to relax completely, giving him the opening to gently ask why she wished to escape. The question brought her painful reality back into focus, and she explained to Jerome the miserable predicament she found herself in. Her brother was forcing her into a loveless political marriage, and she refused to be a mere pawn on the kingdom's geopolitical chessboard. She wanted to run away to parts unknown. Noticing his stunned silence, she quickly apologized for oversharing such sensitive state secrets and putting him in a difficult spot. Jerome countered that he was merely an aide, and it was his honor to assist someone in need, promising to do everything in his power to help her realize her desire for freedom. Daphne was stunned by his earnest pledge, a strange warmth blossoming in her chest that made her too shy to look him in the eye. Before she could properly thank the magician, a stern voice shattered the quiet atmosphere. Turning, they found Count Ainos, who had come to retrieve her. The Count icily explained that the guard had spent hours searching the castle for her, before demanding to know the identity of her companion. Jerome instantly recognized the continent-famous swordmaster. He smoothly introduced himself as a passing mage who had simply offered his company out of basic courtesy to the princess. Now that her proper escort had arrived, he bowed politely and excused himself with her permission. As he walked away, Daphne thanked him with a warm familiarity that infuriated Ainos. The Count sharply reminded the princess that the moment this diplomatic summit concluded and they returned home, their formal engagement would be finalized. The declaration shocked both Jerome and Daphne, who had been completely blind to her brother's backroom dealings. Stepping ahead of the Count toward the ballroom, she silently mouthed the message back to Jerome, asking him to meet her in the garden 3 days later at the exact same hour. Meanwhile, the gala rolled on, and Princess Ashildi was beginning to feel thoroughly exhausted. Worn down by the endless socializing required with foreign dignitaries and frustrated that she hadn't managed to speak with Seol, she was about to call it a night. Suddenly, a familiar voice requested a dance. Looking up, she found the protagonist standing before her and instantly accepted. watching them sway from the royal balcony. The king felt a flicker of concern. When he questioned his advisor, Cotton confirmed his observations. There was a clear intimacy between the princess and the count, something that had finally brought a genuine smile back to her face. The king asked Cotton if he believed Seal harbored true feelings for the crown heiress. Cotton noted that while Seal had achieved a meteoric rise, he was originally a commoner, making a union with the princess a political impossibility. Exceptional martial arts prowess wasn't enough to navigate the court's intricate web of noble alliances and vested interests. The following morning, outside the Royal Merchant Association headquarters, an ice wyvern touched down gracefully in front of Edmund. Riding on its back was Seal, who warmly greeted the old merchant. Seal asked how business was faring, and Edmund happily explained that, thanks to his backing, the association had reclaimed its spot as the premier trading power in the kingdom, injecting massive excitement into the guild. He invited Seal into a private lounge where, over a hot cup of tea, the old man congratulated the new count on his elevation and his swift victory in the territorial war, marveling at how much he had achieved in so little time. Seal thanked him and revealed he had come to ask a personal favor. Edmund eagerly offered his services, and the protagonist requested that he secure a grand estate. When Edmund asked for specific preferences, Seal explained with a sharp grin that it needed to be a mansion so massive and lavish that Duke Icarus's estate would look like a complete hovel by comparison. Catching his drift, Edmund guaranteed he would find the perfect estate immediately. Hearing Seal's ambition, the old merchant knew the hour had arrived to launch their grand counterattack against Duke Icarus and the rival merchant house, whom he held solely responsible for the destruction of the original Royal Association and the tragic demise of his entire family. However, noticing Seal had arrived completely unattended, Edmund inquired about his personal garçon. Seal explained they were executing a special assignment at that very moment. Elsewhere in the capital, inside a dim tavern, a hooded drum sat waiting for a clandestine meeting. He had been tasked with digging up the truth behind the historic massacre of House Miller. Yet his mind kept wandering back to Princess Daphne, worrying over her safety and questioning his own impulsiveness in arranging a secret rendezvous 3 days from now. A sharp voice snapped him out of his reverie. Looking up, he saw an old friend. It was Leon, the master of the capital's underground information guild, who greeted him warmly. After exchanging brief pleasantries, Leon cut to the chase, asking whose secrets needed to be unearthed. Jerome slid a heavy pouch of coins across the table, explaining the details under his friend's intense scrutiny. The moment he mentioned they were investigating Miller, the information broker went entirely pale. Sliding the coin pouch right back, Leon stood up to leave the tavern immediately, flatly telling Jerome that no amount of gold was worth committing suicide over. Jerome was baffled by his friend's sheer terror. When pressed, Leon explained that every single operative who had ever investigated the slaughter of House Miller had ended up brutally murdered. Refusing to jeopardize his guild, Leon declared the matter closed and walked out without wasting another second. Jerome intercepted him, instantly doubling the bounty for any scrap of information Leon already possessed. The lucrative counteroffer made the broker hesitate, caught in a fierce internal struggle between self-preservation and pure greed. Ultimately, greed won. Taking a deep breath, Leon turned back to Jerome. He told Jerome to wait at the tavern while he retrieved a secure file from his archives. The informant's sheer paranoia left the young strategist deeply unsettled, making him realize that whatever happened to Miller's family was so terrifying that even the most connected broker in the kingdom trembled at its mention. This confirmed that a shadowy, immensely powerful figure was pulling the strings to ensure the truth remained buried forever. Back at the royal headquarters, Jerome debriefed Seal and Edmund on his findings. House Miller was once a powerful comital family, and Miller was actually the surviving second son. They had wielded massive influence across the kingdom, a detail that triggered a long-buried memory for Edmund. Jerome continued, explaining that 10 years ago the entire household had been poisoned overnight, with only the youngest child surviving. The blame had been pinned entirely on a minor noble named Baron Gideon. Unable to keep silent, Edmund intervened, revealing that Baron Gideon was merely a disposable pawn, a puppet dancing on the strings of a far more sinister master who had orchestrated the assassination. As twilight fell across the city, Miller checked his blades, fully prepared to execute his long-awaited vengeance against the Baron. He believed the Baron was the one responsible for his family's extinction. Sudden footsteps echoed behind him. Turning around, the assassin found Count Seal, Jerome, and an elderly gentleman he didn't recognize. Edmund stepped forward, tears welling in his eyes as he recognized the young man as the little boy who had escaped the massacre. Introducing himself as the leader of the Royal Merchant Association, Edmund revealed that Miller's father had been their primary noble benefactor. He explained that the poisoning wasn't Gideon's idea at all. It was ordered directly by Duke Icarus. Miller reeled, trying to process the shock-notching revelation. He had never known of any link between his family and the Duke. Edmund laid bare the dark truth. It was a calculated coup to destroy the Royal Guild and replace it with a puppet trading company backed by Duke Icarus. The revelation shattered Miller's world as the pieces of the conspiracy finally fell into place. Duke Icarus had wiped out House Miller to cripple Roel and elevate his own commercial empire. Dropping to his knees, Miller realized the sickening irony. All this time he had been operating as an assassin for the very monster who slaughtered his bloodline. A hollow, bitter laugh escaped his chest before he forced himself back into composure. He stood up and gripped his weapons, intent on leaving. Seol blocked his path, asking where he thought he was going. Miller snarled that he was going to slit Duke Icarus's throat. The protagonist urged him to be rational, explaining that throwing his life away right now wouldn't achieve anything against the Duke's vast power, but Miller refused to listen. Seol tried to talk sense into him to prevent absolute suicide. Blinded by rage, Miller drew his daggers, ready to cut down anyone standing in his way. To everyone's shock, Seol stepped into a combat stance, declaring that if Miller wanted to march on the Duke's mansion, he would have to defeat him first. Miller instantly accepted the challenge. He lunged forward with explosive speed born of years in the shadows, unleashing a barrage of lethal thrusts. Seol casually slipped past the blades, effortlessly repositioning himself right behind him. Startled, the assassin executed a swift reverse kick, but the protagonist dodged it seamlessly and targeted Miller's pressure points. The strike instantly paralyzed Miller, completely sealing his inner energy flow. Yet, gritting his teeth, Miller dragged himself across the floor and replicated Seol's exact finger strikes on his own body, successfully unlocking his energy pathways. Seol was genuinely surprised. He had never taught the assassin pressure point manipulation, yet the boy had broken the seal. Miller panted, explaining he had simply mirrored the exact counterstrike he just witnessed. The response deeply impressed Seol, revealing a terrifying level of martial comprehension far beyond his initial assessment. His body pushed past its limits, Miller suddenly collapsed unconscious. Seol directed Edmund to carry the boy to a guest room. He instructed Edmund to have Miller bring himself to his office the moment he woke up. When Edmund asked if he intended to punish the boy's insubordination, Seol smiled, stating the exact opposite. He was going to personally train him in advanced martial arts. The boy was an extraordinary diamond in the rough with talent that shouldn't be wasted. With proper guidance, his potential to become an elite assassin was unmatched, though he still had a long way to go. Suddenly, Seol's transmission stone glowed. Activating it, he heard a faint, shivering voice on the other side. It was Princess Akilda, urgently pleading for his help. Her only clue was that she was freezing to death before the connection abruptly cut off. Without a moment's hesitation, Seol dived straight through the window, landing gracefully in the street below as he frantically tried to deduce her location. The weather today had been perfectly mild, making her mention of extreme cold highly unusual. Tracking the residual S-energy from her transmission stone, he isolated the sharpest drop in temperature in the area, leading him to a locked-out building. Kicking the door open, he found the princess collapsed on the floor, shivering violently. He scooped her up immediately, wrapping her in his coat to restore her body heat while asking what on earth she was doing there. She explained she had slipped away out of curiosity to check on her ice wyvern egg, but the heavy door had accidentally locked behind her. Seol gently reminded her that the hatchery was reinforced with high-level frost magic to keep the ambient temperature well below freezing, making her solo excursion incredibly reckless. She offered a sheepish apology, expressing her profound gratitude that the transmission stone had allowed him to rescue her in time. Overwhelmed by the terrifying prospect of losing her again, Seol pulled the startled princess into a tight, fierce embrace. Shocked but deeply moved, Akilda melted into his arms, holding him close. Sudden cracking sounds from inside the frost chamber broke the silence. One of the massive shells was fracturing. The first ice wyvern was hatching. Seol instructed her to step forward and clean the fluid off the hatchling, explaining that the creature would instantly bond with her as its mother for life. Carefully, the princess tended to the newborn wyvern, which nuzzled against her palm affectionately, signaling a successful soul bond. Seol examined the creature and confirmed it was a remarkably healthy female. Meanwhile, entirely unbeknownst to him, a shadowy figure watched their intimate interaction from a high palace window, recording their movements with calculating eyes. Following the conclusion of the birthday celebrations, an official royal ceremony was convened where His Majesty formally elevated Seol to the rank of Count before the entire court. Immediately following the the High Council was called to order. This grand assembly brought together every noble in the realm to deliberate on major state affairs and administrative policies. The primary item on the agenda was electing the members of the powerful Inner Council. Opening the floor, the king invited nominations for the vacant seats. A hand went up immediately. One faction nominated Duke Icarus, while the royalists put forward Count Slipe. The political tension was palpable, as the inner councils held the power to shape royal decrees directly alongside the monarch. As candidates from both sides were named, the court evaluated their political leverage. The nomination process drew clear lines across the Grand Hall, revealing exactly who stood with the Duke and who remained loyal to the crown. Given his brand new title, Seol had no intention of running, until a very familiar voice suddenly announced a final nomination. Turning around, the entire room gasped in shock. The person proposing the nomination was none other than Duke Icarus himself. The Duke delivered an eloquent speech praising Count Seol's peerless capabilities, causing the neutral nobles to readily agree to his appointment. From his throne, the king narrowed his eyes in deep suspicion. It made no sense for Icarus to elevate the man he had personally exiled to the frozen north. Yet here he was, singing his praises to thrust him into the core of royal governance. Once the appointment was finalized, the Duke smoothly offered his congratulations to Seol, internally celebrating the success of his gambit. The Inner Council convened weekly in the capital, meaning members were legally restricted from leaving the city limits. This brilliant maneuver placed all of Seol's daily operations directly under the watchful eyes of the Duke's extensive spy network in the capital. Icarus intended to thoroughly monitor his rival and neutralize him as a threat, a perfect political snare. Meanwhile, in her chambers, Princess Achilde sat dejectedly, frustrated at missing her chance to talk to Seol. She had even sent a discreet signal for him to visit, but it seemed he hadn't noticed. To her utter amazement, the window frame suddenly creaked open, revealing Seol himself. He offered a warm grin, asking what was so urgent that she had summoned him directly to her private quarters. The princess immediately voiced her profound concern over Duke Icarus being the one to orchestrate his placement on the Inner Council. Seol admitted he didn't fully comprehend the move yet, asking if she had any insights, but she was equally baffled by the tyrant's hidden agenda. Considering Icarus had brazenly tried to assassinate the king and engineered Seol's exile to the northern wastes, this was undeniably a piece of a far larger, more sinister plot. Seol laughed it off, choosing to look on the bright side by joking that they should actually thank the Duke. After all, being stationed in the capital gave them an excellent excuse to see each other constantly. Achilde warned him to remain hyper-vigilant, emphasizing that Icarus was a ruthless strategist who would stop at nothing, using any legal or illegal means to seize what he wanted. Seol assured her that no matter the plot, he would shatter it completely and emerge victorious. A sudden knock on her chamber door signaled an unexpected visitor. Achilde turned to tell him to hide, but the count had already vanished into the shadows before she could even utter the words. Meanwhile, flashing back to 10 days prior, Jerome had met with Princess Daphne in the palace gardens. She had desperately confessed her desire to flee the country. Despite having no destination in mind, she begged the young mage to take her anywhere she could live under a false name, completely hidden from her family. However, Jerome noted a massive complication. He was a sworn lieutenant to the Lord of Karalung. If it were discovered that he orchestrated the escape of a Hassan royal, it could trigger an all-out war between their respective nations. Tears welled in Daphne's eyes as she asked if his promise to help her had been nothing but empty words. She confessed that this trip was the first time she had ever been permitted outside her home castle. Ever since their father passed, King Legere had kept her locked away in a gilded cage, allowing her out only for mandated public appearances. Despite the luxurious dresses and fine dining, it was an absolute prison. When her brother arranged her marriage to Count Ainos, she had desperately tried to spark some affection for him. But Ainos was merely an extension of her brother's cold ambition, entirely indifferent to her happiness. It was purely a political transaction, and he looked at her with the exact same calculating expression as the king, viewing her as a mere object of statecraft. Jerome was the first person to treat her as human. Standing up, she apologized for placing such an unfair burden on him and turned to leave, tears streaming down her face as she accepted her grim fate. Jerome reached out to stop her, but his tactical mind warred with his emotions, causing him to hesitate as he calculated the severe geopolitical fallout of aiding her. Losing her patience, she spun back around and demanded a definitive answer. Would he stand with her or not? Stricken by her fierce determination, Jerome cast his reservations aside and agreed. He told her that in 10 days he would be waiting for her on the 3rd floor of the Russian Blue Tavern, located near the eastern gate of the capital. He would wait there until nightfall. The operation required absolute secrecy. No one could ever know of their meeting here or their plans moving forward. Overjoyed, Daphne swore she would be there. Snapping back to the present, Jerome marched towards Seol's office. He informed the Count that he needed to travel to Thoth to audit the ongoing reconstruction efforts and ensure that the administrator, Volmer, was managing the territory effectively and fulfilling his duties. Seol nodded, recognizing the tactical necessity of supervising a newly annexed domain. He granted his permission but offered to fly out and meet him there once the next Inner Council session concluded. Visibly nervous, Jerome quickly insisted that Seol shouldn't trouble himself, noting that a standard journey took 5 days on horseback and the Count couldn't afford to miss vital political assemblies. Jerome offered to handle the entire audit solo and deliver a comprehensive report. Seol frowned. With an ice wyvern, a round trip took less than a day, a fact he pointed out to his strategist. Jerome's uncharacteristic stuttering and intense anxiety raised immediate red flags. Seol flatly asked him what was really going on, noting he had been on edge all week. Flustered, the mage denied any odd behavior, which only deepened Seol's suspicions. Pretending to drop the issue, Seol conceded and gave him clearance to handle the Thoth situation independently. Heading back to his quarters to pack, Jerome prepared for the upcoming dawn, when he would smuggle the princess out of the capital. He questioned his sanity for executing such a reckless stunt, but whenever Daphne's tear-streaked face flashed in his mind, a wave of profound determination pushed his doubts aside. The following morning, the inner council convened once more. King Tomalov arrived with Cotton and Princess Achilde, the latter still trying to deduce Duke Icarus's hidden agenda. She couldn't fathom placing Seol in the council. She could only trust that Seol would navigate the political minefield safely. As the heavy doors swung open, the herald announced the arrival of the royals. The very first person to bow and offer a warm greeting to the princess was Seol, instantly brightening her mood. Once the council took their seats, the closed-door session began. Duke Icarus took the floor first, adopting an air of profound respect as he addressed the throne, introducing an item of utmost national security: the formal marriage of the crown princess. The announcement left the room completely stunned. Breaking the stunned silence, Achilde was the first to fiercely object to the topic being raised. The Duke offered a practiced, humble apology but pointed out with clinical pragmatism that the princess had already reached her 20th year. By royal law, she was expected to be wed or at least officially betrothed to prevent a succession crisis, a stability risk the kingdom hadn't faced in centuries. He strongly recommended expediting her marriage, a proposal that instantly triggered a massive uproar among the council members. Arguments erupted across the floor between Icarus's loyalists and the royalist faction, shouting over one another with zero consensus. Cotton, acting as the assembly's moderator, repeatedly slammed his gavel in a futile attempt to restore order and reassert his authority. Fed up, Princess Achilde ripped the gavel straight from his hand and slammed it down with enough force to shatter the wood, instantly silencing the room. Tossing the broken pieces back to Cotton, she turned to her father, demanding his stance. The king sternly ordered her to sit down and be quiet, but she fiercely countered that he had given his word. He had promised she could choose her own husband. The king countered coldly that royalty must uphold tradition, dismissing a marriage based on pure romance as incredibly naive. Infuriated, the princess spun on her heel and stormed out of the council chambers, leaving a tense silence behind. Back in her private quarters, the princess paced before her trusted maid, Rencia, asking how she was supposed to stay calm when her heart belonged solely to Seol. Rencia tried to soothe her, noting that no official decree had been signed and it was too early to despair. Achilde countered that the Duke's motives were brutally transparent. He wanted to force a marriage with his arrogant son Justin to usurp the throne. Since King Tomalov had only fathered 3 daughters and law forbade a female sovereign, marrying the eldest princess was Icarus's ticket to the crown. Knowing the Duke would use any underhanded method, Achilde stood up with flashing eyes. She declared the only solution was to publicly announce her intent to marry Seol. Rencia panicked, grabbing her arm and reminding her of royal decorum. But Achilde's patience was entirely spent. Her mind was made up. The maid practically threw herself around the princess's waist to stop her from running out and causing a massive scene. Amidst the frantic scuffle, a commanding voice boomed from the corridor outside. Peeking out, they found Seol towering over a trembling maid on her knees, openly accusing her of espionage. The maid wept, insisting she was innocent and was merely polishing the brass fixtures near the princess's suite. Achilde stepped out, asking Seol what the commotion was about. Seol explained that, knowing how upset she had been leaving the council, he came to check on her and caught this girl eavesdropping at the door. When the princess interrogated her, the girl stuck to her story, trembling violently. Achilde icily asked if she was unaware that this wing was strictly off-limits to unvetted staff. The maid stammered out an apology, claiming she was a new hire and got completely lost in the palace's layout. Cutting her off mid-sentence, the princess banished her from her sight, warning her that if she ever caught her near her quarters again, she would be thrown into the dungeons. The maid scrambled to her feet, thanking the princess for her mercy, and fled down the corridor. The moment the girl turned the corner, Achilde quietly ordered Rencia to trail her and uncover her background. Seol frowned, reluctant to let a potential spy walk, but Achilde noted they lacked concrete proof to execute her, adding that everyone already knew exactly who had planted her there. There was little they could do legally. When Seol asked for confirmation, she stated outright that Duke Icarus was the puppet master. He had bought out the loyalty of over half the palace guards and servants, allowing him to manipulate events with total impunity since no one dared cross him. The grim reality surprised the protagonist. He knew the royal family's influence was waning, but the rot inside the palace was far worse than he anticipated. The princess looked at Seol, asking what their next move should be regarding Icarus's aggressive marriage proposal. If left unchecked, she would be forced to wed Justin, a fate she loathed. Seol gently calmed her down, promising he would handle it by speaking with the king personally. When she eagerly asked if he had a strategy, he replied with a confident smirk that he had something like a plan cooking. In the dead of night, a sudden commotion shattered the peace of the capital's streets. Elite squads ransacked buildings, hunting frantically for an escaped high-value target. The fugitive was Princess Daphne, currently slipping through the alleys toward the designated tavern. Jerome was already inside, waiting anxiously. He tried to keep his composure, questioning whether he was making a catastrophic mistake, but the memory of her pleading eyes steeled his resolve. Twilight descended, and he began to fear she had been captured, when the door suddenly burst open and a breathless, exhausted Daphne slipped inside. She was frantic, having narrowly evaded the dragnet sweeping the lower districts. Looking through the shutters, they could see the city guards systematically searching every establishment on the block. Panic-stricken, she gripped Jerome's coat, asking how they were going to escape this imminent trap. Jerome casually began stacking heavy chairs against the door. Daphne cried out that it was pointless against an entire squad, but the strategist smiled calmly. As the guards began hammering on the wood outside, he pulled the princess tightly into his arms, telling her to hold on before unleashing a powerful teleportation spell. The magic instantly flashed them across the kingdom to the castle in Thoth. Meanwhile, back in the capital, the king sat in his study, brooding over Duke Icarus's terrifying level of political leverage. The tyrant had successfully backed the crown into a corner, caught between a rock and a hard place. It left the king entirely powerless to defend Achilde, who was itching to launch a direct crusade against the duke despite her father's warnings. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts, and the herald announced Seal. The king cleared his throat and granted him entry. After offering a respectful bow, Seal asked after the king's well-being, to which the weary monarch admitted he hadn't known peace in a long time. When Seal asked if he truly intended to surrender to Icarus's marriage terms, the king sharply warned him to mind his tone, stating that even saving his life wouldn't protect him from a charge of treason. Brushing past the defensive warning, Seal confidently announced he possessed the perfect solution to the entire succession crisis. Intrigued, the king demanded details, but Seal requested a private audience. The king dismissed the royals, and once the doors sealed, he pressed Seal for his proposal. Seal handed over a detailed scroll, requesting that its contents be issued immediately as an official royal decree. Scanning the text, the king's eyes widened. While it would effectively block Justin's marriage proposal, it would merely delay the inevitable, giving Icarus time to formulate a workaround. Seal conceded the point but smiled darkly, explaining that the decree was a calculated trap designed for a very specific predator, and they just needed to wait for him to take the bait. Meanwhile, in Thoth, Jerome and Daphne were safe inside the castle, nervously awaiting Seal's arrival. When Seal entered, he instantly recognized the Hassan princess. Jerome scrambled to explain himself, pacing as he detailed the entire rescue operation late into the night. Daphne bowed, pleading that she wouldn't cause any political trouble if allowed to remain hidden. Seal scrutinized the fugitive royal. Jerome added his own oath that he would assume full responsibility for her. Seal went quiet, weighing the massive political risks while the young couple braced for a harsh rejection. Defying their worst fears, Seal smiled and granted her permission to stay as long as she needed, lifting an immense weight from her shoulders. Daphne vowed to repay his incredible kindness whenever he called upon her. Seal noted that since Jerome had risked his life and country to save her, he wouldn't be heartless enough to separate them, especially seeing the deep bond they shared. He promised absolute discretion, leaving both mages stunned by his generosity. Jerome spluttered, trying to deny the romantic implication out of professional respect, but Seal told him to stop lying to himself and accept his own feelings. Before they could dwell on it, Seal requested a private word with his strategist, and Daphne politely excused herself from the solar. Once alone, Jerome apologized again for introducing such a massive liability to Thoth, and offered to smuggle her away to avoid sparking a war. Seal cut him off, demanding he answer him not as a subordinate strategist but face-to-face as a man. He asked if sending her back to her brother's prison was what he truly wanted. Jerome went completely silent, conflicted. Just then, Seal's transmission stone flared to life, carrying the frantic voice of Edmund, who claimed he had critical intelligence from the capital. Edmund reported that Princess Daphne had been abducted and Count Ainos had demanded royal cooperation to launch a nationwide manhunt. To Edmund's utter shock, Seal casually replied that he was already fully aware and there was absolutely nothing to worry about. The old merchant then revealed that the king had officially signed and published the strict new criteria for the crown princess's betrothal. Seal chuckled, stating he was well aware of the document's contents since he had drafted the decree himself before handing it to the king. Ending the transmission, Seal turned back to a deeply unsettled Jerome. The young strategist tried to parse his lord's maneuvers, asking about the tactical purpose of the decree. Seal repeated with a cold smile that it was a snare for a specific target, and now they just had to wait for him to snap it shut. Until now, Icarus had pulled every string to run the kingdom like a personal playground, but he was finally being forced onto the defensive. A furious roar shattered the midnight quiet of the Duke's manor. Icarus had just received the official transcripts of the royal decree regarding Princess Achilde's marriage criteria. The decree mandated she could only wed a young noble who achieved monumental, documented merit for the realm within a single year. In a blind rage, the Duke smashed the ornaments off his desk. As his aides scrambled to gather the scattered parchments, he quietly pointed out the devastating reality. Justin had 0 accomplishments to qualify. However, the aide added with a sinister grin that Justin didn't actually need to achieve anything. Icarus stared at him, demanding an explanation. The aide clarified that if they systematically executed every single noble who qualified, Justin would become the sole eligible candidate by default. Currently, only 2 young lords possessed the caliber to meet the crown's strict standard. John, the brilliant eldest son of Count Slipe and Count Seol. With the Duke's nod of approval, the aide offered to deploy a high-level assassin to eliminate House Slipe's heir immediately. That left the question of how to handle Seol. The aide revealed he had intercepted a highly sensitive piece of rumors that, if leveraged correctly, would completely ruin both Seol and Princess Ashil's, trapping them in a corner with zero political escape. The next morning, the inner council assembled before the king. The first order of business was assigning official duties to Seol as the newest member. When Cotton asked for proposals, Duke Icarus smoothly took the floor, launching into a glowing review of Seol's peerless military record. He noted that the vice commander of the elite Phoenix Knights had recently been mortally wounded, leaving a critical vacancy. He proposed granting the commission to Seol, a suggestion that shocked the entire table. The Phoenix Knights were universally recognized as the absolute strongest order in the kingdom. Currently commanded by Count Torio, the order operated on strict meritocracy, completely ignoring noble bloodlines or racial backgrounds during recruitment. Anyone with genuine combat genius was admitted, making them the most lethal, highly disciplined military force under the crown. Aware of their reputation, Seol found Icarus's recommendation highly intriguing. It strongly implied that the Phoenix Knights were dealing with a hidden corrupt rot that the Duke wanted him to crash into. Feigning polite gratitude, Seol accepted the commission, promising to execute his new duties to the absolute best of his abilities. Icarus offered a warm smile, expressing full confidence in Seol's upcoming deployment. Shifting gears seamlessly, the Duke addressed the king, stating there was a matter of delicate internal security His Majesty needed to hear. When the king pressed him, Icarus revealed that highly scandalous rumors were spreading through the servants' quarters. He claimed that a few nights ago, Princess Achilde and Seol were witnessed emerging alone from a secluded outbuilding deep within the palace grounds. The accusation caused a collective gasp around the table. Seol remembered the incident perfectly. It was when he rescued her from the freezing frost hatchery. With visible reluctance, the king demanded an immediate clarification. To everyone's surprise, Seol casually confirmed the event, explaining that the princess had gone alone to check the ice wyvern eggs and got accidentally locked inside the freezing structure, prompting his rescue operation. Duke Icarus sneered, asking if he had any independent witnesses to back up his convenient tale, noting that an informant distinctly saw them locked in a passionate embrace. With a razor-sharp freezing glare, Seol told the Duke to stop trying to slander the princess's honor with fabricated gossip, stating flatly that nothing improper had occurred. Holding his gaze, the Duke countered that while he hoped that was true, a simple denial from the accused wouldn't stop the court from talking. If such a scandalous rumor leaked to rival kingdoms or reached the common folk, it would completely ruin the princess's reputation and standing. Unable to tolerate the blatant political ambush, the king slammed his hand on the table, abruptly terminating the session, and walked out in tight silence. As the council dispersed, Duke Icarus cornered Seol, whispering that as long as he remained stationed in the capital, every breath he took would be monitored. He would never escape his gaze. He walked away, his mocking laughter echoing down the hallway. That night, Princess Achilde tossed and turned, trapped in a bizarre nightmare of an unfamiliar world. She saw shifting silhouettes of people, whispering about a disgraced prodigy who had betrayed his clan and mysteriously abandoned his homeland. As she tried to make sense of the fragmented memories, the dream suddenly twisted. Hundreds of malicious, glowing eyes locked onto her, and the whispers morphed into a mocking chant accusing her of ruining her royal lineage through a scandalous affair. She realized they were attacking her relationship with Seol, and tried to scream back, but shadowy hands clamped around her as she thrashed violently to break free. She woke up with a gasp, sitting upright in her dark bed with cold sweat pouring down her face. Residual terror gripped her chest as she lay awake, deeply terrified for both her own safety and Seol's life. Under a brilliant, starry sky, the gates of a massive estate swung open to welcome a steady stream of elite guests. Inside, the architecture boasted unparalleled luxury and grandeur, leaving every noble who crossed the threshold completely breathless. Absolutely everyone was stunned, unable to believe that such an architectural marvel belonged to Count Seol. This spectacular estate had historically belonged to House Miller, a property so astronomically valuable that not even Duke Icarus had been able to purchase it, despite his immense wealth and political leverage. The herald announced the host, and Seol stepped forward, smoothly thanking them for joining his modest housewarming gala, thrown to celebrate his official promotion to Count. It also served as his formal introduction as a core member of the Inner Council. His credentials now included being the Lord of Karolung, the newly appointed vice commander of the Phoenix Knights, and the sole owner of the most luxurious estate in the capital. Raising his crystal glass in a toast, the protagonist welcomed them all. As the wine flowed, the grandeur of the banquet intensified, and waves of awed gossip rippled through the grand ballroom. Overhearing the conversations, Seol felt thoroughly satisfied that he had left the real estate search entirely to old Edmund. The old merchant clearly understood the shallow psychology of the kingdom's high society. Whether they were staunch royalists or Icarus's sycophants, their dismissive attitude toward Seol vanished the moment they witnessed his overwhelming wealth. It proved that the ultimate shortcut to changing a noble's mind was flaunting dominant financial power, since greed was their ultimate compass. Two wealthy nobles approached to congratulate him on his elevation, including a pretentious newly rich lord named Lowen, who quickly inquired with a smug smirk about Princess Achilde's absence. Seol calmly explained that the princess was feeling slightly indisposed and had to decline the invitation. Lowen chuckled suggestively, wondering aloud what kind of exhausting activity could have made her sick right after their late-night meeting. The thinly veiled insult made Seol's expression turn dangerously cold. Oblivious to the lethal aura radiating from his host, Lowen continued to mock the scandalous rumors surrounding the pair. Just as Seol was about to break his neck, a booming voice cut in from behind. A noble stepped forward, commanding Lowen to retract his vile slander against the crown immediately. He declared that slandering the royal family was an insult to the Drake Kingdom itself, warning that if his words reached the king, Lowen would lose his head along with his title. Flustered and intimidated, Lowen sneered that the stranger should stick to managing his own backwater district instead of ruining parties, before scurrying away. The noble turned to Seol, explaining that those pretentious fools were part of the nouveau riche who had recently bought their way under Duke Icarus's protection, using that backing to act with total impunity. Seol smiled, thanking Baron Vincent for stepping in. He added that Vincent had saved those idiots from being slaughtered right on the ballroom floor. Vincent laughed it off as a witty joke, though Seol remained perfectly serious. Vincent noted that as a loyal subject of the crown, he could never allow the princess to be slandered in his presence. Shifting gears, Seol inquired about the status of Vincent's territory. The Baron's face darkened as he explained that for the past few months, his district had been ravaged by highly aggressive monster outbreaks. Despite deploying his local forces, casualties were mounting steadily, and he was failing to purge the beasts, leaving him riddled with guilt. When Seol asked why he hadn't petitioned the capital for reinforcement, Vincent sighed, noting that the standard royal army was spread too thin, and as the regional lord, the burden was entirely his. With an unwavering gaze, Seol declared that this monster infestation would serve as his very first official campaign. As the vice commander of the Phoenix Knights, he pledged to march his elite forces to Vincent's district and completely purge the monsters. Vincent was utterly stunned, unable to believe a high-ranking council member would deploy the kingdom's strongest knight order to help his people with zero expectation of profit. He offered a deep bow of profound gratitude, but Seol stopped him, stating that his unwavering defense of the princess's honor was more than enough payment. Just then, Seol's transmission stone vibrated against his coat. Excusing himself to a secluded balcony, he activated the device to receive an urgent brief from Jerome. Jerome revealed that the Duke's purge had officially begun, targeting John, the heir of House Slipe, by deploying a specialized hitman. When Seol asked where the killer was, Jerome shocked him by stating the operative had already been captured and was currently secured in the mansion's lower cellar. Seol glided down to the basement, where Miller stood guard over the captive. Miller had completely neutralized the operative using the pressure point strike Seol taught him, binding and gagging him securely. He had even extracted a hollow false tooth containing a lethal suicide pill. Stepping forward, Seol unleashed an advanced mind control technique that left Miller completely awestruck, forcing the captive to speak. The operative mindlessly blurted out that his name was Seize, dispatched directly by Duke Icarus to assassinate John Sleep. The confession aligned perfectly with Seol's expectations. Altering the man's memories, Seol commanded him to return to his master and report absolute success. Miller watched the display in sheer bewilderment. He asked the protagonist if he had just completely rewritten the man's brain. Seol explained it was a forbidden demonic soul-binding art. Miller eagerly begged to learn it, but Seol instantly refused, noting it was a highly volatile technique used by unorthodox sects to brainwash disciples, requiring immense spiritual foundation to avoid backfiring. Without the proper internal cultivation level, the art was entirely useless, making it a waste of time for his current training. Releasing Seize from the room, Seol watched him march away to report his false victory. This messy assassination attempt proved that the Duke was growing desperate to secure his path to the throne. Back at the estate, Duke Icarus received a report from the returned Seize. Summoning him to his study, he demanded confirmation of the hit. Programmed by Seol's hypnosis, the assassin mechanically stated that John Sleip had been successfully eliminated. Thoroughly pleased with the swift execution, Icarus dismissed him. However, being a paranoid strategist, he commanded his dark wizard to inspect the operative for any signs of mental interference. The dark mage stepped out of the shadows, scanning Seize's mind, but reported that his original mental conditioning remained perfectly intact. Icarus grinned, taking it as absolute confirmation. Believing House Slipe's heir was dead, he concluded that only Seol remained to be taken off the board. By dawn, the entire capital was buzzing with a single shocking piece of news. John Slipe had suffered a catastrophic horse riding accident, a common cover story for high society assassinations. The highly convenient timing made the noble faction suspect a far darker play behind the accident. Fortunately, the young lord was secretly safe under medical care, exactly as he had orchestrated. Walking through a quiet forest path, he was accompanied by Miller, who was busy analyzing the political fallout. He noted that the capital must be in utter chaos with the sudden removal of the crown's premier marriage candidate. Sale agreed, noting that the sudden tragedy involving the princess's top suitor had struck the court like a thunderbolt, forcing every noble to draw the exact same conclusion. They all knew Duke Icarus's blood-stained hands were behind the event given how perfectly it served his agenda. Yet Miller was deeply confused about one thing, asking Seol why they didn't just expose the captured assassin and ruin the Duke immediately, especially since they held irrefutable proof of his treason. They could bring him down in a single day. Seol explained that simply throwing accusations wouldn't suffice against a high duke. They needed to construct an airtight legal trap that left zero room for escape. Icarus was a veteran snake who would slip through any minor legal loophole if they rushed the prosecution. Furthermore, by shifting the capital's focus to the explosive news of John's accident and Icarus's tyranny, the court had completely stopped gossiping about the scandalous rumors involving Seol and Princess Achilda. The realization left Miller utterly dumbfounded. Seol explained that it was a classic strategy, fighting a small fire by igniting a massive controlled blaze, turning Icarus into the ultimate lightning rod for public outrage. Miller was awed by his lord's foresight. While he had been focused entirely on the immediate target, Seol was playing chess several moves ahead. Emerging from the trees, they reached a secluded clearing hosting a modest cottage. This was the residence of Logan, the former vice-commander of the Phoenix Knights, who had been forced into retirement due to a severe leg injury, leaving his seat open for Seol. It was a remarkably destitute dwelling for a legendary commander. Once stripped of his commission, Logan had lost his estate and livelihood, leaving him with no other choice. Miller scanned the perimeter with his sharp assassin instincts, noting a bizarre discrepancy in the snow. Seol agreed that Logan's sudden dismissal smelled of an internal conspiracy. Miller shook his head, clarifying he wasn't talking about politics, but the physical environment. Despite the fresh blanket of snow covering the entire clearing, there wasn't a single footprint anywhere near the cabin except their own. It looked completely abandoned. Seol reminded him that high-level martial artists could easily conceal their tracks, just as he did. Miller conceded the point. He was an assassin, after all, but noted that a man with a shattered leg should still leave some physical distortion in the snow. Catching Miller's drift, Seol realized the implication. Their target wasn't walking, he was flying. Right on cue, a sharp whistle cut through the air as a projectile streaked down from above, which they narrowly dodged. Inspecting the missile embedded in the snow, they realized it wasn't a wooden arrow, but a razor-sharp, steel-like feather. A mocking voice echoed from the rooftop. Looking up, they confronted a beastman of the avian tribe, glaring down at them with absolute contempt for humanity. Seol and Miller are shocked to discover that Logan is a birdman. High up on the roof, Logan notices the vice commander's badge hanging from Seol's chest, the very same badge he himself wore not long ago. He immediately assumes this human standing before him has come to finish the job that the commander of the Phoenix Knights left undone. Miller breaks out into a cold sweat upon hearing Seol's inflammatory words, desperately trying to de-escalate the misunderstanding before blood is spilled. But Count Blizzard has no intention of playing nice. He deliberately goads the Beastman commander, musing aloud that if he truly intended to wipe out their tribe, what could Logan realistically do to stop him? The blatant provocation leaves both Logan and Miller speechless. Miller tries to calm the Count down, reminding him that provoking this man is pure madness, but Seol explains that he simply wants to test him, to evaluate his resolve and see if he has what it takes to serve under his command. The Birdman takes flight, readying another feather arrow as he warns Seol that these are the final moments of his life. Logan roars that the arrogant noble won't leave this forest alive, launching a razor-sharp projectile straight at the protagonist. The commander barks at Miller to get clear of the blast zone as he prepares to execute the intruder. Swooping down from the canopy, Logan unleashes a hail of hardened plumage, forcing Seol into a defensive stance while Miller screams out a frantic warning. He warns Seol that beastkin feathers are incredibly elastic, making deflecting them head-on a terrible idea. Clashing with the first one, Seol realizes the advice is spot-on and switches to dodging. Seeing this, Logan unleashes a rapid follow-up attack, firing 2 consecutive shots. Hoping to catch the protagonist off guard, Logan forces Seol to realize the attack is too heavy to deflect directly. He chooses to redirect it instead, inadvertently sending it flying right toward Miller. Fortunately, Miller evades it with ease, despite the sudden shock. Without missing a beat, the Birdman continues his relentless assault against Seol. Giving him absolutely no room to breathe, Seol spots a projectile hurtling toward him. It feels off, considering he heard 2 distinct shots. Just as he looks for the hidden second arrow, a dart blurs in from his blind spot. At the absolute last second, he catches it out of mid-air, redirecting its momentum. He hurls it right back up into the canopy, this proving that Logan isn't just relying on brute strength. He has a sharp tactical mind capable of executing lethal mid-combat feints. It's a solid demonstration of an impressive combat instinct. From above, Logan hears Seol talking, but he has no idea what he means. Logan demands to know what he means by evaluating his skill, but before he can comprehend Seol's cryptic words, his jaw drops in utter disbelief. The human is literally walking on thin air. Utilizing a blinding flash of his celestial skywalk technique, Count Blizzard teleports right into the beastman's blind spot, delivering a crushing blow to his shoulder that sends him crashing into the forest floor. The technique drastically lightens his body weight, letting him practically walk on thin air. With his bow shattered, Logan has no proper defense against the Count and is forced to desperately block his strikes. But when he tries to check a blow using his injured leg, an electrifying sensation surges through him. At the same time, Seol detects a strange residual energy on his palm. He mentions it to Logan, demanding to know how he got that leg wound. Stubbornly refusing to talk, Logan presses on with his attack. Seol, trying his best not to seriously harm him, charges his hand with energy and presses it directly against the wound. A searing pain shoots through Logan, driving him to strike back in desperation. Seol effortlessly sidesteps the blow and keeps channeling his energy throughout the damaged leg, ignoring his opponent's agonizing groans. As the energy flows completely through the limb, the foul presence rooted inside is forcibly driven out. Suddenly, Logan finds he can stand firmly and move without constraint. That is the exact moment realization hits him. His leg has been miraculously healed by the human standing right before him. This was a debilitating affliction that no physician across the continent could cure. Seol explains to him that it wasn't a standard physical injury. His leg had been targeted by a curse which had coated the entire limb in foul, corrupt mana. By using his own refined energy, Seol completely purged it. Dumbfounded, Logan demands to know who he really is. Seol simply replies that he is the man who will give him a reason to trust humanity once again. As dusk falls, Logan prepares a feast for his guest, serving the traditional food of his tribe. By now, Miller's stomach is growling fiercely. He reaches out to grab a bite, but Logan immediately snaps at him, declaring this meal is reserved exclusively for the one who cured him. Seol intercedes, telling Logan that Miller is one of his men and deserves a proper meal too. Reluctantly giving in, Logan tosses Miller what he deems appropriate for his station, causing Miller to grumble about the Birdman's blatant double standards. Logan bluntly shoots back that if he doesn't like it, he can go out into the woods and hunt his own prey. Meanwhile, Seol does the honors and happily digs into the banquet, eating with relaxed ease. Later, during a lull in the conversation, he asks Logan about his leg injury. According to official records, Logan was the one blamed for the incident that left him crippled. It happened on the exact same day he went to question the commander of the Phoenix Knights, Count Torcio. Seol wants to know what prompted that interrogation in the first place. Reflecting on the painful memory, Logan agrees to tell Seol everything that happened on the fateful day he lost everything. The very day he was promoted. He had just been named vice commander of the Night Order when the commander called him in for a private meeting. In his office, the Count treated him with bizarre kindness. It felt incredibly off, given that Torcio had always openly discriminated against beastkin, regardless of rank or merit. After pouring an opening drink, the Count made his move, just as Logan suspected. He laid out a deeply shocking proposal, which the Birdman flatly refused to accept on pure principle. As Logan turned to leave, the Count dropped a chilling warning. If he walked out that door, there would be no turning back. Logan dismissed the threat, reminding him that a Grand Commander of the Order ought to behave with honor. But he failed to notice the wizard lurking in the shadows behind him. A cowardly backstab targeted his left leg, leaving him completely paralyzed and unconscious. By the time he came to, he was staring at a hospital ceiling. It felt like a nightmare. But the grim reality was that his leg was permanently crippled, racked with an uncontrollable burning agony. Blinded by fury, he immediately went after the culprit behind the assault, Count Torcio. He managed to slash the commander's face, leaving a deep scar, but the overwhelming pain cut his vengeance short. Lowering his head in genuine humility, the Birdman thanks him. He thanks the protagonist for healing his leg and opening his eyes to the truth that it was a curse, not a regular injury. Now all he wants is to find the mastermind behind the spell and make them bleed. Seol tells him there's no need for an investigation, because he already knows exactly who is responsible. Miller and the Birdman look at him in absolute shock. When they press for details, Seol clarifies that while he doesn't know the low-level mage who cast the spell, he knows the mastermind pulling the strings. Back when he dealt with the assassin C's, the one sent to eliminate John, Seol had felt a strange energy resonance while subduing his soul. It was the exact same corrupt signature found inside Logan's crippled leg. Miller gasps as the pieces fall into place. This means the man behind everything is Duke Icarus. Logan freezes at the name, and when Seol notices his severe reactions, Logan explains that the treacherous proposal he rejected from Count Torcio directly involved Duke Icarus. When pressed for details, Logan reveals the horrific truth. They were plotting a coup. The plan was to overthrow King Tomalov and allow Duke Icarus to forge a brand new dynasty to rule the kingdom. Hearing this news, Saul can't help but feel a grim satisfaction. This intelligence proves the Duke has completely overstepped, walking straight into the trap prepared for him. Meanwhile, over at Duke Icarus's estate, Commander Torio arrives answering an urgent summons. When the Count asks what is happening, the Duke explains it concerns the new knight who just joined their ranks. Saul. The Duke tasks the Count with leading Saul out to a remote border district. Success in this mission, he promises, will guarantee Torio's promotion to a full Duke. Blinded by ambition, Count Torio eagerly swears to carry out the order flawlessly. The Duke smiles, completely thrilled that everything is perfectly set up. The trap for Count Saul is laid, and the remote destination will become his grave. Flash forward. With blood on his hands, Saul looks down calmly at a wounded beastkin bleeding at his feet, while a furious Commander Torio demands an explanation for his insubordination. To understand how we got here, we have to rewind to an hour earlier, when Saul first arrived at the military encampment. He was received directly by the regional commander, who bowed deeply to show his respect. Saul assured him there was no need for such rigid formalities, as he was simply fulfilling a prior arrangement. He apologized for his slight delay due to a personal matter, noting that he had sent the Phoenix Knights ahead to secure the area in his stead. Baron Vincent expressed his profound gratitude, emphasizing that the Knights' timely arrival was the only reason they survived the crisis. Saul accepted the praise but couldn't help but notice the Baron's lingering anxiety. He questioned why the man still looked so troubled if the danger had passed. The Baron admitted that while the Phoenix Knights had been invaluable during the assault, there was a dark, urgent matter the Count needed to know. Vincent asked if Saul, as vice commander, was truly aware of what went on inside the ranks of the Phoenix Knights. He revealed that brutal torture and physical abuse were running rampant within the order, all fueled by a horrific excuse: racial discrimination. Appalled by the news, Saul storms directly toward the Order's garrison. Marching straight into the subterranean dungeons, he catches a group of knights brutally torturing beastkin. It is a vile display of pure prejudice. The tormentors laugh and cheer, completely unchecked by Commander Torio, who stands by watching with approval. Enraged by the horrific sight, Saul grabs the nearest tormentor and hurls him across the room, smashing him against the stone wall. In the same breath, he gently lifts the bleeding beastkin off the cold floor. The room falls dead silent, both perpetrators and victims completely stunned by the sheer speed of this man. He just pulverized a squadron leader, all to protect a defenseless birdman. Saul looks at the victim, horrified by the brutal beating and the sheer volume of blood pooling on the floor. A sharp voice cuts through the tension. It's Commander Torio, barking at him for his insubordination and reminding him that he is merely a vice commander. Saul looks Torio dead in the eye, asking if they haven't caused enough suffering already, accusing them of crossing the line. Torio points to his own facial scars, snarling that these subhuman beasts crossed the line first when they permanently marked him. Commands Saul to hand the birdman back immediately, warning him that defiance. The corrupt guards threaten immediate execution for insubordination, but Count Blizzard holds their gaze unflinchingly, standing protectively over the beastman leader. He calmly challenges the garrison, stating that anyone who fancies their chances is welcome to draw steel, though he warns them to consider the fallout carefully, as a single wrong move will prompt him to expose the treasonous documents Count Torio and Duke Icarus have been hiding from the public. The threat leaves Count Torio entirely speechless, his mind racing as he wonders how on earth this man discovered the Duke's clandestine operations. Turning to leave, Saul throws one final warning over his shoulder, telling Torio to end the abuse of the beastkin immediately or face summary execution. Torio stands rooted to the spot, paralyzed with fear. He can't utter a single syllable in front of his troops. Carrying the broken birdman with utmost care, Saul notices the creature looking at him with deep confusion, unable to comprehend why a high-ranking officer would risk everything to help him. Saul softly explains that back in his original homeland, he too was once treated as an outcast. He was branded a barbarian, utterly rejected by society, a cruel isolation that ultimately cost him the life of the woman he loved most. That's why he swore never to stand by and watch it happen to someone else. Yet, Saul admits he's puzzled as to why the beastkin endure this torment quietly, considering their natural physical dominance. They could easily tear these corrupt guards to pieces. The birdman sighs, acknowledging that while they possess the power to kill, doing so would permanently destroy any chance of peaceful coexistence with humanity, reducing them to nothing but wild monsters in the eyes of the world. His words strike a deep chord in Saul, instantly reminding him of what Hwaryong used to tell him. He realizes there are causes far greater than personal cultivation, ideals for which he would gladly forsake ascension to the heavens and walk through fire. Making his choice, he formally pledges his backing to the Beastman commander. Logan bows in deep gratitude, murmuring that the dawn of true equality is finally within reach. A vision Saul silently shares, knowing it is precisely the just world his beloved Hwaryong would want. 2 nights later, the vanguard prepares to deploy into the high-risk zone. At the head of the battalion ride Commander Torio and Saul. Right behind them sits squadron leader Butler, who is still seething with rage after Saul publicly humiliated him in front of his subordinates. Just moments before departure, Butler had begged Torio for permission to execute the arrogant upstart. Torio simply chuckled, telling him there was no need to dirty their hands with his blood. He revealed that orders from high command dictated they lead Seal to a specific coordinate where the vice commander would meet a swift end. When Butler eagerly asked what awaited him there, Torio told him it wasn't his concern. The only thing that mattered was delivering Seal to the slaughter smoothly. As they march, Butler gloats internally, seeing they are approaching the drop zone. Yet, a nagging doubt lingers in his mind. Rumor has it that Seal is a legendary grand sword master. What kind of terrifying terror could possibly be hiding in these woods that is strong enough to claim his life? As the detachment cuts deeper into the oppressive forest, Seol's senses tingle. He detects an unsettling foreign aura creeping through the trees. Suddenly, Commander Torio signals a full halt. Blocking their path is a massive horde of monsters. The beasts bare their fangs. Torio turns to Seol with a fake smile, praising his renowned swordsmanship and suggesting he take the vanguard to demonstrate his prowess. Seol flatly refuses to move. This unexpected refusal panics Torio, who instantly worries at the scene right through the ambush. This exact location was carefully designated by Duke Icarus to serve as Seol's final resting place. Misinterpreting the hesitation as pure cowardice, Butler scoffs loudly. Drawing his massive weapons, he boasts that he will show him how a real warrior handles business, charging recklessly into the fray. He cuts through the beasts at blinding speed, tearing them to pieces. But just as he stops to relish his apparent triumph, one of the severed heads leaps from the dirt and bites down hard on his neck. To everyone's absolute horror, the scattered, dismembered limbs begin to twitch, sewing themselves back together seamlessly. The severed wounds close up instantly. These creatures are undead thralls. Torio watches in sheer panic, trying to comprehend the nightmare, while Butler's agonizing screams for help echo through the canopy. The soldiers attack desperately, but no matter how many times they chop the monsters down, they just keep getting back up. Over and over, the relentless dead arise. As Torio stands paralyzed by the realization, a beast lunges at his blind spot. Suddenly, a flash of frost cleaves the monster in two. Seal has stepped in. Glancing coldly at the commander, Seal remarks that Duke Icarus is a truly vile bastard, willing to sacrifice an entire regiment of knights just to take down his rival. The truth hits Torio like a physical blow. He finally realizes that he has been left to die in this cursed forest. To Duke Icarus, a high count and grand commander of the Phoenix Knights is just as disposable as the beastkin he so thoroughly enjoyed torturing. Overwhelmed by the terrifying reality, Count Torio frantically turns his horse around and flees the battlefield in a cowardly panic. Seol yells after him, frustrated to see his primary source of leverage against Icarus slipping away, but he cannot give chase right now. A terrifying, massive presence has just materialized behind his back, the vanguard commander of the undead army. Brimming with overwhelming power, the creature launches itself at our protagonist without wasting a single second. Meanwhile, on the other side of the chaotic skirmish, a healing elixir is hastily poured down Butler's throat as he struggles to sit up. He gasps out a thank you, assuming it's Torio who saved him, but when his vision clears, he finds himself staring into the eyes of the very birdman he had been brutally torturing just days prior. Bluntly informs him that Torio deserted them all to save his own skin, before telling Butler to get on his feet because they need to fight together to survive. Butler hesitates, utterly bewildered. He demands to know why the creature would waste his absolute last healing potion on a tormentor, especially when he is heavily bleeding himself. The Birdman simply shrugs and replies that there's no grand mystery to it. They are brothers in arms on a battlefield, and that is more than enough reason to keep each other alive. Stunned by the pure honor in the Birdman's words, Butler grips his weapons with renewed purpose. He throws himself into the melee, swearing an oath to survive this madness so he can spend the rest of his days paying back the life debt he owes to the beastkin. Nodding in appreciation, the Birdman joins him, and the two charge side by side into the incoming wave of monsters. Deep in the thicket, Seol continues his brutal duel with the undead commander. The monster is incredibly resilient. No matter how clean Seol's slashes are, the wounds knit back together in an endless loop. It feels like an exercise in futility, designed to drain the battalion's stamina until they succumb. Refusing to let the stalemate drag on, Seol lunges forward, severing the monster's arm and instantly channeling his profound ice magic into the bleeding stump. This triggers a massive breakthrough. The frozen flesh completely stops regenerating. Seol originally used ice just to slow them down, but he realizes extreme cold completely halts their curse. Frost is their ultimate weakness. As dawn breaks, a fresh detachment of knights rides frantically through the rough terrain, led by Baron Vincent. The previous night, he had received an ominous, desperate distress signal, describing an unkillable monster horde. Terrified for his benefactor's safety, the Baron pushes his steed past its absolute limits to deliver reinforcements. When they finally burst into the clearing, the scene leaves them utterly dumbfounded. The reinforcements who had nearly ridden their horses to death weren't needed at all. Spread across the entire battlefield, magnificent frozen statues of monsters decorate the landscape. A familiar, powerful voice cuts through the smoke, jokingly apologizing for the slight delay. It is Count Blizzard who calmly announces that his forces have successfully exterminated every rogue monster in the sector. Baron Vincent can't stop shaking as he stares at the master, not out of terror but from sheer unadulterated awe. The pure clinical devastation left across the battlefield would cement a terrifying new moniker for Seol across the continent: the Lord who freezes death. Historically, the Drake Kingdom maintained three legendary military institutions: the Premier Phoenix Knights, the Unbreakable Giant Knights, and the Elite Storm Knights. Upon slinking back to the capital, a desperate Torio calls an emergency meeting at his estate with the grand commanders of the other two orders. He plans to leverage Duke Icarus's horrific betrayal, the fact that the Duke sacrificed an entire Knight Order just to eliminate a single rival, to sway them to his side. Torio knows he must act fast to show the Duke he is still a highly valuable asset with considerable leverage. He starts the secret meeting by offering a tense apology for summoning them at such a scandalous hour. Commander Gordon of the Storm Knights simply waves it off, perfectly at ease with the late-night call. However, the Grand Commander of the Giant Knights, Baron Roberts, is cut from a different cloth. He demands to know the exact purpose of the meeting without wasting words. His cold demeanor doesn't faze Torio. Everyone in high society knows that Roberts is fiercely loyal to the crown. But Torio has prepared an offer specifically crafted to break the Baron's allegiance and pull him into Duke Icarus's camp. An offer he believes is impossible to refuse. Smiling politely, the Count brings up the dark rumors circulating through the capital streets. He casually discusses the tragic assassination of John in an unsettlingly cordial tone. While pouring the wine, Torio mocks house slave for blindly backing such an incompetent monarch, pointing out that their loyalty cost them their eldest son. He muses that such a tragedy could have been easily avoided had they aligned with Duke Icarus from the start. The blatant admission sends a chill through the room. Gordon shifts uncomfortably, whispering to Torio if it's truly wise to discuss treason so openly. Torio smoothly reassures him it's all under control. Roberts, however, is absolutely furious. He slams his glass down, demanding to know if this is an open threat. It's just that he's threatening to kill you if you do not obey Duke Icarus. With an air of innocence, Torio is sorry, saying he's never expressed such an idea. Although you have to speak the truth, what it poses is a complete threat towards the male. Soon a rebellion will break out, during which the royal family will be overthrown. Duke Icarus will claim the throne. Torio notes that Gordon, like himself, has already been guaranteed a lucrative seat in the new regime. All that remains is for Baron Roberts to make the smart choice and side with the victors. Torio adds that the Baron must already feel the shifting tides within the palace walls, as King Tomalov holds absolutely no real power left. Torio pauses, letting Roberts stew in the reality of the situation. Roberts wields immense influence over the younger generation of nobility. His defection to Duke Icarus would cause a domino effect, forcing the rest to fall in line and preventing a massive bloodbath. After a tense silence, Roberts speaks. Assuming the Baron's quiet meant compliance, Torio begins to congratulate him on making the wise choice. But with a deafening crash, Roberts shatters the heavy wooden table with his bare fist. He glares at Count Torio, roaring that contrary to his pathetic delusions, the crown still commands absolute authority. Especially while they're around, the Order of the Giant Knights, and your commanding officer. Without giving them time to respond, Robert is leaving the room, warning them to surrender before the dawn, which he'll take as a sign of goodwill, and then he'll speak for it, so that they may be spared their lives, and save his whole lineage. As Roberts disappears, Torio realizes his grand negotiation has utterly failed. Suddenly, a chilling laugh echoes from behind him. From the spilled wine pooling on the floor, a dark figure materializes, mocking the Count's pathetic attempt to score points with Duke Icarus. Gordon watches in utter shock as the proud Count Torio drops straight to his knees. Torio begs the figure for mercy. Gordon instantly recognizes her as the Dark Sorceress, the right and personal executioner of Duke Icarus. Torio desperately pleads for one more chance to redeem himself to the Duke. The sorceress tilts her head, purring that there is indeed one final service the Count can provide. He can die. With a blinding flash of dark magic, the sorceress incinerates both nobles instantly. She then activates a transmission stone to report the outcome to Duke Icarus, asking for forgiveness regarding the failure with Roberts and requesting new orders. Without a single second of hesitation, Duke Icarus commands her to assassinate Roberts immediately. Cutting the line, Icarus paces around his study, trying to run damage control. Nothing is going according to his meticulous design, and it's all because of Seol. Ever since that bastard showed up, every single plan has been derailed, making him a far bigger thorn in his side than the king himself. Looking on the bright side, Seol is the only real threat left in the entire kingdom, and since he is currently stationed far outside the capital, this is the absolute perfect window to launch the coup. Back at the camp, a brief, fragile peace settles over the troops. Gathered around the warmth of the campfires, quiet conversations drift through the night. While the men rest, an unbelievable sight unfolds. Squadron leader Butler is going around to every single beastkin soldier, bowing his head and begging for their forgiveness. He sincerely apologizes for the years of relentless harassment and discrimination, swearing to spend the rest of his days atoning for his sins. Seol watches the scene unfold with a quiet smile. He praises the Birdman for successfully bridging the gap between their peoples. The Beastkin smiles softly, noting that this is merely the first step. True integration will take time, requiring patience to build a lasting harmony rather than a fleeting truce. Hearing those profound words, Seol's mind immediately drifts back to Hwaryong. He finally understands what she had been trying to teach him all along. It was the reason she always favored negotiation over bloodshed, striving for a peace forged not by brutal force, but through mutual understanding between all parties involved. A peace that would have allowed her to grow old by Seol's side. Overwhelmed with emotion, Seol whispers a soft apology into the wind, begging his late love for forgiveness for taking so long to truly understand her heart. Suddenly, a sharp chime shatters his thoughts. His communication stone flares to life. On the other end, Stuart's urgent voice breaks through. Duke Icarus has officially launched his coup in the capital. Rewinding 4 hours earlier to the Giant Knight's headquarters, Roberts had gathered his entire force, briefing them on the treason committed by Torio and Gordon and preparing them for war. He had just issued orders to arrest the traitors at first light when the heavy echo of footsteps sounded behind him. Spinning around, he was shocked to see Torio and Gordon standing right inside his private office, having bypassed security with ease. To his horror, his own sword sat clear across the room. Desperate to buy time, Roberts tried to talk them down, but the two traitors were completely out of their minds. Their faces contorted into feral, monstrous masks as they lunged at him with unnatural strength, throwing him clean through the glass window and down to the courtyard below. Groaning as he pulled himself up from the debris, he realized he was completely surrounded by a shambling legion of the living dead. To his horror, his entire night order had already been slaughtered and reanimated. A dark figure slithered forward, expressing mild amusement that Roberts survived the initial attack by her new thralls. Roberts glared at the dark sorceress, identifying her instantly as the monster behind it all. Snatching a fallen blade, he charged her with a defiant roar, but several zombie knights stabbed him through the back before he could even get close. Coughing up blood, Roberts braced for death, but the sorceress laughed cruelly, telling him she wasn't done with him yet. Channeling her foul magic, she forcibly raised his fresh corpse, adding him to her undead legions. Back at the encampment, Seol's blood runs cold as he realizes Princess Achilde is in imminent danger. He prepares to fly out immediately, but Stuart urges him to halt, warning him that Duke Icarus's allied lords are mobilizing their provincial armies, preparing to converge on the capital en masse. If those reinforcements breach the city walls, the loyalists will be utterly crushed. Stuart notes that the Blizzard Knights are already marching to reinforce the capital, meaning the palace defense is handled. The critical mission right now is intercepting and crushing the rebel armies one by one before they can unite. Only Seol possesses the devastating power required for such a task. Cutting the transmission, Seol rallies his vanguard, announcing that Duke Icarus has committed high treason. He orders them to brace for an exhausting gauntlet, hunting down and completely obliterating every single rebel faction before they reach the city walls. With a piercing whistle, Seol calls down Lilith, his loyal ice wyvern, and prepares to take to the skies. He commands his ground forces to sweep through the local opposition with absolute speed so they can race to the capital to protect King Tomalov and Princess Achilde. Meanwhile, inside the besieged royal palace, the princess's transmission stone vibrates violently. Answering it frantically, she hears Seol's calm but grave voice informing her that Icarus has formally initiated the coup. He drops the devastating news that the Giant Knights have already been completely wiped out, warning her that a siege on the palace is imminent and that she must immediately secure the inner keep. The princess dashes through the stone corridors to alert her father. Seol reassures her that his Wyvern Knights are already en route to the capital and that his top elites, including Jerome, will arrive shortly to reinforce her. Terrified, she asks if Seol himself won't be joining them. He tells her that nothing would make him happier, but he must first intercept the incoming rebel reinforcements before they can sandwich the capital. The moment the provincial lords are neutralized, he promises to fly straight to her side. The princess gasps, horrified by the sheer scale of the war. Seol gently reassures her that a few scattered armies pose absolutely no threat to him. Cut to deep within the midnight forest where a massive snaking column of torches illuminates a Sybil battalion rushing toward the capital at a brutal forced march. When a weary soldier dares to complain about the pace, a vicious whip crack snaps through the air, sending him crashing into the dirt. Towering over him is Count Crancy, who had mobilized his private army the instant the coup was declared. He is obsessed with reaching the capital first to secure the highest favor from Duke Icarus, and he is absolutely enraged by his men's exhaustion delaying his glory. As Crancy barks at the knight to get up, a booming voice commands the entire army to halt. Looking up, Crancy freezes as Seol descends from the clouds on the back of his brilliant ice wyvern, blocking their path entirely. Seol casually demands their immediate, unconditional surrender, stating he has no time to waste. Crancy stares at the massive beast, sweating profusely. He knows his infantry would be slaughtered by a wyvern division, but then he notices something crucial. The night is dead silent. If a whole squadron were present, the sky would be roaring with the flapping of massive wings. A scout quickly confirms that there are no other enemies hiding in the canopy. The silence in the canopy is absolute. A scout drops from the trees, informing Count Crancy that their tracking units detect 0 hidden reinforcements in the sector. Smirking, the corrupt commander concludes that Count Blizzard is completely isolated. He steps forward with arrogant swagger, mocking Seal for his failed bluff, asserting that while they are indeed in a forest, Seal is hopelessly outnumbered. And even he is not able to face such a large army alone. The one who should surrender, it's the Viscount. Before they end their lives, the Viscount regrets the stubbornness of the Count, and it's thrown up in the air. To face them all, Count Crancy, seeing the free fall of Blizzard, he commands all his soldiers, catch him immediately. Securing the Duke's greatest political enemy would guarantee his promotion. But the moment Seal impacts the ground, a blinding shockwave of raw elemental energy detonates, shattering Crancy's delusions. When the vision clears, 3/4 of the advanced legion has been instantly transmuted into solid ice statues. Count Blizzard slowly draws his blade, warning the shivering survivors to drop their steel if they wish to live. That you must throw yourself on the floor and drop your weapons. The ones who stay standing, you'll be sewn to pieces by him. Most of the soldiers, they quickly throw their weapons to the ground, and they bow to the mighty. From the Viscount Blizzard, who was on the horse. You don't have this opportunity. And when Sheol moves his sword, the Count is utterly obliterated, leaving behind absolutely nothing but dust. With the leadership taken care of, Seal commands the remaining troops to stay put until the local garrison arrives to process their surrender. Trembling on the ground, the soldiers swear absolute obedience, promising to follow his orders to the letter. Leaping back onto Lilith, Seal takes off into the night sky, patching through to Stuart to report that Crancy's battalion has been neutralized. Stuart directs him toward the northwest, where another rebel force of roughly 1,000 troops is currently marching. When Stuart asks if he can handle it solo, Seal tells him it's not an issue, driven by the absolute necessity of getting back to protect the princess. Cut to Baran, the proud capital of the Drake Kingdom. The loyalist forces are fully mobilized on the battlements. Standard mages are stationed along the high walls under the command of Count Slave, their hands glowing with magic. In the grim distance, a massive, terrifying sea of undead thralls begins to emerge from the horizon. The sheer size of the horde is far beyond their worst nightmares. Fortunately, Seal had shared his crucial tactical discovery before departing. The undead are weak to absolute cold. Gathering their collective power, the mages conjure a massive glacial wall along the perimeter as the kingdom's first line of defense. Initially, the frost spells slow the monsters down, sparking a brief glimmer of hope among the defenders. But the hope is brutally shattered as the high-tier thralls smash right through the ice, scaling the battlements without mercy. In the rear, the sorceress watches with a sinister smile, while an undead giant shatters the main gate in a single devastating punch. The floodgates open, and the undead swarm the inner city like a plague. The sorceress walks through the ruins, delighted by her flawless victory. A bloody groan draws her attention. It's Count Slave, cradling the Stumpa's severed arm. Summoning his remaining strength, he glares at her, demanding to know how her monsters bypass the frost barrier when Seals easily crush them with ice. The sorceress chuckles condescendingly, explaining that while raw cold does hinder them, standard ice magic means nothing. The secret behind Seal's devastating power is his ultra-refined high-purity mana. Pure mana acts as a lethal poison to the dark arts, making Seal a terrifying anomaly. Count Blizzard's localized frost field is notoriously dense, making him a lethal variable. But since he is currently clear across the province, the outcome of this siege is practically written in stone. The undead hordes will flatten the capital. Watching the necrotic forces breach the perimeter, John despairs, devastated that he has utterly failed the Count without being able to mount a proper defense. The entire plaza gasps as a hooded figure steps out from the smoke. The sorceress freezes. Paris Seals has somehow flown back already. But when the hood is thrown back, it reveals a sharp, determined young woman. It is none other than Sabina, Seal's chief disciple. The sorceress scoffs, furious that a mere brat dares to stand in her way, yet she is deeply unsettled by the girl's mana signature. It possesses the exact same terrifying purity as Seal. Suddenly, desperate screeches echo through the streets as the undead forces are systematically torn apart. Sabina smiles coldly, explaining the situation. Pure, unadulterated mana is the one element necromancy can never hope to counter. She smugly informs the Dark Wizard that every single one of Count Blizzard's direct disciples has undergone the agonizing bone and tendon cleansing ritual, imbuing them with the Master's personal aura. To these kids, your legendary undead legion is nothing more than brittle trash waiting to be swept away. To dismantle this entire invasion, the Blizzard Knights don't even need the Master to lift a single finger. The supreme arrogance causes the Dark Sorceress to snap. She shrieks that crushing a few skeletal scouts doesn't mean they can survive her true power, frantically weaving a high-tier fire spell to incinerate the girl on the spot. She roars that she didn't become a master by relying solely on the dead, unleashing a devastating 6-ring spell, Hellfire. She unleashes a roaring torrent of flames directly at Sabina to incinerate her completely. But as the smoke clears, a new figure stands defiantly amidst the dying embers. He calmly tells Sabina to go assist the troops with the remaining thralls, arrogantly declaring that he will dismantle this himself. The newcomer introduces himself as the chief mage of the Blizzard Knights, Jerome. The magical duel that follows is absolutely cataclysmic. Spells collide with terrifying force as Jerome matches the sorceress blow for blow. Watching from the sidelines, Count Slave's jaw drops. The sorceress is a legendary six-ring archmage, a pinnacle of power that only 5 people in the entire history of the continent have ever achieved. No matter how brilliant Jerome is, he is facing a historical monster. The pure gap in experience quickly pushes Jerome to his absolute limit, and after taking a direct magical blast, he crashes to his knees, coughing up blood. Cackling with sadistic glee, the sorceress struts over, savoring his imminent demise. Standing over him, she mocks the self-proclaimed chief mage of the Blizzard Knights. She laughs at his foolishness for relying on basic magical artifacts to bridge the gap. Jerome wipes the blood from his mouth and smiles, admitting that a single artifact isn't enough, which is why he detonates 4 simultaneously. Overloading the devices to force a 5th ring amplification, he unleashes a blinding, destructive storm of lightning point blank against her. Yet to his horror, the archmage barely manages to withstand the lethal surge. Snarling, she strikes back with a devastating countercurse. Mocking his futile struggle, Jerome collapses onto the shattered pavement, battered and bleeding, while Count Slave watches in despair. Glancing across the square, the sorceress notices Seol's disciples are still slaughtering her army. She turns her back to go wipe out the disciples once and for all, but Jerome refuses to stay down. Harnessing his remaining mana into a rapid 4-ring spell, he fires a bolt directly at her back, shocking everyone. Spinning around in absolute irritation, the sorceress finds the stubborn mage standing on his feet once more. Deciding to grant his apparent death wish, the dark wizard prepares a lethal execution. Chanting a devastating 6-ring curse spell, Absolute Agony, he unleashes a wave of necrotic energy directly at the youth. The catastrophic payload hits Jerome dead on, its destructive output looking completely terminal. The surrounding knights scream out for Jerome, fearing the worst. But Jerome is already trapped in a semi-concussed state, his broken body moving entirely on muscle memory and sheer willpower. As his vision fades to black, his consciousness slips into deep introspection, wondering why on earth a regular, complaints-heavy guy like him is fighting a historic archmage. If he had just stayed safe in his bed, he wouldn't be bleeding to death right now. Suddenly, a clear vision flashes before his eyes. It is Seol looking at him with that characteristic calm smile. The memory takes him back to his office at the White Castle, where Seol had chuckled, calling him a man utterly incapable. He simply can't bring himself to turn away anyone in need, and even though he constantly grumbles under his breath about the crushing workload, he always executes his duties flawlessly. He's a genuine saint. Jerome mutters that he's just a naive, clumsy fool, but Count Blizzard chuckles, pointing out that if he were truly that simple-minded, he would have been swindled and discarded by political predators long ago, left entirely isolated. Instead, look around. He is surrounded by a loyal network of comrades who genuinely respect him, place absolute faith in his leadership, and will gladly bleed by his side through any crisis. The profound realization leaves Jerome completely stunned. It would go straight to his conscience when he says, "Mark my words well, recognize your true essence. It's what will guide you to the next level." Such an assertion unlocks the magician, and it takes it to the next level of sorcery. To the surprise of all who see it, the witch can't believe it, that someone as insignificant as Jerome breaks through to the legendary 6-ring realm right before her eyes. The magical clash reunites with cataclysmic power. Count Slave is completely speechless. This young man has achieved status of the continent's 6th archmage mid-combat. However, the playing field is still brutally uneven, though their raw output is matched. Jerome's body is still heavily lacerated and exhausted. If this becomes a war of attrition, the young archmage will undoubtedly fall. He desperately needs an unpredictable variable to tip the scales. Spells weave and detonate across the ruined square as the 2 titans trade blows, but Jerome is visibly flagging from blood loss. It's obvious he can't maintain this output for much longer. Suddenly, a faint rustle in the dark caught Count Slava's attention. He peers into the shadows, trying to spot the intruder. Jerome grits his teeth, channeling his final reserves to check a massive spell from the sorceress, who is already celebrating her inevitable victory. Just as she opens her mouth to mock him, a tiny, adorable creature hops out of the shadows right behind her, catching her off guard for a split second. By the time she snaps her focus back to Jerome, she completely misses the tiny creature undergoing a monstrous, terrifying transformation. The next second, a massive fist slams into her spine, sending her crashing through several stone buildings across the plaza. Standing proudly in her wake is Condol, the massive Yeti warrior. Jerome gasps, asking what he's doing so far from the north. Condol grunts, explaining that Seol had explicitly ordered him to tail the mages to the capital. Seol had anticipated that Jerome would push himself past his absolute breaking point to protect the citizens, leaving himself completely vulnerable to a lethal counterattack. His stamina spent, Jerome collapses onto his back, utterly awestruck by his lord's terrifying foresight in predicting the exact flow of the battle. Meanwhile, inside the heavily fortified inner sanctum of the royal palace, King Tomalov stands over a war map, coordinating his final defense lines. Princess Achilde stands beside him, relaying live updates from the transmission stone about the ongoing street battles. Suddenly, a joyous report filters through. The enemy archmage has been neutralized. The Dark Army's tactical commander has fallen, prompting cheers across the command room. King Tomalov breathes a sigh of relief, his absolute faith in Seal completely vindicated. When Seal had first pitched this insane strategy, the king was paralyzed with worry, but Seal had assured him this entire siege was the perfect trap to flush out the mastermind and permanently dismantle House Icarus. With the venom finally purged from the kingdom, the officers celebrate the historic victory, chanting Seol's name in deep reverence. King Tomalov swells with immense gratitude, silently vowing to reward our protagonist with his absolute heart's desire, the hand of his beautiful daughter, Achilde. But amidst the roaring cheers, a sudden, blinding arc of energy cleaves the heavy steel doors, and the elite guards standing before them, perfectly in two. As the bodies fall, Duke Icarus steps through the ruined doorway, drenched from head to toe in fresh blood. The room freezes in terror as the Duke looks at the king with a twisted grin. He scoffs, noting it's a pity the king isn't wearing the birthday ring he had personally gifted him. Tomalov stares in shock as Icarus holds up a matching band, explaining that besides its standard fourth ring defensive properties, the artifact features a hidden spatial synchronization anchor, allowing him to teleport directly to its location. Because the lazy monarch had left the ring locked deep inside a reinforced vault downstairs, Icarus had been forced to fight his way up to the command keep manually. He complains that hacking through every single royal guard along the corridors was an incredibly exhausting chore, leaving him rather winded. Snapping out of his shock, the king roars for his remaining elite inner guards to execute the traitor. On paper, a single rogue grandmaster shouldn't stand a chance against the absolute pinnacle of royal defense stationed in that room. But Icarus simply smirks, channeling mana into his demonic blade. A terrifying abyssal armor violently wraps around his body, horrifying everyone. Princess Achilde's eyes widen as she recognizes the exact same demonic mana signature that Justin had unleashed during his assassination attempt at the White Castle. She screams a warning to her father that the equipment is an unholy artifact. With a single blinding flash, Icarus liquefies the elite guards and drives his blade straight through King Tomalov's chest. Achilde screams, catching her collapsing, bleeding father in her arms. Icarus steps over the corpses, casually mentioning that while his foolish son Justin had begged him to spare her life so he could claim her, but only if we get to see the Blizzard Viscon. Falling into depression over his death, he's capable of ignoring it. Anything your son wishes. The princess sees her last moment has come, when the Duke raises his sword bing, announcing a headshot. At that moment, through the window, a wyvern of ice appears, and attacks the Duke. Leaping off the beast is Seol. He immediately drapes his traveling coat over the trembling princess, gently telling her that she's safe now because he is here. Having blown Icarus clear across the chamber into the stone brickwork, Seol completely takes control of the room, calming her racing heart. Checking the king's pulse, Seol determines that Tomalov's spark of life hasn't faded yet. By channeling his refined internal energy into the king's meridian network and combining it with the profound medical arts of the Tang clan, he can stabilize the mortal wound long enough for the royal surgeons to take over. He must maintain absolute concentration. He cannot afford a single distraction while performing the delicate energy transfusion. Behind his back, a blood-soaked gauntlet explodes out of the rubble as Icarus claws his way back up. Without breaking his focus, Seol barks an order into the room to handle the trash. As the Duke lunges forward in a mad frenzy, his strike is cleanly deflected by an unexpected savior. It is Miller, stepping out from the shadows just in time. In his mind's eye, the young assassin flashes back to the horrific nightmare that haunted his childhood. The final dinner, where his mother and father were viciously poisoned, and the choked, dying gasps of his older brother trying to whisper his final words. The horrific images of his slaughtered family have fueled his nightmares for years. Miller's sudden manifestation leaves Icarus completely unnerved, having assumed the youth was executed months ago by Count Blizzard. Recovering his composure, the Duke demands to know why Miller is pointing his steel at him, smoothly lying that they share a common enemy in Count Blizzard and should cooperate. But Miller is completely done with underhanded lies. He shoves the Duke back, barking at him to shut his mouth and drop the innocent act. He reveals he discovered the absolute truth long ago. Icarus himself was the mastermind who poisoned his entire lineage. Caught in the lie, the Duke's expression morphs into a sinister, arrogant smirk. He stabilizes his stance, ready to slaughter the boy, while Miller readies his twin blades to finally claim vengeance for his bloodline. A sudden wave of oppressive force slices through the chamber, forcing Achilde to duck behind Lilith for cover. As Miller parries a vicious lunge, he notices the Duke's blade vibrating wildly as it alters its form. Seol softly murmurs to the princess that this is the hallmark of a true peak expert. Sword aura. Terrified, Achilde whispers if Miller can truly survive a duel against a legendary Grand Master. Seol simply smiles, reassuring her there is absolutely nothing to worry about. because Miller has been personally forged in combat by Seal himself, enabling him to channel the profound celestial wind force to perfectly match the Duke's heavy strikes. Executing a dazzling flurry, Miller forcibly drives the mastermind backward. Icarus's eyes bulge with raw fury as he realizes this street rat is projecting his own refined sword aura, meaning a mere assassin has reached his exact realm. It is an absolute insult to his noble pride. Sparks fly as steel clashes against steel in a dizzying sequence. Seal watches the dance of blades, explaining to the princess that Miller possesses the fabled sovereign's martial physique, a miraculous blessing where a person is born purely to master the martial arts. He is a genius who can effortlessly replicate a complex technique after glancing at it just once. Miller's raw talent actually eclipses Seol's own youth. Despite his minimal training, he has already crossed into the advanced Grand Master stage. A fraudulent powerhouse like Icarus, who merely relies on external demonic shortcuts to artificially force his breakthrough, can never compare to true, refined mastery. On the battlefield, the Duke is quickly overwhelmed. Miller's assault is utterly relentless, culminating in a brilliant strike that shatters the demonic sword into pieces before a follow-up slash cleanly decapitates the tyrant. Duke Icarus falls dead, his dark ambition permanently extinguished. It is a brutal, straightforward end, but Miller has finally claimed his vengeance, bringing long-awaited peace to the souls of his family. At that exact moment, Seol withdraws his palms, having successfully completed the intricate energy treatment to stabilize the king. He instructs the attendants to safely relocate Tomilov to the medical wing so the surgeons can finish the physical stitches. Overcome with relief, the weeping princess flings herself into Seol's arms, thanking him from the bottom of her soul. As Seol pats her back, he glances over at Miller, asking for an immediate status report on the city's remaining rebel factions. But suddenly, entirely unnoticed by the celebrating group, the severed head of Duke Icarus on the floor twitches, its bloodshot eyes snapping wide open. With the king stabilized and the tyrant dead, the palace seemed secure. Achilde continues to pour her heart out in gratitude, but Seol is quietly panting, completely spent. He managed to finish the treatment right before his core ran entirely dry. Icarus's demise should have marked the end of the nightmare, but suddenly the severed head floats into the air, violently condensing an immense vortex of volatile mana. To their absolute horror, a manic Icarus declares that if the throne won't belong to him, he will reduce the entire realm to ash, wiping the Drake Kingdom off the map. Channeling his entire remaining life force, he begins to overload his mana core like a biological bomb, pulling in an apocalyptic amount of energy capable of vaporizing the entire capital. Seol lunges forward to suppress the countdown, but Icarus ignites a volatile fire elemental interference to counter Seol's ice attribute. Seol has reached the pinnacle of martial illumination, achieving a perfect harmony with heaven and earth, which normally makes elemental backlash an absolute rarity. But Seol has spent the last several days engaged in non-stop, high-intensity warfare, purging the undead, annihilating multiple rebel battalions single-handedly, and completely draining his reserves to mend the king's shredded meridians. No matter how peerless a master he is, his heavily depleted body cannot check the elemental clash. The violent clash triggers a catastrophic internal cultivation deviation. Blood sprays from his lips as his internal pathways rupture. Icarus laughs hysterically, delighted to see that even this monster has a breaking point, boasting that they will walk into hell together. Refusing to let the capital perish, Seol ignores the agonizing internal tearing. He vaults onto Lilith's back, snatches the floating, white-hot head, and commands the wyvern to shoot straight up into the stratosphere, racing to get as far from the ground as humanly possible. Below, the citizens and knights watch in absolute awe and terror as a streak of light arcs toward the clouds. Lilith flies higher and higher into the cold sky without slowing down. A profound sadness grips Seol's heart. He realizes this sacrifice means being violently torn away from his beloved Hwaryong yet again. Coexistence in this era seems permanently out of reach, yet a quiet hope remains inside him. The very existence of Achilde is living proof that reincarnation is real. If such a miracle exists, he vows that in his next life he will cross heaven and earth to find her again, regardless of lost memories or altered appearances. He trusts that her soul will guide him back to her side. Suddenly, a blinding apocalyptic explosion detonates, illuminating the entire stratosphere. From below, the populace witnesses the violent end of Duke Icarus's rebellion. 10 days later, King Tomilov successfully completes his treatment and sits up in bed. Achilde hadn't left his bedside for a single second. The moment the monarch resumes his official duties, he holds a grand court to lavishly reward everyone who held the line during the coup. The Blizzard Knights receive the highest commendations and titles for their peerless valor. Yet, despite the grand wealth and titles filling the halls, the mood remains deeply somber. Seol had miraculously survived the high-altitude detonation, but only because Lilith used her own body as a shield at the absolute last second, forcefully throwing him clear of the blast radius before she was vaporized. He fell to the earth alive but heavily battered. Seol can still recall the look of absolute devotion in the wyvern's eyes as she sacrificed herself to pay him back for giving her a home. He can only weep for his loyal companion, whispering apologies for the heavy price she paid to keep him breathing. Though he survived, the catastrophic cultivation deviation completely wrecked his internal pathways. He is left entirely crippled, lacking even the strength to stand or walk on his own. The kingdom remains intensely grateful, yet deeply devastated by the tragic price their savior paid. King Tomalov is equally heartbroken. He openly acknowledges that he owes his entire crown to Seal and reaffirms his desire to grant him his daughter's hand. However, given Seal's current vegetative state, reality is incredibly cruel. A royal succession cannot link with a permanently disabled consort. Meanwhile, a magnificent stone monument dedicated to Lilith is erected in the capital plaza. Flash forward, 1 year after the fall of Icarus, Princess Achilde stands quietly before the monument, staring into the horizon. She is still waiting. A year ago, the king had sat down with Seal, explaining with a heavy heart that given his current physical state, he could not officially sanction the royal marriage. Achilde had violently protested, weepingly loved Seal regardless of his broken body. The king had gently reasoned with her, stating that a prince consort of Drake must be able to perform public duties and lead from the front, a baseline requirement that Seal's ruined meridians permanently prevented. Hearing the unyielding political reality, the princess could only sob in absolute heartbreak. Summoning what little physical strength he had, Seal agreed with the king's assessment. However, he requested final favor in exchange for his historical service, a single year of grace. He promised that once the 12 months concluded, if he was still broken, he would withdraw his claim. But if he succeeded, he would personally walk into the throne room to claim his bride. To the medical officials, his words sounded like pure delusional stubbornness. Repairing ruptured meridians within a single year was medically impossible. Yet the king granted the request, secretly hoping the time would allow Seal to come to terms with reality. Achilde, however, knew better. She had seen the burning embers of determination in Seal's eyes, the exact same unyielding resolve that took him from a nameless foreigner to the absolute savior of the empire. That is why she waits with absolute patience, praying every dawn for a miracle. Suddenly, frantic footsteps break her thoughts. Her handmaiden dashes into the garden, panting heavily as she delivers devastating news. War has broken out along their northern border. The Hasten Kingdom, growing entirely weary of waiting for the voluntary return of Princess Daphne, has officially launched a massive invasion against the White Castle. Leading the massive vanguard is none other than Count Ainos, who has already breached the outer valley, determined to retrieve the princess by force. As the Hassan troops surge forward to storm the fortress gates, a towering wall of blue flame violently erupts, checking their advance. He stands firmly at the gates, ready to lay down his life to protect the castle and Daphne, who has resided there happily as an honored guest, not a prisoner. Hasten's high command stubbornly refuses to acknowledge her autonomy, branding the stay a kidnapping. Ainos glides forward, his armor frosting over as he coldly orders Jerome to hand over the princess. Jerome spits back that Daphne is a human being, not a piece of property to be traded away. The princess adamantly refuses to evacuate the White Castle. Gripping his hilt, Count Ainos warns Jerome that he will not issue a third warning to step aside. Even from the threshold, Jerome can feel the suffocating, crushing pressure of the Grandmaster's aura. An opponent prepared to level the entire courtyard, completely indifferent to the fact that his own vanguard troops are caught in the crossfire. Drawing his blade, Ainos unleashes a devastating spell, glacial tread instantly vaporizing everything in a straight line, killing friends and foes alike. Jerome stares in absolute horror at the sheer, cold-blooded ruthlessness. In a single casual strike, the entire vanguard is cleared, the ambient temperature dropping so violently it alters the local weather. In Jerome's entire life, only Seal had been capable of manipulating the elements on such a terrifying scale. It is a chilling realization. Ainos has successfully achieved the exact same stage of absolute martial illumination. Bracing for a lethal follow-up strike, Jerome is suddenly distracted as a desperate voice screams for a ceasefire. Looking up, he spots Daphne running down the steps, tears streaming down her face. She begs Ainos to stop the slaughter, promising that she will return to Hassan willingly and submit to the political marriage her brother arranged, so long as Jerome is spared. Ainos glances between them, instantly dictating the deep romantic bond. The feeling of the princess to this magician, and he refuses to stop the hostilities. His main target was the Viscount, but this insect has gotten in his way, for which he must pay for his audacity. I'm not going to let you go. He destroyed your order to the point of ruin, so the best way to pay him back, it's to end all that he is. Without a single second of hesitation, he executes a lethal decapitation strike aimed at Jerome's neck. But mid-swing, an immense, invisible force violently checks his blade, locking it dead in its tracks. Though the space before him is entirely vacant, Ainos feels the unmistakable tip of a invisible sword pressing against his throat. Sword manifestation. Ainos recoils in utter shock, unable to comprehend how a high-tier manifestation materialized, without a single sound or warning. Suddenly, a figure steps out from the falling snow behind him. Jerome gasps, feeling the familiar bone-chilling frost radiating through the courtyard. Yet beneath the absolute cold, a deep warmth floods his chest. Walking calmly through the blizzard on his own 2 feet is their long-awaited master, Seol. Ainos rubs his eyes in absolute disbelief. His intelligence network had explicitly guaranteed that the internal fire deviation had permanently gutted Seol's cultivation, rendering him a useless cripple. Seol smiles faintly, acknowledging that the reports were perfectly accurate. His internal pathways were indeed completely fried, destroying his ability to channel ki. Realizing his old cultivation was gone, he simply chose a different path to recovery. He abandoned martial arts entirely and began training in magic from absolute scratch, substituting ki with raw mana. He rebuilt his foundation step by step, defying an impossible success rate. In a miraculous twist, because his lower dantian was destroyed, the magic energy began pooling directly inside his heart instead. He notes that once you look past the semantics, the fundamental principles of magic in this world are identical to the grand laws of martial arts. By unifying the two concepts, his progression completely exploded, allowing him to effortlessly reclaim his lost power and transcend even his previous limits. Furious at the absurd explanation, Ainos unleashes a wild, desperate shockwave that sends Jerome and Daphne flying back, but Seol blurs through the air, catching them both safely. Ainos screams, demanding to know how anyone could achieve supreme martial illumination through mere spellcraft, branding it an absolute mathematical impossibility. Seol looks down at him with pity, replying that he hasn't merely reclaimed illumination, he has broken completely past it, stepping into the realm of samsara. To demonstrate, he manifests hundreds of ethereal swords in the sky. Ainos stares up, utterly paralyzed by the majestic display. Without giving him a single moment to recover, Seol calmly notes that he needs to wrap this up quickly. After all, his one-year deadline is up, and he has a very important wedding to attend in the capital. With a gentle flick of his fingers, the massive storm of swords descends upon the Count. In his final terrifying moments, Ainos struggles to comprehend how a human could possibly transcend into the realm of samsara. He had foolishly believed that his own illumination would be more than enough to claim his revenge, but the sheer, unfathomable gap in power turns his existence to dust in a single casual motion. Back at the royal palace, Princess Achilde stares out the window with heavy, tearful eyes. While the royal vanguard has been deployed to reinforce the north, she knows their cavalry can never make it in time to stop Ainos' slaughter. She clutches her chest, whispering Seol's name into the quiet night air. She calls his name out loud into the empty room, only to gasp as a familiar voice responds from the balcony. Turning around, she finds the Count himself lounging effortlessly against the window frame, wearing the exact same warm smile she has treasured for eternity. He softly apologizes for making her wait a whole year, but the princess tearfully shakes her head, telling him it was 4 years of long waiting. This surprises Seol, since that indicates the princess. He's remembered his whole past life, and Achilde assures you that it is. After having for some time little dreams of unknown places, the memories of Hwarg Jong, who used to live in the Central Plains, they started to surface in his mind. She realized she was the direct reincarnation of his true love, and that Seol had literally crossed dimensions and fought through hell just to find her again. Overwhelmed with profound emotion, Seol realizes a million words wouldn't suffice. Instead, he steps forward and pulls her into a tight, silent embrace. Shortly after, the grandest dream of Seol and Princess Achilde finally becomes a breathtaking reality. Surrounded by their loyal companions, mages and knights, the two are joined in holy matrimony. King Tomalov proudly hands his daughter over to Seol during a beautiful, magnificent palace ceremony. During the exchange of vows, Seol gently places the preserved ice flower necklace around Hwaryong's neck, the ultimate seal of a love that successfully conquered death, time and dimensions, marking the beautiful beginning of their eternal life together.